Welcome to Savage Harry. Today's adventure. What if Harry Potter inherited Slytherin Peverell and the Fay Bloodlines and became the Dark Crown? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Triwizard demand for inheritance test. The Goblet of Fire spat a fourth slip, and the noise in the Great Hall died like a candle pinched between two fingers. Harry watched the slip turn over once in midair and settle on the headmaster's open palm. He did not stand. He did not breathe more deeply than usual. He read his name from across the room as a man reads a sentence already passed, without surprise, and waited for the world to remember how to speak. It remembered with Dumbledore's voice. Harry Potter, whisper, scrape of bench, indrawn breath. Cedric Diggory's empty seat at the Hufflepuff table where Cedric had been a minute ago. The pale dome of Fleur de Lacquer's hair from the doorway to the side chamber. Karkaroff's gloved hand around the rim of a goblet that had stopped being interesting. Harry Potter, Dumbledore said again, and this time he was looking at Harry, not the slip. Harry stood. He did not look at Hermione, whose hand had fastened on his sleeve as though she had practiced for this moment without knowing it. He did not look at Ron, who had not moved at all. He set his hand briefly on Hermione's wrist twice in a private signal that meant later, not now, and lifted her fingers away. The Great Hall watched him do it. He walked. He did not hurry. He did not slow. The carpet under his shoes was the same carpet it had been 5 minutes earlier when nothing had happened to him, and he had not yet been required to become this person. He thought, with the part of his mind that was already doing arithmetic, that there were 3 ways this slip had gotten into the cup, and only one of them was interesting. The door to the side chamber was held open by a portrait whose subject pretended not to look. Inside, the warmth was different. Logs in a grate burned for the comfort of the foreign delegations, not for ceremony. Crumb stood by the wall like a vase whose flowers had been removed. Fleur was at the window, half-turned, alarmed in the way of a woman who has been promised a fair race and discovers a 4th horse. Cedric, nearest the fireplace, looked up with an expression Harry had not seen on him before and would remember. "Is there a message?" Fleur asked. "No," said Harry. The door opened behind him. Bagman came through it as though carrying a cake, beaming already reaching. Crouch followed, ash pale, his collar buttoned tight against the muscle in his jaw. McGonagall after him, Karkaroff, Madame Maxime who had to duck, Snape who had not been summoned, Dumbledore last who closed the door. "Harry," said Bagman, "well, my goodness, here's a thing, 4th champion, isn't it lovely?" "It isn't," Harry said. The room had been arranging itself to perform astonishment around him. He took the air out of the performance before it could inhale. He stood in the middle of the cleared rug with his hands at his sides and said the words quietly enough that everyone leaned the half-inch necessary to hear him, and that lean was the first thing he won that night. "I didn't enter my name. I didn't ask anyone to enter it. I would not have entered it if I had been asked. Whatever has happened here is a fraud committed against the tournament, against the school, and against me. I want the fraud investigated. I want it on the record that I refuse to compete by my own choice, and that I am compelled to compete only by whatever charm the goblet has just put on me. And I want my champion rights invoked before this conversation goes any further." Crouch's eyes lifted. They had not been on Harry until then. "His what?" Karkaroff said. "The champion rights clause," said Harry. "The tournament statute of 1612, section 6, subsection 3. He had not known it last week. He had read it 3 hours ago in the library looking for a way out and had found instead a way through. He had not been certain he would have the nerve to use it. The goblet had now made the question of nerve uninteresting. "My boy," Bagman began. "He's correct," Crouch said. The room turned to Crouch. Crouch did not look back at the room. He looked at the slip Dumbledore had laid on the desk, and at Harry in that order, and he said it again because he wanted no one to mishear. "He's correct. Section 6, subsection 3. A champion compelled to compete against his consent is entitled to a single act of honor restoration before the first task, to be performed at the champion's election from a defined list. The list is short, 3 entries. He may demand a public retraction from any party who has wronged him by his accusation under oath. He may demand a duel under formal proctorship, or he may demand a Gringotts inheritance audit, full ancestral disclosure, to certify his standing in the field of champion." "That last one," said Harry. Karkaroff laughed once, a single bark. He stopped when no one joined him. Madame Maxime's gaze had narrowed by a degree. Snape's had narrowed by 2. "Albus," said Karkaroff, "this is absurd. The boy is a 4th year. He cannot demand a Gringotts audit of his own bloodlines under any clause invented before the statute of secrecy. The bank does not perform that ritual on minors. It is illegal." "The bank performs it on champions," Crouch said. "And a champion's age is irrelevant under the tournament charter. He is a champion. The cup made him one. Whether he ought to be a champion is the question he is answering by the demand. You may not interrupt his exercise of the clause to argue the question the clause exists to resolve. He spoke in the dry, flat voice of a man reading a contract aloud to someone who has signed it without looking. Karkaroff's mouth shut. Dumbledore had not yet spoken. Harry felt the pressure of the headmaster's attention along the back of his shoulders like a hand placed carefully, considering its grip. He did not turn. Harry, Dumbledore said, there may be a less public way to manage this. A quieter route. I can take a copy of the slip to Gringotts myself. I can speak to the director. We have a long acquaintance, the director and I. Some of these old clauses, when invoked, carry consequences that what, Harry said, that a young man in a moment of distress might not wish to invite. Harry let 3 seconds pass before answering. He counted them as a person counts down a staircase in the dark. Sir, he said, I am being entered into a contest that has already killed children in earlier centuries, against my consent with no recourse, by a person or persons unknown, and you would like me to take a quieter route. The clause is the recourse. I am invoking it. I am not asking your permission. I am putting it on the record. Mr. Crouch has just confirmed that I have the standing to invoke it. The clause is magic binding. You can't talk me out of it because the clause does not let you talk me out of it. Dumbledore's hand had drifted to his beard. He stilled it. You read the statute today, he said. I read it tonight. It is rarely invoked. It will be invoked tonight. Harry, Dumbledore said, and now there was the small kindness in his voice that Harry had stopped trusting around his second year. There are some inheritances one may discover and wish one had not. The bank will not be gentle with you. Their auditors do not soften their findings. They will tell you what they find and they will leave you to live with it. That's fine. You are 14. I am a champion. There was a noise at the door, a portrait clearing its throat, which was its only available courtesy. Beyond it, the hall had begun to whisper in earnest. Someone had started a sob. Hermione, Harry thought, and would not have been Hermione if she had not. He pulled his attention back into the room. Mr. Crouch, he said, I want the demand made formal and sent tonight. I'll post to Director Ragnarok or whatever name is current. I would like the response received before breakfast. I would like, if it is possible under the clause, to be at Gringotts at the opening of the doors in the morning. I would like, please, to be granted whatever escort the ministry assigns to a champion in transit, since I have just made a great many people interested in stopping me. Crouch looked at him for a long second. He had not blinked. You speak as though you have rehearsed, he said. I have, sir, on the walk down the corridor. A muscle moved in Crouch's cheek that might in another face have been a smile. He did not let it become one. Mr. Bagman, he said, kindly take dictation. Mr. Karkaroff, your objection is logged and overruled. Madame Maxime the same. Headmaster, you will witness. Of course, said Dumbledore. Harry, Crouch said, repeat the demand. Harry repeated it slowly while Bagman scratched. The quill scratched in the silence as if the silence had grown teeth. When the demand was sealed, Crouch took up the parchment and tapped its corner against the desk 3 times as though squaring it, and the flash that ran along its edges was the claws biting down. Dumbledore did not stop the seal. He could not have. Harry had not been certain. He felt the relief in his ribs as the claws closed, and he did not let any of it move into his face. It is sent, Crouch said, and the owl that had been waiting on the lintel above the door turned its head, as though acknowledging an introduction. Crouch passed the parchment to Bagman, Bagman to the bird through a vent that someone had thoughtfully provided in the casement. The room exhaled in pieces around what had just happened. Karkaroff broke first. Albus, you are letting a 14-year-old child. I am letting nothing, Dumbledore said. He has acted under a clause that is older than my office, and that does not consult me. I will be at the bank in the morning to see what the bank says. I will be there too, said Madame Maxime. You will not, said Crouch. The audit is the champion's. The audit is private. You may attend the public reading of its result, which I expect Mr. Potter will permit, since he has not been shy of the public so far. He looked at Harry to confirm. I'll permit it, said Harry. Very good, champions, to your dormitories. The right of selection is concluded. Krum had not spoken. Krum did not speak now. He had been watching Harry through the whole of it with the careful attention of a duelist who has been told something is off and is recalibrating, and as he left, he inclined his head to Harry with a lift of the chin that was not friendliness and not hostility, but the acknowledgement of an unfamiliar piece on the board. Fleur passed him without looking. Cedric stopped. Harry, he said, I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I know. Then don't say sorry. Cedric, after a moment, nodded once and went out. He did not, Harry noticed, take with him the offended pride of a boy whose moment had been stolen. He took out something quieter. Harry thought he would remember the quietness, and he was right. In the corridor outside, Hermione found him before McGonagall did. She had clearly been ordered to wait inside the hall and had clearly not waited. Her face was wet. Her hand closed around his elbow and would not be removed by his tug. "Harry," she said. "Harry, what did you—" "Walk with me," he said, quietly, "up to the tower. I'll say it once." She walked with him. She did not say anything. He counted that as the highest courtesy she had ever extended him. Ron was at the portrait hole. Ron, who had not yet spoken to him since the slip. Ron looked at him, looked away, looked at him again. Harry watched the face arrange itself between a sentence already half formed in disbelief and a sentence not yet formed at all, and watched the second sentence win. "You didn't put your name in," Ron said. "Number, all right." "All right," said Harry. Ron held the portrait open. They went through. The common room had emptied early because of the feast and emptied further when they entered, the older students drifting up the staircases under the discipline of an unspoken rule about not crowding a boy who had just been made famous against his will. By the fire there were 3 armchairs, he told them. He told them about the claws. He told them about Crouch's confirmation, about the owl, about what would happen in the morning. He did not tell them what he had thought in the side chamber, which was that the slip had not been put into the goblet by a child's prank or a school's politics. Someone had bound a 14-year-old to a tournament that had killed older men, and had done so by craft sophisticated enough to deceive an artifact of judgment. That person wanted him in the maze for a reason that was not the maze. The audit was not, at heart, about a tournament. The audit was about what the person hunting him knew that Harry himself did not. He did not say any of that out loud. He said only the practical things and watched Hermione write them down on a piece of parchment she had pulled from a pocket without anyone noticing. By the time the fire began to die, she had a list. By the time the list was finished, he was tired in a way that felt structural, as though a beam in him had been replaced with a longer beam and the building had not yet learned its new shape. "Bed," Ron said. "In a minute," said Harry. Ron paused at the foot of the stair. He turned back. He looked at Harry across the dying fire as though looking at someone he was meeting for the first time, the unfamiliarity polite rather than hostile, and then he said, with the clearness of a boy choosing his sentence so that he would not have to choose another one later, "I'm sorry I waited as long as I did to ask." "You waited about a minute," said Harry. "I waited a minute too long." "You waited the right amount of time for a person to wait." "No," said Ron. "I waited the amount a person waits when he is jealous. I knew that the second I felt it. I am telling you so you don't have to wonder later whether I will do it again. I will not. Good night." He went up. Hermione, on the stair behind him, had not spoken. She did not speak now. She looked at Harry the way she had looked at him 3 or 4 times before in their acquaintance, in moments when she had been about to say a thing that her ordinary brain would have prevented her from saying, and that her ordinary brain prevented her from saying tonight as well. She climbed. Harry sat alone by the fire for another quarter hour. He watched the embers and did the arithmetic again. 3 ways the slip had been placed. 1. A student, possible, not interesting. No student in the school had the magical economy to subvert the cup. 2. A teacher, possible and frightening, the candidates few. 3. An outside party who had used a teacher as the conduit without the teacher's knowing or with the teacher's knowing. The third option was uglier and more interesting. The third option was the one he would investigate. He went to bed. He did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark and let his mind run the inventory of his own ignorance. The tournament charter of 1612 had not been written for tournaments. It had been written for the management of disputes that were too large to be heard in any single court of any single jurisdiction. The champion rights clause had been bolted onto its 3rd revision in 1689, after the Welsh Rebellion, to provide a route by which a peer pulled into a contest by some other peer's politics could exit the contest without disgracing his line. The clause had been used 11 times in 300 years. Of those 11 uses, 4 had resulted in a Gringotts audit. Of those 4 audits, 3 had produced disclosures that had altered the seating of the Wisengamot. He had read all of this in a drab volume in the back of the library that no one had borrowed since 1873, and he had not, when he read it, intended to use the clause. He had intended only to know what could be done. The goblet had then changed the question from could to must, and he had moved from one column of the page to the other in the span of a heartbeat. He thought very specifically about the fact that 3 of the 4 audits had altered the seating of the Wisengamot. He did not yet know what to make of the number. He thought about it until the owl came. At 3 in the morning the dormitory window showed a faint smear of light against the cold black of the lawn, an owl from the bank descending on the sill. He let it in. The parchment it carried bore the seal of Gringotts at the corner and a smaller, more private mark beneath it that Harry would only later be told was the personal sigil of the senior auditor, Ragnok, son of Bardock, 3rd of his name. The note was short. We have received the formal demand under the Tournament Charter of 1612, Section 6, Subsection 3. We accept the audit. Arrival at the doors of the bank at the 7th hour of morning. Bring nothing but yourself. The audit will be conducted in the Hall of 7 Stones with the appropriate witnesses. Reference your own blood and the blood of those who claim you. It was signed. Harry put the parchment in the box under his bed where he kept the things that mattered to him and that he did not wish other boys to handle. He did not put it under his pillow. He had stopped putting important things under his pillow at age 8. He lay back. The owl perched on his bedpost and would not be moved. He did not move it. He thought about the words, bring nothing but yourself. He thought about the words, those who claim you. He thought about the slip in Dumbledore's palm and the brief settling motion it had made in the air, as though pleased to have found him. In the morning he dressed in school clothes because he had no better. He went down to the hall. He ate. He did not look at the staff table to see what Dumbledore's expression was, because he did not yet wish his own expression to be tested against any other. The corridor down to the gates was lined by the time he reached it. Word had moved through the castle the way certain kinds of word move, faster than the mail, slower than the truth, dressed in whatever clothes the speaker had to hand. He walked through the corridor without acknowledging it. Hermione walked at his left elbow, Ron walked at his right. McGonagall walked behind them like a woman supervising a sentence. At the gates a coach was waiting that had been arranged by Crouch overnight. Beside the coach stood a witch in an Auror's coat who introduced herself as Tonks and whose hair was the color of nothing in particular until Harry looked at it, at which point it tried with hostility to be the color of his. Stop that, Harry said. It stopped. Tonks blinked. Sorry, she said. Habit, it's all right. Today is not a day for it. Today is not a day for it, she agreed. She held the coach door for him. Hermione climbed up. Ron climbed up. McGonagall did not. I will receive your report at the hall, McGonagall said. Mr. Potter, whatever the audit returns, you remain a student of this house and a child in my care. You will speak with me before you speak with the press. Yes, Professor, and Mr. Potter. He waited. Whatever you find, she said, I have known your mother and your father. I have known their parents. I have known the families they came out of. There is nothing on a parchment that will change which boy I have been teaching. The thing he wanted to say to that he did not know how to say. He nodded. He climbed. The coach moved. The gates closed. Road to Hogsmeade was empty at that hour and gray, and the sky over the lake had the color of old slate. Harry sat with his hands on his knees and watched the road come at him and could not, for the first time since the night before, entirely keep the anger from moving in his chest. He let it move. He did not let it onto his face. He thought with the precision that he was beginning to discover was his preferred shape of thought, that the anger was an asset if he treated it as one. He treated it as one. At the bend in the road, where the cliffs to the west opened into the gully, and the wind always cut at the side of a passenger, Skeeter was waiting. She had her quill out before the door opened. She had her hat on with the brim turned up to catch the light. She had positioned herself in the only patch of sun that morning could offer, and she had positioned a photographer beside her, and she had positioned 2 other reporters, smaller, hungrier, behind those 2, and she had positioned, somewhere off the road in a thicket where Harry could only just see it, a 3rd quill that twitched in the air with its own life. He saw all of that in the second the coach door swung open. He filed the 3rd quill silently and would, when there was time, deal with it. Mr. Potter, a word, number, Mr. Potter, number. Mr. Potter, the Daily Prophet has been informed that you have invoked an obscure and dangerous clause to demand a Gringotts audit on the morning after your selection. That's not a question, M.S. Skeeter, and I am not going to answer it. Mr. Potter, would you not like to defend yourself against the rumors? He stopped on the step of the coach. He looked down at her because the step put him above her, and he was not above many people that morning and intended to use the few inches he had been given. I am going to the bank to find out who I am, he said. When I know, I will tell anyone who I think has the right to know. The Daily Prophet does not have the right to know unless I give it the right. You may print that as direct speech. You may print this also. I have invoked the clause that I have invoked under the statute I have cited and under the testimony of Mr. Crouch. If you misreport it, I will sue your paper into a different language. Good morning. He stepped past her. He climbed into the coach. He did not slam the door. He pulled it closed with the same indifference one used with an umbrella. Tonks on the box snapped the reins. The coach lifted. Skeeter was still talking when they cleared the cliff. Behind, the 3rd quill in the thicket darted upward, alarmed at its own exposure, and was lost in the cloud. You threatened the Daily Prophet, Hermione said. It was not a complaint. I informed it, said Harry. Same thing, not quite. A complaint is a feeling, and informing is a position. A position carries a clause. They will respect the second more than the first. Hermione looked at him. She looked at him for longer than he was used to being looked at. She wrote something in the margin of her parchment that he did not ask to see. Ron, against the other window, watched the cloud peel back from the Welsh coast as they crossed the line of the hills and could not, this once, be drawn out of his quiet by any of it. "Harry," Ron said after a long time. "Yes, what are you going to do if the parchment says something bad?" "I am going to read it." "And then what?" "I do not know yet. I will know after I read it." Ron accepted that. It was, Harry thought, the first time Ron had ever accepted from him an answer that contained the words, "I do not know," without protest. He understood that this was because he had finally said it without performance. He noted the lesson. Outside, the coach broke through cloud cover and the morning sun fell across the floor of the carriage. It put a pale stripe along Harry's knee. He watched the stripe move as the coach turned. He did not allow himself yet to think about what would be said in the Hall of Seven Stones, because he did not yet know its words, and the words a person carried into a ritual changed what the ritual returned. He thought instead about Dumbledore's voice at the moment Dumbledore had said the clause is rarely invoked. There had been not quite a warning in it, there had been not quite an instruction. There had been the careful neutrality of a man who had decided, for reasons he had not shared, to let a 14-year-old walk to a bank whose auditors he had just said would not be gentle. The auditors would not be gentle. Harry did not require them to be gentle. He required only that they be accurate. He had time before they reached the Severn to do the rest of the arithmetic he had refused to do in the common room. The slip had named him in his own hand. He had not written it. Therefore someone had imitated his hand. The imitation had been good enough to fool the cup. The cup was an instrument of judgment, not of script. What fooled it was not the calligraphy but the binding behind the script. A name placed in the cup had to be placed with intent, and the intent had to be the person's own. Therefore someone had bound his intent to a parchment without his knowing. He had no memory of having signed anything unusual. He had been at Hogwarts the whole summer end and the whole term. The binding had to have been performed inside the castle, by a person inside the castle, on an object he had touched in the ordinary run of his day. He thought briefly about the things he had touched. He thought about the things that had been handed to him. He thought about the homework parchments handed back and the quills set on his desk and the token of a chocolate frog that had been offered to him by a fourth-year girl in a corridor he could not now place. None of these had been notable when they had happened. He filed them as a set and did not yet rank them. He thought about who had been near him at the moment any of these had occurred. He thought with a distasteful cold about Mad-Eye Moody. Moody had arrived at the start of term. Moody had taught defense. Moody had a face that was at once the wrong face for the man Harry had read about, and the right face for a teacher who had drunk too much for too long. Harry had not yet decided what to make of Moody. He filed Moody. He filed Snape. He filed Karkaroff, who had been at Hogwarts twice in the past month for ceremony, and whose hands had been on objects in the staff areas Harry could not now inventory. He filed Crouch, who had taken the audit demand without resistance, and whose taking of it had been, in retrospect, more eager than a ministry man's usually was. Crouch's eagerness was an interesting eagerness because it had moved through the room before any other reaction. Harry did not know what to make of it. He filed it. The carriage moved on. The clouds beneath them tore in the long, gentle way that clouds tore over the Channel approaches. Hermione had begun, on the back of her parchment, to write down what little she remembered of the tournament charter of 1612. She was writing it out by section. She had a child's handwriting that became adult when she was writing a thing that mattered. Harry watched her hand move and thought again that he would owe her a great deal before this was done. Ron, after a while, said, "Did you really threaten to sue the prophet into a different language?" "I really did." "What language?" "Whichever language they would prefer to apologize in." Ron laughed once, a very small laugh, and Harry was glad to hear it. The laugh was small because the morning was not the morning for it, but it was a laugh, and it was, after the night that had just happened, a thing that had cost Ron something to release into the air. Harry filed that too. They came down through cloud over a market town whose name no one in the carriage knew. They came down through the second layer of cloud over a stretch of fields tagged at the corners by the dark of beach windbreaks. They came down, finally, over a width of suburban roof that was so quiet at this hour it might have been the surface of a slow river, and Tonks took the carriage in a long sloping descent toward the Thames. "I should warn you about something," Tonks said, leaning her head down through the partition. Her hair was still its temporary mouse color. "Crouch sent ahead. The bank has the warding up. There'll be oars at the steps. There's a whole press cordon out 3 deep. They want to put you through the side door, but I told Crouch that side doors are for fugitives and you are not a fugitive, so they'll bring you up the front. Up the front means a walk, 20 yards from coach to door. You all right with that?" "Yes," said Harry. "You'll get questions shouted at you." "Yes, don't answer them, even if they say something that makes you angry, especially then." The prophet'll take the line of your reply and not the question, and they'll print only the reply. You give them a sentence, they own it. You give them silence, they own nothing. I know, Harry said. Course you do, said Tonks with a twitch of one eyebrow. Sorry you don't seem 14. I do not feel 14 this morning. No, she said, I don't expect you do. She withdrew her head. The coach took the last fold of cloud and came out over Charing Cross Road in slanting light. Below them, even at this hour, the pavements were knotted with people who should not, by any decent calendar, have been awake. The cordon Tonks had warned about was visible from 100 feet up, a black ring of aura robes around a brass paleness of brackets and rope, and outside the brackets a churning of color that was hats and scarves and quills. A photographer's flashbulb went off as the coach descended, and went off again and went off a third time, because that was the rhythm photographers fell into when they were nervous about missing the shot. The coach landed. The aura at the lead step came forward. Tonks dropped from the box. Hermione touched Harry's sleeve twice, the same signal he had used on her the night before in the same private order. He let his shoulders soften by a degree. The door opened. He stepped out. The noise that hit him was the noise of 100 mouths agreeing to shout at the same time without coordinating what to shout. He did not parse it. He walked. He kept his eyes on the bank's great brass doors. He kept his shoulders square. He had a phantom impression of his father, who had been to Gringotts hundreds of times in a life shorter than Harry's was now likely to be, and he carried the impression as far as it would carry. At the bank's threshold, the senior Auror lifted a gloved hand and the cordon parted, and the brass doors opened from within on no visible hinge, and Harry walked through. The hush inside was complete. Hermione stopped. Ron stopped. The Auror behind them stopped at the threshold. The door closed. In the gloom of the bank's great hall, at the foot of the longest counter, a single goblin stood waiting. He wore a chain of office. He was old, and his eyes did not glitter the way the eyes of younger goblins glittered. They were quiet. He inclined his head a finger's breadth. Mr. Potter, he said, I am Ragnok, son of Bardock, son of Rakkar, third of my name, senior auditor of this branch. The Hall of 7 Stones is prepared. Your demand is acknowledged. The audit will begin at my signal. Your companions may sit in the antechamber on your left. They may not enter the hall. They may not be told the contents of the audit until you choose to tell them. Understood, Harry said. Walk with me. Hermione and Ron behind him settled onto a bench that had been set out for them. Hermione had her parchment folded in her lap. She did not unfold it. Ron, for once, kept both hands in sight on his knees. Harry looked at them once, and they looked at him once, and they did not speak. He walked with Ragnok. The corridor sloped down, and the air cooled by a fraction at every step. The lamps on the walls were lit with a flame that was not quite fire. He did not ask what the flame was. He noticed it and walked on. Ragnok did not speak as they walked. Ragnok did not appear to consider speaking necessary. Harry liked him in a clean way before they reached the door. At the door of the Hall of 7 Stones, Ragnok paused. A warning, Mr. Potter. Yes, the Charter of 1612 binds me to perform the audit at the level you have demanded, full ancestral disclosure. I am not permitted under the clause to soften a finding. I am not permitted under the clause to omit a finding I judge to be private. I am not permitted under the clause to refuse a finding on the grounds that you are young. Whatever stands at the back of your blood, the parchment will say it. The parchment cannot be edited after the saying. Do you understand? I do. Then a second warning. He waited. I am bound also by the courtesy of my office, said Ragnok, which is older than the charter. I would say, were courtesy permitted to me, that what we are likely to find when I draw your blood this morning is a thing that some people in this bank have suspected for a long time and not pursued because no one has compelled us to pursue it. I have a file of paper that I have not opened in 20 years. I will open it after you have given your blood. I will read from it only what is required to confirm the parchment. I will not, on the grounds of my courtesy, read more. Do you understand? You're telling me you already know, Harry said. Ragnok regarded him. I am telling you, he said, that I have suspected. The bank does not know until the bank reads. The reading is the knowing. Yours will be the reading. He laid his hand on the door of the hall. The door, which was the height of 3 men, slid back into a slot in the wall without complaint. Walk in, Mr. Potter. Harry walked in. Behind him in the antechamber, Hermione had taken Ron's hand without comment, and Ron had taken hers, and neither was looking at the corridor that had swallowed Harry. Both were looking at the cold stone floor between their shoes, as though by inspection of the place where they could see, they might keep watch on the place where they could not. Harry did not see this. He had stopped looking back at 14, and would not, after this morning, resume the habit. The door of the Hall of 7 Stones closed behind him. He stood in a vault of low arched stone in which 7 slabs of 7 minerals had been set into the floor in a ring. Each slab bore a sigil. 6 of the sigils he half recognized. The seventh was a sigil he had never seen and would, by the end of the morning, never forget. He stood at the ring's center. Ragnock came to the edge of the ring and lifted, from a pedestal, the silver knife and the silver bowl and the parchment of 7 seals. Harry put out his hand. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. 3 bloodlines converge. Ragnock had taken 22 steps from the pedestal to the edge of the central ring. Harry had counted them because counting was a thing he was finding the use of. The goblin stopped at the boundary stone marked with a sigil Harry knew, the small inverted spire of the auditor's mark, and laid the silver knife flat across his palm. 3 drops, Ragnock said. No more. The parchment will read what is offered. If the offering exceeds the dose, the parchment reads the excess as challenge and produces a result calibrated for a different procedure. We are not today conducting a different procedure. 3 drops. The 3rd drop must touch the silver of the bowl, not the stone of the floor. Do you understand? I understand. Place your left hand over the bowl, palm down, fingers loose. Harry placed his hand. The bowl was cold to the air above it. Ragnock set the edge of the knife against the pad of Harry's thumb, and Harry, watching, was interested to find that he did not flinch when the cut came. He had expected to. The knife was sharp enough that the cut was already done by the time the pain registered, and the pain when it registered was small and clean and brief, a thing the body would forgive in an hour. 1. The first drop fell as a slow red bead and broke the silver. The bowl took the drop and rang once, a faint thin note like the sigh of a very small bell, which Ragnock appeared to expect. 2. The second drop took longer. Harry watched it form. The bowl rang again, this time at a different pitch, a half-step lower, and there was a moment in which the surface of the held liquid seemed to thicken, as though the bowl were considering what to do with what it had been given. 3. The 3rd drop did not fall. It hung at the edge of the wound for a count of 3, full and trembling, and then it released itself and went, and the bowl took it, and the bowl did not ring. It sang, not loudly, not impressively. It produced a small, soft chord, 3 notes layered, that held in the air for perhaps 4 seconds and then sank into the silver and was gone. Ragnock's eyes lifted to Harry's. He did not show surprise. He had not, Harry suspected, allowed himself surprise in 80 years. That is interesting, Ragnock said. What did it do? A bowl of audit rings once for the line found. A bowl of audit rings twice for the line found and a second collateral line found. A bowl of audit sings the chord of the houses when it has found 3 lines that converge in a single blood. I have heard it sing the chord of the houses twice in my career, Mr. Potter, and both times the audit produced a list of conferences that altered the seating of 3 benches of the Wizengamot. We will now perform the reading. Step back from the ring. Stand at the door. Do not touch the parchment until I instruct. Harry stepped back. Ragnock lifted the parchment of 7 seals from the pedestal and laid it across the silver bowl, and Harry watched the parchment darken at its center and feed itself, fiber by fiber, with the liquid that the bowl had taken from him. The parchment drank. It drank slowly as something drinks that has been thirsty since before the drinker was alive, and as the parchment drank, its surface, which had been blank, began to move with a faint movement that was the movement of text rising from beneath. There were 7 seals around the rim. The first cracked, the second cracked, the 3rd did not crack at all, and Ragnock inclined his head at this. The 3rd seal is the seal of a confirmed Hallows line, he said. It does not crack, it opens. There is a difference. I have not seen one open. We are seeing one open. The 3rd seal turned. It rotated of its own motion through a quarter circle and then opened the way a door opens that has not been opened in centuries, the small hinges of it making a noise that Harry felt in his back teeth. The seal lay open. The parchment below it cleared and the first writing appeared, and Ragnock read. Line 1, he said, Peverell. Harry had braced himself for the word. He had braced himself for the word the way a man braces for cold water, and the cold water was still cold. He kept his hands at his sides. Direct descent from Ignatius Peverell, Ragnock said. Ignatius to Ilanth to Henry to Fleamont to James to you. There is no break. The line has not been claimed by a lordship since the death of Henry Peverell in 1771, because Henry's only daughter married into the Potter line, and the Potter line did not press for recognition. The Peverell seat remained vacant on the Wizengamot floor for 223 years. Under the bank's rules, vacant seats may be claimed by the senior surviving heir at the moment of audit. You are, at this moment, the senior surviving heir of the Peverell line. Harry waited. The Peverell line carries an associated artifact set, Ragnock said. I will not today enumerate the set. I will note that the bank's record acknowledges custody of 3 items associated with Ignatius and his brothers, and I will note that custody on 2 of the 3 items has been disputed in the past century and is currently held by parties other than the bank. The audit acknowledges your right to the set without enumerating it. The acknowledgement is a matter of bookkeeping. The set's location is a matter that lies outside the bank's competence. Understood, Harry said. Ragnarok turned the parchment. The fourth seal cracked, the fifth cracked, the sixth, like the third, did not crack. It opened. Ragnarok was very still for a moment, too. He paused before he said it. He paused as a man pauses who has been brought in the course of a long and steady professional life to a sentence he has not previously had occasion to use. He did not hurry his pause. Line 2, Slytherin. The word sat in the room. Harry did not let it move into him. He waited. This is the part of the audit I have been suspecting for 20 years, Ragnarok said. The line has not been clean. It has been the subject of 3 contesting claims and 7 family negotiations across 9 generations. The bank's records have held the file as inconclusive since 1771, the same year your Peverell line went unclaimed. The 2 events are connected. You will see why. He laid his small hand on the parchment and read. In the year 1297, Cassandra Slytherin, daughter of Heraclitus Slytherin, the last male heir of the senior Slytherin line, married Ignatius Peverell of the Peverell line. The marriage produced 4 children. The eldest, a daughter, married into the Welsh Crys clan in 1322. The Crys Slytherin Peverell descent is documented in the parish records of Llanfair, Caerphilly and Pontypool, and is confirmed by the bank's 3rd register. The Slytherin line did not die in 1538 with the death of Tobias Slytherin, as the popular history holds. The Slytherin line in its senior form passed quietly through the Peverell name and the Crys name and emerged, by way of the Crys Peverell merger in 1456, in the Potter line. The popular history is wrong because the bank, until this morning, has had no compulsion to correct it. We have it now. Compulsion, Harry said. The Charter of 1612, said Ragnarok. Section 6, subsection 3. I am required this morning to publish what I have been carrying. I have carried it. Today I will publish it. The senior surviving heir of the Slytherin line, by direct continuous descent from Cassandra Slytherin and Ignatius Peverell, is at this moment you. Harry did not move. He let the sentence pass through the place behind his eyes that words like this had not previously been required to pass through. He felt the angle of the room change without the room itself changing. He kept his hands at his side. There is a complication, Ragnarok said, and Harry, against his preference, was glad to hear that there was a complication, because a complication was the first thing in the audit so far that resembled a piece of arithmetic he had any practice at. The complication is that another claim has been advanced on the Slytherin name in the present generation. The bank acknowledges the existence of the claim. The bank does not, until this morning, have a means of ranking the claim. We have one now. Voldemort's claim, said Harry. The bank does not name the claimant aloud in audit, Ragnarok said. The bank refers to the claim by file number. I will name the file. File 1149G, the claimant filed under the patronymic Gontriddle. The claim's documentation rests on a single chain of descent, from Salazar Slytherin to Cadmus Peverell, incorrectly as we now know, to the Gaunt family of Little Hangleton. The claim has been registered as pending since 1943 and has not been audited because no auditor has been compelled to audit it. The compulsion was, until this morning, lacking. And now, said Ragnarok, the audit has produced a parchment that reads the Slytherin line as direct from Cassandra and Ignatius through the Crys Peverell Potter chain. The Gaunt claim runs through Cadmus, not Salazar. Cadmus had no recorded marriage and no recorded issue. The Gaunt family's claim rests on a chain documented in 1611 by the Gaunt family's own steward, a chain the bank has been at liberty to disbelieve since the steward's deathbed retraction was filed with the bank in 1646 and ignored by the bank's own admission on grounds of prudence. We are no longer at liberty to ignore the retraction. The retraction is filed. The retraction stands. The Gaunt claim, considered in light of the retraction, is a junior half-blood collateral claim that runs through a forgery. Junior half-blood collateral claim that runs through a forgery, Harry repeated. That is the bank's term of art, and mine is the senior direct claim. Yours is the senior direct claim of 3 drops verified by parchment under audit, so Voldemort's claim is invalid. The bank does not name the claimant aloud, Ragnarok said again, with a small, precise patience that suggested he was very willing to repeat the rule and that the rule was not going to bend. But the bank acknowledges that the relative standing of the 2 claims weighed by the bank places the senior direct claim above the junior collateral. Yours is above his. The bank's view is filed. Wisengamot will rank the claims when the Wisengamot is convened. The bank's view is on this question deeply persuasive. 3 versus 1, said Harry. Ragnar's mouth moved in the small motion that was, for a goblin who had not allowed himself an expression in 80 years, the bare outline of a smile. 3 versus 1 is one of many ways to describe it, he said. He turned the parchment. The 7th seal had not yet opened. There is a third line, Ragnar said. The bowl sang the chord of 3. The parchment has accepted 2 so far. The third is the line that I have not, until this morning, expected. I do not say I had not suspected. I say I had not expected. The bank's records hold a folder marked with a sigil that I have not seen invoked in this office in 81 years. I will retrieve the folder. The audit will pause for the retrieval. The pause is procedural. Do not move from the door. He went slowly to a recess in the stone wall behind the pedestal. He pressed a sigil at the recess. The recess produced a small leather folder bound with a cord of silver wire. He carried the folder back. He laid the folder beside the silver bowl. He did not yet open it. 7th seal of the parchment of audit, he said, reads in the bank's ancient hand the third line of a blood when the third line has been present at the level of cosmic correspondence. The seal will not open by the audit's own motion. The seal opens when an auditor present can produce from the bank's own records a document corresponding to the third line. The seal is not produced by the audit alone. The audit is, in this respect, conservative. It will not name a line it cannot cross-reference. I am producing the cross-reference. He opened the folder. He looked at the page within. He did not, Harry noticed, read it. He looked at it as one looks at a thing one already knows, to confirm that the thing has remained the thing. He laid the open folder on the parchment. The 7th seal turned. Line 3, Ragnar said. Le Fay. He let the word settle on the air before he continued. The bank's record of the Le Fay line is filed in a sealed compartment that has not been opened since 1923. The compartment was sealed by my predecessor, Bardock son of Rakkar, on the order of the Goblin Council of that year, for the simple reason that the line was, by the Council's understanding, extinct. Morgan Le Fay died without recognized issue in the 8th century. The official line ended with her. Council's understanding has been the bank's understanding for 1300 years. The Council's understanding has been wrong. Harry waited. Morgan Le Fay's recognized issue is one matter. Her unrecognized issue is another. The folder I am holding contains the bank's quiet record of a bastard line carried out of Cornwall by a Welsh clan named Crys, which migrated from Avalon's mainland approaches in the year 911 to escape a feud with the local Christianized lordship. The Crys clan carried the bastard child of Morgan's daughter and her own steward, a child whose paternity was not recorded because no one of the time wished to record it, but whose maternity was incised on the breastbone of his mother by means of a binding ritual whose mark survives, in fragmentary form, on the Crys clan's silver. The bank acquired a piece of that silver in 1408 and has held it in the 3rd vault since. The silver, when placed beside the parchment of audit today, will confirm or deny the line. He produced from the folder a small silver disc. He laid it on the parchment. The disc settled. The parchment beneath it brightened. The disc, which had been dark, took on a quiet pale glow that ran along the edge of the metal in a pattern that resembled, if one looked closely, the shape of a woman's clavicle. The line is confirmed, Ragnar said. He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. The bowl on the pedestal, which had not made a sound since the cord, made now a quiet small noise like the slow exhale of an old man who has been holding his breath through a long and difficult sentence. The Crys clan, Ragnar went on, having carried the bastard line through 6 centuries, merged with the Peverell line by marriage in 1456. The merger is documented in the parish records of Pontypool. From that merger came, 4 generations later, the Potter family. The Potter family has carried the Le Fay bastard line for the past 500 years without being told it had. The bank holding the silver suspected. The bank, until this morning, was not compelled to publish. We are now compelled. We will publish. So all 3 converge in me. All 3 converge in you by direct, continuous senior descent. By the bank's own records, cross-referenced by the bank's own custody, audited by the bank's own ritual, confirmed by the bank's own silver. 3 lines, Slytherin, Peverell, Le Fay. There is no lordship in the British magical record that has held all 3. There has not in the bank's 1200 years of records ever been one. Harry sat down. He had not intended to sit. The room had a stool placed near the door, perhaps for this purpose, and his body, which had been standing, found the stool by means he did not entirely control. He sat. He pressed his hands together against his knees and did the small physical exercise of slowing his pulse that he had taught himself one summer at Privet Drive when there had been nothing else to teach himself. The pulse slowed. He thought again about Ragnar's earlier sentence, I have suspected. He thought about how a goblin auditor came to suspect over 20 years that a particular boy carried in his bloodstream 3 of the 4 most feared dark bloodlines in the history of magical Britain. He thought about who had told the goblin to look. He did not yet have an answer, but he had questions, and he filed them in order of urgency. "Mr. Potter," said Ragnock, "yes, there is a matter you will want to attend to. I am bound, having confirmed 3 lines, to produce 3 signet rings. The bank does not delay the production of signet rings. The rings are a matter of bookkeeping. The rings are also a matter of magic, and the magic does not, by old goblin custom, wait for the convenience of the heir's emotional schedule. The rings will be produced in the next several minutes. You will receive them or you will refuse them. If you refuse them, the lines remain as they are, but the seats remain unclaimed, and the bank's view, while filed, becomes a matter of public record without your participation. If you receive them, the seats are claimed at the moment the rings settle. The choice is yours. The clause does not compel you to accept. The clause does compel me to offer. I will receive them," Harry said. "Very good. What do they look like?" A small flicker moved at the corner of Ragnock's eye, which Harry took to be approval. He had not, since taking his seat on the stool, lost his interest in the operational detail of the world, and Ragnock, who had spent a long career watching people lose their interest in such details at much smaller news, registered the persistence of Harry's curiosity as a thing the bank could work with. The Peverell signet bears the 3 triangles of the Hallows in a circle. The Slytherin signet bears a serpent crowned, in the older form, not the form that has been borrowed by recent claimant. The Lefay signet bears a key that is not a key, a knot that is not a knot, a symbol whose form is not understood by the bank because the form was set by Morgan herself, and Morgan did not in her lifetime deign to explain it. We do not pretend to understand the symbol. We know that the symbol is the Lefay symbol because the silver disc you saw a moment ago bears the same incision. The bank produces the symbol as the bank found it, and when I put them on, they will not, by the bank's craft, be visible to those you do not wish to see them. By the bank's craft, when you have a use for the rings will produce themselves. When you do not, the rings will defer. You do not need to learn the craft, the rings will manage it for you. This is one of the courtesies the bank extends, in recognition of the fact that an heir of 3 lines in his 4th year of school cannot reasonably wear 3 rings in plain sight without disturbing the school's order. The bank's craft is therefore polite. "I see. You will choose at the Wizengamot session which rings to wear visibly. We recommend Lefay first, because Lefay carries the higher precedence under the old order. We recommend Slytherin second, in order to clarify the Wizengamot vote at the moment of the vote. We recommend Peverell last, because Peverell will produce the Hallows discussion that you may or may not wish to have on the floor of the session. The Hallows discussion, in our view, should be deferred to your private timetable. The bank's recommendation is offered without obligation. Do as you will. I'll take all 3 at the session," Harry said. "Visibly, all 3. I want the chamber to see what they're seeing." Ragnock inclined his head the smallest degree, as a chess teacher inclines his head when a pupil has produced, in the early game, a move that suggests the pupil may have, with practice, a future. Very well. A second goblin had arrived in the room without Harry noticing the arrival. The second goblin carried a small velvet tray. The tray held 3 rings. Harry stood. He crossed to the pedestal. He looked at the rings. The Peverell ring was simple, a circle of black metal with the 3 Hallows lines incised across a tiny disc. The Slytherin ring was heavier. Silver with the serpent crowned in old enamel, the eye a small fragment of green stone that Harry suspected but did not ask was a piece of the founder's own. The Lefay ring was the strangest. It was not silver. It was not gold. It was not any metal Harry recognized. It had the color of evening light on water at the end of a long summer day. It bore on its face the small incised mark Harry had now seen twice, the key that was not a key, the knot that was not a knot, and the mark, looked at, moved at the edges of its lines as though a small wind passed across the surface of the metal. He took the Peverell ring first. It settled on his right ring finger. There was no flash. The metal warmed by a degree. He took the Slytherin ring. It settled on his right middle finger. There was no flash. The metal sang one note that Harry felt in the small bone behind his ear, like a tuning fork held against the temple. He took the Lefay ring. He had not, when he put on the Lefay ring, expected what it did. It did not flash. It did not sing. It produced, behind his eyes, the brief flicker of a place he had never been, a stretch of pale water and a low shore and a high hill in mist, and on the hill a stone, and on the stone a woman's hand. The flicker was an instant. The flicker did not repeat. He did not know whether the flicker was a memory belonging to Morgan Le Fay or a piece of magic the ring carried as part of its routine introduction. He filed it without ranking it. Mr. Potter, said Ragnarok. Yes, you felt something. I did. Will you tell me what? Number. Very good. The second goblin took back the tray. Second goblin left the room. Ragnarok remained. I will, by your leave, prepare the Wisengamot petition, Ragnarok said. It will be ready by midday. The session will be requested for the day after tomorrow. There is by the clause no faster procedure available. The day after tomorrow is the soonest. We will provide the testimony. We will provide the silver disc, with your permission, as the bank's evidence of the third line. You will be required to be present. Your companions may attend the public reading. I'll be there, then the audit is concluded. He inclined his head the half-inch. He gathered the parchment, folded it once and then once again, sealed it with a small drop of green wax from a stick he had carried in a fold of his coat, and placed it in the leather folder. He carried the folder to the door of the hall. He paused at the door. Mr. Potter, yes, there is one thing I am bound to tell you that I have not yet told you. The bowl sang the chord of the houses. The chord has been sung twice in my career. Both previous times, the heir whose blood produced the chord was made the subject of an attempt on his life within the calendar week of the audit. Both heirs survived. I am noting this not as prophecy but as pattern. Be cautious in the next 7 days. Thank you, Mr. Potter. Yes, my personal courtesy, which is older than the charter, extends one further offer. If you wish at any point in the next 7 days the use of a Gringotts safe room, the bank will provide one. You may signal by sending an owl with the Peverell ring's impression. The bank will answer. Thank you. Go now, your companions are waiting. He went. In the antechamber the heir had not moved while he was gone. Hermione had not unfolded her parchment. Ron had not changed the position of his hands. They both looked up at the same moment, and Harry saw on their faces the practiced weight of people who had agreed, between themselves, not to ask the first question. It went well, Harry said. Walk with me, I'll tell you outside. He led them through the bank's great hall. The brass doors opened from within without a hand having touched them. Tonks was at the foot of the steps. She did not ask either. He thought with a small clear gratitude that he was already learning who in his life knew how to wait, and that the list was longer than he had expected. The press cordon had thickened. He walked through it the way one walked through a corridor of brambles, by not looking down. Skeeter shouted 3 questions, of which he ignored 3. 2 reporters whose names he did not know shouted 6, of which he ignored 6. A photographer at the cordon's end caught his face turning into the coach and would, the next morning, sell the photograph to the Daily Prophet for a sum that would let her buy a small house in Eastbourne. The picture would carry the headline Potter leaves bank with new eyes and would be in its way accurate. The coach lifted. Tonks set the heading for Hogwarts. Hermione waited 2 minutes. By account Harry could feel her doing in her own head before she spoke. Are you all right? I am all right. Did they found 3 lines, direct, continuous senior descent on all 3. I am, as of this hour, the senior heir of the Peverell line and the Slytherin line and the Fay line. There are signet rings. He held up his right hand. The rings were not, by the bank's craft, visible. He concentrated for a moment in the way Ragnarok had wordlessly demonstrated, and they appeared small, polite 3. Hermione made a noise that was not a word. Ron, against his thigh, made a fist of his right hand and opened it again, the way a boxer does to clear a cramp, and then he stopped doing that and he looked at the rings. Slytherin, he said. Yes. Fay. Yes. Bloody hell, Harry. It's all right. It is not all right. It is absolutely not all right, Hermione. It's all right, said Hermione, in the voice she used when she was about to surprise herself. Ron. Look at me, he is the same person. The parchment is a parchment. The bank is a bank. We do not yet know what changes. Harry, tell us what the bank said about him. Harry told her. He told her about file 1149G. He told her about the gaunt steward's deathbed retraction. He told her about the chain that ran through Cadmus, not Salazar, and about the absence of recorded issue, and about the bank's junior half-blood collateral claim that runs through a forgery. He used the bank's term of art because the bank had earned it. Ron, when he finished, leaned his forehead against the coach window and laughed once, dry and brief and without any pleasure. So he's been telling everyone for 50 years that he's the heir of Slytherin, and he isn't. He isn't, and you are. I am, and Lucius Malfoy is about to try and stop this in the Wisengamot, probably, and he's going to fail, probably. Hermione had unfolded her parchment. She had begun to write on it fast, the small adult handwriting that she produced when she was writing things that mattered. She did not say what she was writing. Harry did not ask. There's one thing, Harry said. Yes, said Hermione without looking up. The bowl sang a chord. The auditor said that's the parchment's way of registering 3 lines in convergence. He said the chord has been sung twice in his career. He said both heirs were the subject of attempts on their lives within 7 days of the audit. He said both survived. He said this is not prophecy. He said it is pattern. Hermione's quill stopped. Both survived, she said. Both survived. All right, all right. And he said the bank offers a safe room. Are you going to take it? Not yet. I want the Wisengamot session first. I want it on the floor before anyone has a chance to attempt anything. The session is the day after tomorrow. That is the soonest the clause permits. 2 nights, Hermione said. 2 nights, all right. Ron had not moved his forehead from the window. Harry, yes, what did the Lefay ring do when you put it on? Harry looked at him. He had not, against his policy of disclosure, intended to tell anyone in the coach about the flicker. He found, looking at Ron, that the policy was not going to hold against Ron's question, and he did not want it to. There were going to be people in his life from whom he kept things by the necessity of his position, and there were going to be people from whom he did not, by his preference, keep them. He chose the preference. It showed me a place, he said. A lake, a shore, a hill in mist, a stone on the hill, a woman's hand on the stone. The flicker was an instant. I do not know what it was. Avalon, Hermione said. He looked at her. It's described in a small way in 3 of the old French romances, she said, and more carefully in the Welsh material. I read the Welsh material in 2nd year. It described a small lake and a low shore and a high hill in mist and a stone. I will look it up tonight in the library. If it is the place, it is the place where Morgan Le Fay was buried. The bank's silver disc you mentioned, it was incised with her clavicle. Yes, the clavicle is the mark of her tomb binding. The Welsh material says she set the binding so that her line, if it ever woke, would find her. The flicker the ring showed you may be the binding waking up. The flicker may be, Harry. The flicker may be an invitation. He did not speak for a moment. He let her thought sit. Hermione, he said. Yes, you said 3 of the old French romances. Yes, how many old French romances did you read? All of them, she said. In 2nd year, the term you and Ron were not speaking to me because I told you to stop bewitching the suit of armor in the 3rd floor corridor. I did stop bewitching the suit of armor, eventually. I thank you for the 2nd year you spent reading old French romances. I will collect the thanks later, she said. Tell me what else the bank said. He told her the rest. He told her about Lucius's coming protest, anticipated by the bank with the resigned exactitude of an auditor who had seen many protests fail. He told her about the 7th seal. He told her about the Le Fay seat being an extinct seat that the Wisengamot, on the bank's evidence, could reawaken under the magical creature reawakening clause, the same clause that had been used in 1873 to restore the Banshee seat. He told her about the crown because Ragnarok had mentioned the crown in passing, in a sentence Harry had at the time barely registered and now, with his eyes closed against the coach window, began to remember. The crown, Hermione said. Yes. He used the word crown. He used the words crown of magical Britain. He said it in the context of the Le Fay seat. He said the Le Fay seat carries an artifact called the crown of magical Britain. He said the artifact is thought lost. He said the bank does not have it. Of course the bank doesn't have it. Why? Because Morgan would not have left it to the bank. She would have left it to her tomb. The Welsh material says she sealed the crown in her tomb at Avalon and bound the seal so that only her line could break it. She did this, they say, because she did not trust the British wizards to keep the crown out of bad hands. She had reasonable concerns, Harry said. She did. Ron had taken his head off the window. He looked between them the way a man looks between 2 players in a game whose rules he is being asked in real time to learn. Wait, he said. Yes, said Hermione. Are you telling me, he said slowly, the way a man speaks who is trying not to be the person who first said the sentence out loud, that on top of 3 signet rings and a Wisengamot session and a press cordon and a Dark Lord with a forged claim, there is a crown of magical Britain that Harry is now legally entitled to recover from a tomb on an island in the mist? Yes, said Hermione. All right, said Ron. All right, said Harry. Ron put his head back against the window. He closed his eyes, he said with the slow, patient cadence of a man addressing a higher authority on whom he had previously not relied. Mum is going to kill me when she finds out I helped him with this. You haven't helped me with it yet, Harry said. I am about to, said Ron. The coach turned over the Severn. The cloud went pink at the high edge. Tonks called something down through the partition that Harry did not catch and did not need to. Hermione had begun to make a list on the back of her parchment, a list with 3 columns of which Harry could read. At the angle the parchment lay only the headings: Session, Crown, Voldemort. She was, he noticed, writing the 3rd heading without flinching at the spelling, which she had not in the past done. He filed the change. He thought, while the coach moved over the rest of the country toward Hogwarts, about the chord the bowl had sung. He thought about the 2 previous attempts on the heirs' lives. He thought about the 2 previous survivors. He thought with the small precision that he was now consciously cultivating because the world had begun to reward it, that he did not know, yet, whether he would be the 3rd survivor or the 3rd pattern, and that the next 2 nights would tell him. He stopped thinking when the coach descended through the cloud over Hogsmeade. He was, when the coach landed, what he had not been when it had taken off, and he did not pretend, even to himself, that he was not. The morning after the audit, before the Wisengamot session, Harry sat in the library with Hermione and Ron, and 3 books opened between them on the long table. The books were the books Hermione had pulled from the restricted section on a hall pass Dumbledore had quietly arranged, which she had taken at 6 o'clock, and which she did not, by her face, intend to surrender before noon. The first book was a small Welsh grammar with a section on the Crys clan's binding runes. Second book was a thick volume on the history of the Wisengamot seating, in which the Lefay seat received 4 lines and a footnote. The third book was the small volume on the tournament charter that Harry had read in the library 2 nights earlier and had not, by his packing, taken to London. Hermione had pulled it because she had wanted to read the section on champion rights for herself. "There is a 4th book," she said, "the bank's official record of audits since 1612. It is not, by the librarian's confession, available to students. I have, however, requested it from the bank by owl this morning. The bank may or may not send it. Bank sends it, we will have the 4. If the bank does not send it, we will have the 3. What will the 4th tell us? The 4th will tell us how many of the audits since 1612 have produced a bowl cord." Ragnarok said 2. "The 4th, by my hope, will confirm the 2. The 4th will, by my hope, name them. The naming, by my hope, will give us a sense of what to expect in the next week." "All right, Harry." "Yes." Ragnarok said the chord has been sung twice in his career. He did not say how long his career has been. He has been at the bank since at least the year my parents went to it for their inheritance. He recognized my father's name without checking the file. He has been at the bank by that estimate at least 25 years, probably longer. 25 years is one career. Goblins by the bank's records live to their 180th in their senior positions. Ragnarok's career, by his own use of the word, may be the whole of it. The 2 chord singings may, by my reading, be one in his first decade and one in his 15th. They may also, by my reading, be very recent. I would prefer to know. You would prefer to know, I would prefer to know. She wrote a note on the parchment beside her hand. Ron, who had been reading the Welsh grammar without reading it, set the book down. "Hermione, yes, you're enjoying this. I am not enjoying this. You are enjoying the research." "I am enjoying the research. The research is a thing I can do. The other things, the Wisengamot, the crown, the press, I cannot do those. Harry can do those. I cannot do those. I can do this. I am, by the doing of this, contributing. Yes, I am enjoying it. I do not, by my position, apologize." "All right, Ron, yes, you are also contributing. I am sitting on a chair in a library." "You are sitting on a chair in a library at a table where Harry has chosen to sit. You are, by your sitting, the person who is at the table when Harry returns from the page he is reading. You are the person who at 6 o'clock tonight will tell him to eat. You are the person who, when the press gather at the gates tomorrow morning, will walk to his right and not to his left, because his right is the side his one hand is on, and his right needs the friend who can put a shield up at the speed or exam candidates put shields up. You have been practicing the shield since last Easter. I have watched you practice. You have not told Harry. I am telling him now. He needs to know. I have been practicing the shield since last Easter. You have, you will, tomorrow morning, put it up faster than I will be able to put any spell up. You will keep Harry's right side clean of any reporter who attempts to touch him. You will not have to fire a hex. You will only have to stand. The standing is the contribution. The standing is the part of the work I cannot, by my body, do." All right, said Hermione. Harry, who had been reading the Welsh grammar section on the Crys binding runes, looked up. "Ron, yes, you have been practicing the shield since last Easter. Yes, you did not tell me. Number why?" "Because I did not know whether I would, in any of the months between Easter and now, find a use for it. I did not, by my plan, intend to find a use for it. I intended to be a person who could, if the use came, be a person who had been ready. I did not in my plan want to make a thing of it. I have in the past made things of small preparations. The making of things has not, by my reading of my own life, served me. I wanted to do this one without making a thing of it. I am sorry I did not tell you. I am telling you now." "You're not sorry," Harry said. "I am not sorry. I should be. I am not. Don't be. I won't." Harry returned to the Welsh grammar. He did not, by his face, allow himself to react to the second piece of late evidence Ron had produced in 2 days that Ron had been, in his quiet way, a different person than the person Harry had been carrying in his head. He filed Ron's standing as a small adjustment to his own old arithmetic. He would, in a week or 2, recalibrate the rest of his old arithmetic about Ron. He would do it slowly. He would do it accurately. He would, in the recalibration, find that the new Ron had been there all along, and that Harry had simply not been, in the past 3 years, the kind of person who had been looking. He read the section on CRY's binding runes. The section was brief. It said that the CRY's clan had carried in their silver 3 binding runes that between them named the line. The first rune was the mark of maternity, used to incise a mother's identity on her child's collarbone. The second rune was the mark of migration, used to record the place from which the clan had come and the place to which the clan was going. The third rune was the mark of inheritance, used to encode the line's claim to a senior lordship that the line had been carrying without recognition. The bank's silver disc, by Ragnar's testimony, had borne the mark of maternity at the moment of the audit. The disc had not, by his recollection, been examined for the other 2. Harry made a note on the parchment beside Hermione's note. He would, when he was next at the bank, ask Ragnar to examine the disc for the other 2. He suspected by his reading of the small book at his hand that the other 2 were also there. He would find out. By 11 the bank's reply had arrived. The reply was a small parchment with a note from Ragnar that said only, the audits of 1701 and of 1873. The note was, by Ragnar's manner, the briefest possible. It said only that the chord had been sung at those 2 audits. It did not name the heirs. The bank's discretion on the heirs had been preserved. Hermione looked up at the note. She looked at the volume on the Wisengamot seating. She turned to the audit year. 1701 is the Crouch audit. The Crouch line in 1701 produced a chord and was, by the audit, recognized as senior heir of 3 convergent lines. The lines, Hermione, the lines are not named in the standard text. The standard text does not name them. The bank's discretion was, in 1701, preserved as it is now. We do not know what the 3 lines were. We know only that the audit altered the chamber's seating. The 1701 Crouch seat is, by my reading, the seat that the Crouch family has held ever since. The seat is, by the modern record, a Crouch seat. It was, in 1701, a seat of 3 names. The bank's discretion has, by long practice, kept the 3 names out of the modern record. In 1873 is the Black Banshee audit. The black line in 1873 produced a chord. The Banshee seat, which had been extinct, was reawakened by the magical creature reawakening clause, the same clause that 2 days ago reawakened your Lefay seat. The black line was, in 1873, recognized as the senior heir of 3 lines, of which one was a Banshee line. The seat was reawakened. The Black family has held the seat since. Sirius is the senior of the Black family in the present generation. Sirius, by the bank's records, holds the Banshee seat. Sirius has not, by his old practice, attended the Wisengamot in 15 years. The seat is, in his absence, held vacant by his proxy, who is Harry, who is Arcturus Black, his grey tuncle, who is at this hour in a hospital in Marseille, recovering from an old binding curse that he picked up in 1962. The seat is, in effect, dormant. Sirius's senior heirship has not been pressed by the family because the family does not, this generation, wish to draw attention to the line. Sirius will be amused. Sirius will be amused. We will in the next several days tell him tonight perhaps he is at Lupin's. He will be at Lupin's by dinner. We will by flu tell him. All right, she wrote a 3rd note. She folded the parchment. She set it aside. She looked at the 2 of them. We are ready, she said. For what? For the session. The session is tomorrow. We have by the night what we need. We know the procedural ground Lucius will try. We know Bones is precedent. We know the bank's testimony. We know the clause's terms. We know the line by line of all 3 audits. We are as ready as we are going to be. All right, Harry. Yes, tomorrow. You will be the first heir, by the bank's records since 1612, to be recognized at the chamber as the senior of 3 convergent lines without the senior of the chamber attempting to intervene against the recognition. The 1701 and 1873 recognitions were both contested. Both went the same way as ours will, but both were contested. The chief warlock of the day, in both cases, sided against the heir on procedural grounds and was, in both cases, overruled by the chamber's vote. The chamber's vote in both cases was thin. The chamber's vote tomorrow will not be thin. Dumbledore will, by my reading of his arithmetic, not contest. He may, by my reading, even speak in the heir's favor. The chamber, when the chief warlock and the bank both endorse a thing, votes the thing through by a wide margin. The wide margin is, in your case, a thing we want. The wide margin will make the crown's placement the next day defensible on the floor of the chamber. The defensibility is what we have been arranging for. Defensibility. Yes, Hermione, yes. You have been doing the arithmetic too. I have been doing the arithmetic in writing. You have been doing it in your head. The 2 arithmetics, by the way you have been describing yours to me, are mostly the same. Mostly, you have left out in your head the small variable that I have included in my writing, which is which is that the chamber after the wide margin vote will not be the chamber that came in. The chamber will be a chamber that has, by its own vote, recognized a 14-year-old as the senior heir of 3 convergent lines, and will, by its own arithmetic, be looking at you, for the rest of your minority, the way the chamber has not, in 300 years, looked at any boy. The looking will be a thing you will live with. The looking will not, by my reading, be hostile. The looking will, by my reading, be expectant. The chamber will, on the days you attend its sittings, expect you to do at every sitting something. The something will, in the chamber's expectation, be a thing the chamber has not in the past seen done. The expectation will become in your 5th and 6th and 7th years a small pressure. The pressure will not be one you have asked for. The pressure will, by my reading, be one you will have. You are warning me. I am informing you. All right, all right. She folded the parchment. She closed the book. She placed her hand, palm down, on the table. He laid his hand, palm down, on hers. The library around them was quiet in the way that libraries were quiet on mornings before sessions. Ron, in the chair across the table, did not interrupt. He had in the past day learned not to interrupt when Hermione's hand was, palm down, beside Harry's. He let them sit. He sat with them. At 12 they went to lunch. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Slytherin, Peverell, Fay, 3 seats. The Wizengamot was convened on the morning the bank's clause permitted, 2 days after the audit, in the great circular chamber that Harry had only read about in books and had pictured smaller. The chamber was a half bowl of green marble. The benches rose in 3 tiers. Each bench bore a brass plate naming the seat, and in smaller incised letters, the family that had last held it. The Peverell brass plate had not been polished in 223 years. The Slytherin brass plate had been polished badly in 1943. The Fay brass plate was set in a recess so deep in the 3rd tier that the recess had been used for the last 6 centuries to store coats. Harry walked to the floor. He wore his school robe because the bank's craft made any robe sufficient for any chamber, and his school robe was what he had. His right hand carried, visible to all, the 3 signet rings. He set his hand on the rail at the speaker's place and waited. The chamber was full. The clause had compelled attendance. The clause did not, in its 1689 revision, permit the chief warlock to delay a session demanded by a champion under audit, and the chief warlock had not, in the day and a half since the bank's owl had landed on his desk, attempted the delay. Dumbledore sat at the head of the chamber in the carved chair of his office. He did not speak. He had not, since the night of the goblet, addressed Harry directly. Harry understood the silence as the silence of a man who had assessed the field and made certain decisions about which battles were available to him, and Harry, regarding the silence from his place at the rail, found that he respected the assessment even where he did not, on every point, agree with it. Lucius Malfoy was in the 2nd tier between Yaxley and Selwyn, in the seat that the Malfoy family had held since 1684. He had not yet spoken. He had positioned himself by the angle of his shoulder against the bench, as a man who intended to speak. Harry filed Lucius's posture and turned to the floor. The senior bailiff, a witch in plum-colored robes whose name Harry would later learn was Madame Marchbanks, called the session. This chamber is convened on the petition of Mr. Harry James Potter, champion of the Triwizard Tournament under the Charter of 1612, on the matter of inheritance disclosure made under Section 6, subsection 3 of that charter, audited and verified by Director Ragnok son of Bardock son of Rakar of Gringotts Bank, and witnessed by the bank's silver. Mr. Potter, state your petition. I petition the Wizengamot, Harry said, to recognize on the bank's evidence 3 lordships in my person. The lordship of Peverell, the lordship of Slytherin, and the lordship of Fay. The chamber did not respond. The chamber, by old practice, did not respond at the moment of the petition's reading. The chamber waited for the testimony. Director Ragnok, said Marchbanks, take the floor. Ragnok came to the rail. He had not, since the audit, changed his coat. He stood in front of the Wizengamot at half the height of an ordinary man and made the chamber lean to hear him, and Harry watched the lean the way he had watched Crouch's lean in the side chamber of the goblet, and was reminded that lean was a thing earned, not granted. Ragnok read. He read in the dry, flat voice that the bank's auditors used for findings. He read the Peverell line. He read the names. Ignatus, Ilanth, Henry, Fleamont, James, Harry. He read the dates. He read the parishes. He laid the parchment of audit with its 7 seals on the rail before him where the Wizengamot could see the seals from any seat in the chamber. He read the Slytherin line. He read the names. Heraclitus, Cassandra, the daughter married into C.R.Y's, the C.R.Y's descent through 9 generations, the C.R.Y's Peverell merger of 1456, the Potter line, Harry. He read the dates. He read the parishes. He laid the silver disc beside the parchment. Halfway through the Fay testimony, Lucius rose. Chief Warlock, Lord Malfoy, procedural objection. The Fay line is not, by the records of this chamber, a registered line. The Fay seat is not, by the records of this chamber, an active seat. The seat has been vacant for 1300 years on grounds of extinction. The chamber does not, by precedent, recognize a line for the purpose of reclaiming an extinct seat. I move that the testimony on the Fay line be struck from the record. Marchbanks looked at the parchment. She looked at Ragnarok. She looked at the bench where Madame Bones sat. Madame Bones stood. She was a woman in her late 50s with the small economy of motion that Harry had previously seen only in Aurors and in one mathematician he had met once on a train from King's Cross. She did not consult notes. She did not need to. The Lord Malfoy is mistaken on a point of precedent. The chamber has, on 3 occasions in the past 3 centuries, recognized a line for the purpose of reclaiming an extinct seat. In 1701, the Crouch Line; in 1788, the Black Line; in 1873, the Banshee seat under the magical creature reawakening clause. The Banshee precedent is the controlling one. The clause permits the reawakening of an extinct seat where the family in question can be shown, by bank or by parish, to have carried the line in unrecognized form across the period of presumed extinction. The Fay line by the silver disc the director has produced has been shown by the bank. The clause applies. The objection fails. The clause, Lucius said, applies to magical creatures. The Fay seat is not a magical creature seat. The clause, Bones said, was originally drafted to permit the reawakening of seats associated with magical creature lineages. Yes. It was extended in 1873 by the Chamber's own vote to apply to any seat extinguished by presumption rather than by record. The extension is in the minutes. I have the minutes. I can produce them. The objection fails. Lucius did not sit. He had not expected, perhaps, the speed of the reply. He looked at the bench, found no other witch or wizard rising to support him on the procedural ground, and changed his ground. Then I move the testimony on the Slytherin line be struck. The Slytherin line is a contested line. The chamber has, in the present generation, a registered claim on the Slytherin lordship that has not yet been audited. The bank's failure to audit the registered claim does not entitle the bank to favor a competing claim on the same name. Ragnarok spoke without lifting his head from the parchment. The bank audited the registered claim this morning. Lucius looked at him. I beg your pardon, at dawn. By a courtesy of the bank's office, when an audit is performed on a name that has been the subject of a registered claim, the bank performs a parallel audit on the registered claim, so that the chamber may rank both claims when the chamber is convened. I have the result of the parallel audit. I will read it now if the Lord Malfoy wishes. Read it, Dumbledore said. It was Dumbledore's first word of the session. The chamber turned to him briefly and turned back. Ragnarok read. File 1149G, registered for December 1943. Claimant filed under the patronymic Gontriddle. Claim of descent from Salazar Slytherin through Cadmus Peverell through the Gaunt family of Little Hangleton. Audit performed by Director Ragnarok, son of Bardock, son of Rakkar, at the bank's 3rd register. Findings. The Cadmus Peverell linkage rests on a chain of descent documented in 1611 by Marvell Gaunt's predecessor, Steward, and retracted on the steward's deathbed in 1646. The retraction is filed at the bank's 3rd register and has been on the bank's table for 350 years. The Gaunt family's claim, considered in the light of the retraction, is a junior half-blood collateral claim that runs through a forgery. The bank rejects the claim. The chamber was, for the first time in the session, audibly disturbed. Selwyn made a noise. Yaxley pressed his hand against his mouth. Lucius did not move. He had become very pale around the cheekbones, which was the first sign Harry had seen on him of any reaction at all, and Harry, watching, thought that Lucius had not known about the steward's retraction and that Lucius was now performing in real time and at speed the calculation of what the retraction's existence meant for the calculations he had been making with his life for the past 15 years. The Lord Malfoy, Marchbanks said, may persist with the procedural objection. Will he? The chamber, Lucius said slowly, has not seen the steward's retraction. The chamber must see the retraction before the chamber accepts the bank's finding on it. The chamber is welcome to see the retraction, said Ragnarok. The retraction was filed at the bank's 3rd register in 1646. It has been available for inspection for 350 years. The bank's records show that no member of the present Gaunt family or its claimants has, in 350 years, requested inspection of the retraction. The bank's records show that no member of the Malfoy family or its allies has requested inspection. The bank's records show that the retraction has been requested for inspection on 2 occasions in the past century, both by members of the present family Bones. The bank produces the retraction here. He laid a second parchment on the rail. The chamber, the part of it that could see, leaned forward. The chamber, the part of it that could not, asked the part of it that could to read aloud. The bailiff read aloud. Lucius did not interrupt. The retraction was, on its face, what the bank had said it was. The steward, dying in the winter of 1646, had retracted the Cadmus Peverell linkage on the grounds that he had falsified the linkage on the order of a previous Gaunt patriarch in exchange for the patriarch's pardon of a small theft committed by the steward's son in 1611. The steward, dying, had wanted his soul clean. The steward had cleaned it. The Gaunt family since 1646 had not. The chamber sat very still. The objection on the Slytherin line, Marchbanks said, fails. Lucius sat down. He sat down because the procedural ground had been removed under him, and he had been a man who depended in his political life on a great many procedural grounds, and he was a man who knew when one of them gave way how to find the next. He did not this morning find the next. He sat, he folded his hands, he turned his face a small degree toward Yaxley, who looked away. Ragnok finished the Fay testimony. He read the Crys clan's migration. He read the parish record. He named the silver disc. He laid the silver disc beside the parchment. The silver disc in the green light of the chamber glowed once, faintly, the same small pale glow Harry had seen at the audit. The chamber, which had been on the edge of finding its voice again, hushed. The bank, Ragnok said, rests its testimony. The chamber may question the bank's witness, or the chamber may proceed to recognition. The chamber, said Marchbanks, will entertain questions. Madam Bones. No questions for the bank, Bones said. Lord Malfoy, I will not waste the chamber's time. He had not, Harry noticed, said no further questions. He had said he would not waste the chamber's time. The phrasing was Lucius's last small concession of dignity to himself. It signaled to his allies that he was withdrawing, not yielding. It did not change the outcome. Chief Warlock, Dumbledore stood. He did not lift his hand. He did not raise his voice. He stood at the head of the chamber and looked for a long moment at Harry, and Harry, returning the look, kept his face still and met it. Dumbledore inclined his head the smallest degree, in the gesture Ragnok had also used, the gesture that meant in the bank's office I see you, and that meant, in the Wisengamot's chamber, I will not contest your standing on the floor of this session. I will not this morning contest the bank's testimony, Dumbledore said. I will not this morning contest the petition. The chamber will note that I have, in my private capacity, the gravest concern for the petitioner's safety in light of the disclosure he has chosen, under the clause, to make in public. I will note for the chamber that the petitioner is, at this hour, a 14-year-old student in my care, and that I will, with the chamber's permission, second any motion the chamber may entertain to provide him appropriate protection. That is the only intervention I will offer. I will sit. He sat. Harry watched the seat take him. He watched the long beard settle along the line of the carved arm. He thought with the new precision that Dumbledore had just done 2 things in a single short sentence. He had refused to fight Harry on the floor, and he had positioned himself as the chamber's preferred protector for Harry in the immediate aftermath. Both things were defensible. Both things were also, Harry noticed, useful to Dumbledore. He filed them. The chamber, Marchbanks said, proceeds to recognition. Mr. Potter approached the seats. Harry crossed the floor. The Peverell seat was on the second tier, third from the left. The brass plate read PVRELL of Godric's hollow. He laid his hand on the plate. The plate warmed. The warmth was not a flash. It was the small, steady warmth of a thing recognizing what it had been waiting for. The seat, which had been folded, unfolded itself in 3 small motions. The wood of the bench, dark and worn, had retained, beneath 2 centuries of dust, a small carving of 3 triangles in a circle. The carving was now, by the seat's own motion, dust-free. The seat of Peverell, Marchbanks said, is recognized as held by Lord Harry James Potter Peverell. Be seated. Harry did not sit. He went to the next seat. The Slytherin seat was on the first tier, 4th from the right. The brass plate read Slytherin of the Greater South. He laid his hand on the plate. The plate had been polished badly in 1943. It now polished itself. The serpent crowned on the bench's back lifted itself in incised motion by a small degree and settled. The seat unfolded. The wood was older than the Peverell wood. It had the soft grain that very old oak takes on after 1,000 years. The seat of Slytherin, Marchbanks said, is recognized as held by Lord Harry James Potter Slytherin. Be seated. He did not sit. He went to the Fay seat. The recess in the 3rd tier had been used to store coats for 6 centuries. The coats had been removed at dawn by a small, embarrassed clerk who had not, in her career, been required to clear the coats from a seat. Recess was now empty. The recess was, when Harry approached it, larger than he had expected. It was the size of a small room. At the back of the recess, against the marble, was a low stone bench. The bench had not been visible from the floor because of the coats. The bench had no brass plate. It had instead the small incised mark Harry had now seen 3 times, the key that was not a key, the knot that was not a knot, set into the marble above the bench. He laid his hand on the mark. The mark moved. It did not move the way the Peverell carving had moved. It moved the way water moves under a thin ice in early winter, a small, slow surface motion that suggested a larger motion beneath. The chamber watching was silent. Bones in her bench leaned forward by the very smallest degree, which was, in Bones, the equivalent of an audible gasp. The recess brightened. The marble at the back of the recess had been for 1300 years the color of marble. It was now, for the duration of a slow count of 10, the color of evening light on water at the end of a long summer day. It returned, at the count of 10, to the color of marble. The low stone bench, which had been dust-coated, was now dust-free. "The seat of Fay," Marchbanks said, and her voice did not quite hold the dry control it had held a moment before, "is recognized under the magical creature reawakening clause as held by Lord Harry James Potter Fay. Be seated." He sat. The chamber, which had not, by old practice, been expected to make a noise at this point in a session, did make a noise. It was not applause. It was not a shout. It was the small collective inhale of 89 wizards and witches, finding that they had been holding their breath for the last 40 minutes without noticing. Dumbledore did not move. Lucius did not move. Marchbanks called the chamber to order with one tap of a small wooden hammer on the rail. The chamber came to order. "There is one further matter," Marchbanks said. "The bank has, by its courtesy, included in the testimony. It is not a matter on which the chamber has been asked to vote. It is a matter the chamber will be required, in the natural course of the next session or the next several sessions, to consider. The chamber is invited to be informed in advance. Director Ragnarok." "The Fay seat," Ragnarok said, "carries an associated artifact set. The set contains one item. The item is the crown of magical Britain, a circlet forged in the 8th century by Morgan Le Fay and bound by her to the seat. The crown has been considered lost for 1300 years. The crown, by the bank's records, was sealed by Morgan in her tomb at Avalon at the close of her life, with a binding that permits the crown to be recovered only by the senior heir of her line. The senior heir of her line is now identified. The senior heir of her line, should he choose to recover the crown, is at liberty to recover it. The bank does not recommend the recovery. The bank does not oppose the recovery. The bank notes only that the recovery, if attempted, will require the use of an extraordinary access route that the bank does not control. The route, by the bank's records, lies through the veil of the Department of Mysteries and is opened by the use of the Peverell Hallows in conjunction with the Le Fay binding. The bank notes for the chamber's information that the senior heir holds both. The bank does not offer further advice." Selwyn raised a hand. "Madam Bailiff, may I ask the witness a question?" "You may, Lord Selwyn." "Director, has any member of any line ever in your records recovered the crown? Number. Has any member of any line ever in your records attempted to recover the crown? 2. What happened to them? They did not return." Selwyn lowered his hand. He did not say more. Dumbledore stood for the second time. "Chief Warlock, Director, I would, in my private capacity, ask the chamber's leave to confer with Lord Potter Le Fay on the matter of the crown before the chamber returns to it. The conferral would not, by the clause's terms, be a procedural delay. It would be a private consultation. The chamber grants the leave," Marchbanks said. Harry stood up from the Le Fay seat. He did not, at that moment, say anything to the chamber. He looked at Dumbledore. He looked at Bones. He looked at Lucius, who had not moved his hands. "Chief Warlock," he said. "Yes, Lord Potter Le Fay. I accept the leave to confer." "Thank you, my lord." The chamber adjourned for an hour. Harry walked off the floor and up the broad green steps to the chamber's antechamber. Hermione was waiting in the antechamber. Ron was waiting beside her. They were both, when he reached them, perfectly composed in the way 2 people are composed when they have, in the previous hour, been on the edge of crying, and have decided that crying would inconvenience the person to whom they would like to be useful. Harry recognized the composition. He thanked them silently by walking the last 3 steps without breaking his pace. "It went," he said. "It went," said Hermione. "They voted Le Fay. They voted Le Fay. There's a private consultation with Dumbledore." "Of course there is. I'm going to take it." Good. She did not, this once, write anything down. She held the parchment in both hands as a person holds a small bird whose wing is not, this morning, the wing they are trying to mend. Ron, beside her, said one word. "Harry." "Yes, be careful. I'll be careful." Dumbledore was in the small chamber the bailiffs reserved for private consultations. He had not removed his robe. He stood at the window, which looked out onto the inner courtyard of the ministry, the courtyard being at this hour empty and full of the pale spring light that London had been giving the country in fragments for the past week. He turned when Harry entered. Lord Potter le Fay, headmaster. Sit. Harry sat. The chair was the standard chamber chair, hard, polite. He kept his hands on the chair's arms. Dumbledore did not sit. He went on standing at the window. He waited a moment to begin, and Harry let him, because Harry suspected that the way Dumbledore began would tell him a great deal about what Dumbledore had been preparing while Harry had been at the bank. I was at school with Tom Riddle, Dumbledore said. I know, Harry said. I knew when I met him at the age of 11 that his line was very probably Slytherin. I did not know it was Slytherin via forgery. I did not know the steward's retraction existed. I would, if you were to ask me whether I have failed in a great many small ways in the past 60 years, answer in the affirmative. The retraction is the largest of them. I should have known. The bank's records are public to those with the patience to read them. I had the patience. I did not bring it to that particular file. I made an error of attention. I am telling you about the error because you have, this morning, made the error mine to confess. I will not in the future omit to read the bank's records on a question that bears on your safety. I will read them. I am sorry. Harry waited. I have a second thing to say. Yes, the Crown, the bank's offer is, by the bank's standards, an honest offer. The bank will not lie to you about the Crown. The bank will, however, decline to recommend a course of action, and the bank's decline to recommend is, in this case, the bank's polite way of telling you that the bank does not believe you should attempt the recovery. The bank's two previous claimants did not return. The bank has, in its long history, learned that a phrase like did not return is in the bank's hands, a phrase used only when no other phrase is available. The bank is being careful. I am telling you in my private capacity that I am also being careful. I would prefer, with your permission, to consult with you on the matter for the next several days before you decide. You would prefer that I not go, Harry said. I would prefer that you not go, for my safety, for your safety. And for the safety of the country, yes. Explain that one, headmaster. Dumbledore turned from the window. He looked at Harry. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and in the look Harry saw the small, steady tiredness that he had previously seen on Dumbledore only once at the close of his first year after the stone. The crown, Dumbledore said, is not a piece of jewelry. The crown is a binding. It binds the Wizengamot. It binds the seats. It binds the magic of Britain to a single bearer. It was forged at a moment in our history when the British wizards were, for the first time, in danger of being subjugated by a magic-using power from the continent, and the crown was Morgan's response to the danger. Crown's bearer holds at the moment of binding, the casting vote on every magical legal question in Britain for the duration of the bearer's life. The crown's bearer holds also an access to Morgan's preserved magic that exceeds, in scope, the access available to any other wizard in our generation. The crown was set aside after Morgan because no one of her time or since wished to give a single wizard that authority. I do not wish to give it to you. I do not wish to give it to anyone. I would prefer, if the choice were mine, to leave the crown in its tomb. The choice is not yours. Number, whose is it? By the bank's testimony, yours. Yes. Dumbledore lowered his eyes. He let them rest for the space of a breath on the rings at Harry's right hand. He raised them again. There is a complication that the bank did not, by the bank's restraint, raise in the chamber. Yes, Voldemort, yes. Voldemort's claim on the Slytherin line is, as the bank has now established, invalid. Voldemort does not know this. Voldemort, when he learns it, will respond. His response will not be measured. His response will not be procedural. His response will be the response of a man who has built his identity on a forgery and has been told, in public and on the floor of the Wizengamot, that the forgery has been found. He will respond against you. He will respond against me. He will respond against any other person whose face appears in the Morning Prophet. He may also, and this is the part of his response that has been the burden of my last 3 days, respond against the crown. Why? Because the crown, once placed, will invalidate his mark. The mark of his Death Eaters is bound to his claim on Slytherin. The crown of magical Britain, when worn by the senior heir of Le Fay, supersedes all junior bindings within the magical legal system. The mark is a junior binding. The mark will go inert at the moment the crown is placed. Voldemort's followers at that moment will cease, in any meaningful sense, to be his. He will know it across the bond he holds with the mark. He will know it through every Death Eater alive. He will know it the way a king knows that his army has, on a battlefield he is not watching, lowered its banners. He will respond. Harry sat very still. He did not interrupt. He let Dumbledore say it through. His response, Dumbledore said, will be to attack the crown at the moment of placement. He will attempt to take it. He will attempt, if he cannot take it, to destroy it. He will attempt, if he cannot destroy it, to destroy the bearer. He will use for the attack the residue of the bond he has with his mark, and through that residue he will be able to follow you across the same veil passage the bank has described. He will arrive at Avalon. He will arrive perhaps while you are still in the tomb. He will arrive perhaps at the moment of the crown's placement on your head. He will arrive, and he will be destroyed there. By what? By Morgan's preserved magic. The crown on a Le Fay heir calls Morgan's preserved magic at the moment of binding. The magic does not, by its old protocol, tolerate the presence of a wizard who has built his identity on a forged Slytherin claim. The magic will in its own way dispose of him. I am telling you this not as a plan but as a forecast. I have been at this work for many years. I have read what the bank has not, by the bank's restraint, read aloud. I am telling you the forecast because you should know it. You're telling me, Harry said slowly, that if I place the crown, Voldemort will follow me to Avalon and be destroyed by Morgan's magic. I am telling you that is the forecast. I am telling you that the forecast carries risk. I am telling you that the bank's two previous claimants, the ones who did not return, also carried forecasts, and that their forecasts also predicted favorable outcomes, and that the favorable outcomes did not arrive. I am telling you all of this so that you may, with the information in your possession, decide whether to act on the forecast or to wait. I don't think waiting is an option for me, Harry said. It may not be. He won't wait. He'll come for me whether or not I place the crown. If I place it, I have a crown. If I do not place it, I have a forecasted attack with no crown and no crown-bound magic to answer it. The forecast is the better of the available options. The other options are worse. Dumbledore inclined his head. You have done the arithmetic, he said. I have done some of it. You will do the rest. I will. Then I will not prevent you. I will, with your permission, assist you. I have access to the Department of Mysteries. I have access to the veil. I can arrange the conditions of the attempt to be as safe as the conditions can be made. I can be present at the Wizengamot session of placement to second the ceremony. I cannot be in Avalon when you place the crown. The crown's binding does not permit a witness who is not of the line. You will be alone in Avalon. I am sorry for that. I cannot change it. I'll be alone. You will be alone, all right. Dumbledore raised his hand. He did not lift his wand. He held the hand at Harry's eye level in the open way of a man requesting, without compelling, a small concession. Harry watched the hand. Headmaster, yes. I want it on the record between us that you have, this morning, given me the assistance I would have asked for without my asking. I want it on the record that I have, in light of the assistance, agreed to defer to your operational judgment on the question of timing and route, while reserving for myself the question of whether to make the attempt at all. I want it on the record that I will not be displaced from the question of whether. The question of how is yours, with my consent. The question of whether is mine. It is on the record between us. Thank you, sir. Lord Potter Le Fay. Yes, you speak as if you have rehearsed. I have, sir, on the walk up the steps to this room. Dumbledore's mouth moved in the very small motion that on him was the bare outline of a sad smile. Go, he said. I will arrange the Department of Mysteries. The bank will arrange the Wizengamot ceremony. You will, I hope, spend the next 48 hours on whatever sleep you have not been having. Yes, sir. He left the consultation chamber. Hermione and Ron were on the green steps outside. He did not say to them what Dumbledore had said. He said only one thing. It's on, the veil, the crown, the ceremony, the day after tomorrow. Hermione nodded once. Ron put his hand on Harry's shoulder briefly, the gesture of a brother who has decided after some thought that the gesture is permitted. They walked together out of the ministry into the early afternoon, and the spring light, which had been pale all morning, broke clear over the embankment, and Harry, walking through it, did not look up. On the walk down the embankment toward the leaky cauldron, Harry let Hermione carry the parchment and let Ron walk on his right and let himself, for the first time since the night of the goblet, attend to the small, ordinary details of a London afternoon. A boatman on the river was eating an apple. A girl in a ministry uniform was hurrying back to her floor with a coffee. A pair of pigeons at the curb were fighting over a piece of bread. A cab driver was leaning on his horn at a tourist who had stopped in the middle of the street to take a photograph of the embassy across the road. The afternoon was the afternoon. The country was, by the small evidence of the street, the country it had been at noon. The country did not, by the street's evidence, know what had been recognized in the chamber 2 streets behind them. The country would know by the morning's papers. The morning's papers would print 3 of the 4 largest things. They would, by Skeeter's instinct, miss the 4th. The 4th, the bearer's election in the chamber that lay one day in the future, would be the thing the papers would not, until the day after, understand. The papers would, on the day after that, understand it by reading the chamber's record. The record would be public. The record would say in the bailiff's hand that the bearer had elected to release. The papers, when they read the record, would not, at first, understand what the bearer had given up. They would understand it the day after that. They would, by the third day, be writing the editorial that would be the editorial of the year. Hermione had been thinking the same thing. She did not, at the time, say it. She said, instead, the thing she had been thinking that Harry had not been thinking. "You know what we have not yet talked about." "Yes. How do you know what I am going to say?" "Because I have been making the list, and you have been making the list, and your list has been longer than mine, and the things on your list that are also on my list we have already discussed, and the things on your list that are not on my list are the things we have not yet discussed, and you have not in the past day mentioned any of them. There are 3 things you have not mentioned. I would guess you are about to mention one of them. I would guess the one is Sirius. Sirius is one. It is one of 3. What are the other 2? The second is whether to ask the bank to perform, by the bank's discretion, a parallel audit on you and Ron, on the chance that one or both of you is, by your own bank records, in possession of a small unrecognized line of your own. It is improbable. It is not impossible. The bank would, by old goblin custom, perform the parallel audit at no charge, in recognition of your participation in the audit of yesterday. The third is whether to consult Mr. Weasley about the political response in the ministry. Mr. Weasley is, by his place in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, a low-ranking witness. Is also, by his 30 years of attending the small political dinners that the misuse of Muggle artifacts office attends, a man who has a precise map of the ministry's internal politics. He is the man to consult this evening on what Lucius will do. He will, by his small private discretion, be discreet. I would prefer to consult him. She paused. I had not thought of the second one, she said. You had thought of the third. You had not, until I mentioned it, thought of the second. I had not. All right, and Sirius. Sirius will, by my reading, want to come to Hogsmeade tomorrow morning before the Chambers session, to walk you to the gate himself. Sirius will, by my reading, want to come to the Chambers session, although the Chamber is not, by old practice, open to the public on session days. Sirius will, by my reading, request from Dumbledore by flu, a chamber pass under the formula by which the chief warlock may permit attendance to a wizard of standing in the present generation. Dumbledore will, by my reading, grant the pass. All right, you are not surprised. I am not surprised. Sirius is, by the bank's records that the audit produced on the Black Line in the morning, the senior of his family. The Black family has, by the bank's records, 3 seats vacant in the chamber and one held in proxy by Arcturus Black, his great-uncle. Sirius will, by his standing, be eligible to attend the chamber under the pass without difficulty. You knew about the 3 vacant seats. I asked the clerk this morning. The clerk read me the registry. You did not tell me. I was about to. She wrote a note. She underlined the note. She set the parchment aside. All right. The Leaky Cauldron, when they reached it, was busy in the small mid-afternoon way. The cauldron was busy when the afternoon's news had begun to spread, but had not yet reached the form in which the patrons could discuss it. Tom, behind the counter, lifted his hand in the small private signal that he had been holding the parlor for them since 1 o'clock. They went up the stairs. The parlor was warm. The fire was low. Mrs. Weasley was at the head of the table. She did not, at his entry, attempt to put into the parlor the small private speech she had been holding all morning. She did, however, look at him for a long count of 3, and Harry, returning the look, did not look away. Harry, Mrs. Weasley. You are all in one piece. I am. That is all I will say for the moment. I will in a quarter hour say a great deal. For the moment that is all. Thank you. She sat. Hermione sat. Ron sat. Harry sat. Tom, behind the counter, sent up tea and bread. Mr. Weasley arrived at 3:20. He had come from the misuse of Muggle artifacts office on foot, at a brisk pace, with the small, steady satisfaction of a man who had been told by his second son's friend's owl that he was needed for a conversation that bore on a matter of state. He kissed Mrs. Weasley. He nodded to Hermione. He sat beside Ron. All right, Harry. All right, Mr. Weasley. You wanted my view on the ministry. Yes, you'll have the minister's response by noon tomorrow. You'll have Lucius's response by tomorrow night. You'll have Lucius's secondary response, the slower, more careful one, by the day after that. The minister's response will be, by my reading, supportive. He has in the past week been advised by his chief of staff that the prevailing wind is in your favor, and he is, by his nature, a man who moves with the prevailing wind. He will, by tomorrow's tea time, send you a small note congratulating you on the recognition. The note will not, by his nature, mean much. The note will be useful only as a public marker of his alignment. Print the note in the Prophet. Print it in the second column on the front. It will discourage the procedural wedges. Lucius will, in the day after, attempt to drive through the Chamber's morning session. All right. Lucius's first response will be a procedural objection on the floor of the Chamber. He will, by his reading of yesterday, attempt the Le Fay extinction objection. Bones will overrule. He will, by his second card, attempt the Slytherin contested claim objection. The bank will produce the parallel audit. He will, by his third card, sit. He has, by my reading of his preparations, prepared a fourth card, which is a personal objection to the bearer's age. The chamber will not, by old practice, entertain the fourth card. Lucius knows the chamber will not entertain it. He will produce it anyway because he must, by his political logic, be seen to have produced every card in his hand. He will produce it, the chamber will refuse it, and he will sit. The Lucius response on the day is contained. The Lucius response after the day is the response to watch. Why? Because Lucius, after the day, will become, by his arithmetic, a man without a forecast. He has built his life on the false claimant's claim being the right claim. He has, with the false claimant's removal of the mark from his arm an hour from now, lost the forecast he has been carrying since 1972. He will, in the next 48 hours, attempt to find a new forecast. The new forecast will be, by his old habit, an alignment with the next strong magical figure he can identify in the chamber. The next strong magical figure in the chamber, by his arithmetic, will be you. He will, by the day after tomorrow, attempt to align himself with you. Align himself with me. Yes, to what end? To his own. Lucius is not, in the strict sense, an evil man. He is a frightened man with a long line who has used the only tools he was given for the work of preserving the line. The tools he was given by his father were the tools of alignment with the strong magical figure of the moment. The strong magical figure in his father's generation was Grindelwald, and Lucius's father, by old family discretion, declined the alignment because he had been at school with Dumbledore and trusted Dumbledore on the field. The strong magical figure in Lucius's generation was the false claimant, and Lucius accepted the alignment. The strong magical figure in the next generation is, by Lucius's reading of the chamber's vote, you. He will offer alignment. He will offer it in the next 48 hours. What do? You decline. You decline with the small, steady cadence you have been using in the chamber. You decline because you cannot, by the arithmetic of your position, accept alignment from a man whose alignment will, in the next year, become a liability. The chamber will, after Madame Bones's distinguishing process, sentence Lucius. The sentence will be a probationary one by his cooperation, but the sentence will be on his record. The record is a thing the chamber will not, in your 5th year and beyond, forget. Aligning with the recently sentenced is not a strategy that succeeds. Decline. Decline politely. Decline by referring him to his barrister, who will handle the procedural matters of the sentence on his behalf. Do not, by your decline, humiliate him. Lucius humiliated is a different problem than Lucius declined. Decline him. All right, that is all the political advice I have for you. The bank, by Ragnarok's professional management, will handle the inheritance matters. Dumbledore, by his old practice, will handle the school matters. Madame Bones, by her appointment, will handle the criminal matters. You, by your position, will handle the chamber matters. Each of us has a portfolio. The portfolios will, in the next year, mostly run themselves. You will need to attend to your part of the portfolio on the days the chamber sits. You will, by my reading, attend to it well. Thank you, Mr. Weasley. I have one final thing to say. He waited. My son tells me you have, in the past week, called him your brother more than once. I am, by my position, glad to hear it. The Weasleys do not, by our old practice, take on brothers lightly. We have in our own family 6 children. The 7th, by his enrollment, would be a load. The 7th, by your standing, will be a partner. I am in this hour formally inviting you to consider, in your school holidays and at our table on the days you wish, the Weasleys as your second family. The invitation is not contingent on your lordships. It is contingent only on your interest. You may accept now. You may accept later. You may decline. The invitation will stand for the rest of your life. Harry, who had not in the past week expected anyone to formally invite him to a second family, did not, by his face, allow the surprise to show. He let the invitation sit on the table. He looked at Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley nodded the smallest degree without looking at him. He looked at Ron. Ron did not nod. Ron looked at the table. Ron's right hand by his thigh had become a fist that was not, this time, a tense fist. It was the relaxed, small grip of a hand that had been waiting for the moment in which the family would say the thing that the family had been arranging, in its quiet way, for the past 3 years. He looked at Mr. Weasley. I accept. Very good. Thank you. You are welcome. Mrs. Weasley, against her old practice, did not at the acceptance weep. She did, however, allow herself a small, steady breath. The breath of a woman who had been holding a small, steady worry for 3 years and had been permitted at last to set the worry down. The tea on the parlor's table went cold. Tom sent up a second pot. The afternoon on the parlor's clock became 4. They walked at 5, the 3 of them, back to the atrium for the flew to Hogsmeade. They did not, on the walk, attempt to address the chamber's session in the morning. They had said in the parlor what needed to be said. They walked. Chapter 3 end. Chapter 4, The Crown of Magical Britain hidden in Avalon. The Slytherin Manor had been listed on the bank's properties register as a vacancy for 53 years. The bank had, on the morning of Harry's audit, removed the listing. The keys had been couriered to Hogwarts by a goblin clerk in a small brass box with the seal of the third register. Harry had not opened the box on the train back from London. He had carried the box into the library after the Wisengamot session and had set it on the table at which Hermione had been working, and he had opened it then, with Hermione watching, because Hermione was the person who would, in the next 48 hours, find what they needed. The keys were 3, they were small, they were old, they did not look like keys. They looked like 3 small fragments of polished black stone, each fragment incised with a different sigil. The first sigil was the serpent crowned, the second sigil was the triangles in a circle, the third sigil was the knot that was not a knot. They're not for doors, Hermione had said. Number, they're for books. Yes, the library of the Slytherin Manor. Yes. The bank said the Manor's library has been sealed since 1771. The bank said the Manor itself has been sealed since 1942. The bank said one of the keys would open the library. I do not yet know which one. All 3, said Hermione. The library was sealed by a triple binding because the books in it included the line registers of all 3 of the houses you are now lord of. The triple binding lifts only with all 3 keys present. The bank's clerk would not have given you 3 keys if any one of them was the answer alone. Tomorrow morning, the library, both of us, he had agreed. The Manor was in Wiltshire. It lay on a low fold of the downs above a small river that had, at the field's southwest edge, a wide bend where a Roman villa had once stood, and a small grove of beech trees now stood. The Manor itself was a long, low stone house of 3 wings, the central wing 2 stories and the side wings 1, the roof a slate that had been laid in the 17th century and patched twice. The grounds were unkempt because no gardener had been employed in 53 years. The bank had, by old goblin custom, kept a small charm on the building that prevented its collapse. The bank had not, under the same custom, kept any charm that maintained the grounds. The grounds were therefore the grounds of a house that had not been visited in 2 generations. Harry walked across the gravel of the drive at 7:30 in the morning of the day before the Wisengamot ceremony. Hermione walked beside him. Ron, who had wanted to come, had been left at Hogwarts by Harry's small, kind insistence, on the ground that 2 of them would be more useful in the library than 3, and that one of them ought to remain in the school to receive the owls Hermione had sent out to 4 research libraries on the continent. Ron had not, in his life, been previously useful as a receiver of owls. He had taken up the new responsibility with the grim composure of a boy who would rather have been somewhere else. The Manor door opened to the Peverell key. The library door opened to the 3 keys, set in 3 small recesses in the door's iron, and turned against the iron's reluctance in the same single turn that the bank's clerk had described in a small letter accompanying the box. The library, when it opened, was dark. Hermione lifted her wand. The light came on. The room was a long gallery with a vaulted ceiling. The shelves ran from floor to ceiling along both walls and turned at the far end and continued along the back wall behind a small wooden lectern. The shelves had been built in the time of the Slytherin grandfather Heraclitus in 1294, 3 years before Cassandra's marriage. The wood was older than the Wisengamot. The books were older than the wood. Harry, who had never been in a library that was, in any honest accounting, his own, did not at first know how to begin. He stood in the doorway for a count of 5, then he began. Le Fay first, he said. Yes. Crown. Yes. Avalon. Yes. Hermione had already moved to the lectern at the room's end. The lectern, on close inspection, was not a lectern, it was an index. The wood of its surface bore, in incised letters made dark by centuries, the names of the topics of the library's books. The topics were not in alphabetical order. The topics were in an order that Hermione, examining them, began to understand within a minute, and that she explained to Harry within a second minute. It's by the date of binding, she said. Books appear under their binding date. The bindings, magical, not physical, were performed when the books were placed on the shelves. The library has a charm that updates the lectern when a binding is placed. The earliest topics are at the top. Avalon is on the 3rd line of the upper 3rd. Look. Harry looked. The word Avalon sat in dark, incised lettering near the top of the lectern's right side. Beside it, in smaller letters, a number, Shelf 7, Section 3, Volume 4. He went to the shelf. He found the volume. He pulled it down. It was a small book, perhaps a hand and a half tall, bound in pale leather that he did not recognize. The leather had an incised mark on its front cover, the key that was not a key. He carried the book to the table at the room's center. Hermione brought 2 more books that the lectern had referenced. They sat. He opened the book. The book was in 3 languages, Latin on the recto, Welsh on the verso. A third language on the inserted slips of vellum that lay between the pages, which Hermione, looking, identified as a form of Old French with a Cornish admixture so heavy that it might more accurately be called a Cornish dialect of Old French. "Read me the Latin," he said. Hermione read. "On the question of the burial of Morgan, daughter of Gorwa and Igraine, half-sister to Arthur Pendragon, mother of Iwain by her steward, founder of the line that endures. She was buried, by her own design, on the island of Avalon, in a tomb she had prepared in the 8th decade of her life, which tomb she sealed with a binding of her own devising. The seal of the tomb is the seal of her clavicle, incised on the silver of the Crys line, of which the bank holds, in this year of our Lord 1408, 1 disc. The binding of the tomb permits the entrance of the senior heir of her line, accompanied by the 3 Peverell Hallows, by way of the veil passage between the worlds. No other entrance is permitted. No other entrance has ever, by our records, been attempted. The crown of magical Britain, which she forged at the request of the British wizards in the early years of her life and reclaimed for safekeeping in the late years of her life, lies at the foot of her tomb on a small silver stand. The crown is not a circlet of gold, contrary to the popular descriptions. It is a circlet of woven silver and air." Hermione paused. "Silver and air, read on." "The crown is set with 7 stones, of which 6 are of the 7 minerals of the 7 stones of audit, and the 7th is a stone of Avalon itself, drawn from the small lake at the foot of the hill. The stones are bound to the seats of the Wisengamot. The crown, when placed on the senior heir of the Le Fay line, binds the seats. The crown, while placed, holds the casting vote in any matter of magical law in Britain. The crown is not a thing to be lifted lightly. The crown is, by Morgan's design, a thing of mercy as much as a thing of authority. The bearer, while bearing, may at any moment release the seats from binding, and the binding is, in this respect, a binding only at the bearer's election. The seats may resume their independent motion at the bearer's word. The crown does not coerce. The crown permits. It permits, that's what it says. That's not what Dumbledore said, that's what it says." Harry sat back. He looked at the small book. He looked at Hermione. He let the discrepancy lie in the air between them. "Dumbledore said the crown's bearer holds the casting vote on every magical legal question in Britain for the duration of the bearer's life. He said the binding was forever. The book says the binding is at the bearer's election. The book is older. The book is Harry. The book is in the library of the Slytherin Manor. The book was bound in 1408 by a Welsh scribe in possession of the 3rd Crys silver. The book is the closest contemporary source we are likely to have on the crown. Dumbledore is not in possession of the 3rd Crys silver. He is also, however, in possession of more than I am. He may also be wrong. He may also be wrong." Harry let the sentence settle. He did not yet know what to do with the discrepancy. He filed it. He would think about it later. He needed at this moment to think about Avalon. "Read me about the tomb," he said, "how it's entered, what we use the Hallows for." Hermione turned the page. She read, "The entrance to the tomb. The veil of the Department of Mysteries is, by its own ancient design, a passage between this world and the next. It is not, in the ordinary use, a passage between this world and Avalon. Avalon lies in a 3rd place, neither this world nor the next. Avalon's access route requires that the veil be opened against its ordinary direction, by an instrument that has been designed to open it against its ordinary direction. There is no instrument so designed. There is, however, a set of 3 instruments which, used together, can be persuaded to perform the function: the cloak of Ignotus, the stone of Cadmus, and the wand of Antioch. The cloak, when held over the veil at the moment of approach, deflects the veil's pull toward death and redirects it toward the 3rd place. The stone, when turned in the hand of the approacher, summons a guide who will lead the approacher across the 3rd place. The wand, when laid against the lintel of the veil, holds the veil open for the approacher's return. The 3 together permit a single approach and a single return performed by a single bearer within a window of 1 hour. The window cannot be lengthened. The window cannot be performed twice. The bearer must in the 1 hour find the tomb, lift the crown, and return. 1 hour, 1 hour, from the moment I step through the veil, from the moment you step through the veil. And the wand holds it open while I'm there. The wand holds it open. The stone summons the guide who walks me across. Yes, who is the guide? Hermione consulted the Welsh recto. She consulted the Old French slip. She frowned. She consulted both again. "It does not name the guide," she said. "The Welsh calls the guide simply the one who waits. The Latin uses a phrase that might be either the patient one or the woman who waits. The Old French is more direct. The Old French says, La dame qui te connaît, the lady who knows you. The lady, Harry, the lady is almost certainly Morgan herself, or some part of her she has left in the third place to guide the approachers. She would have had to leave a guide. The third place is not, by its own description, navigable to someone without a guide. Morgan herself, or part of her. All right, he sat very still. He had heard from Dumbledore that the crown was a binding. He had heard from the book that the crown was a permission. He had heard now from the same book that the guide across Avalon would be the lady who knew him, and the lady who would know him would be the founder of one of his 3 bloodlines, dead for 1,300 years, present as a residual binding in a third place. He let the sentences sit. He did not try to integrate them. He returned to operational detail. The Hallows. Yes. I have the cloak, the stone I do not have, the wand I do not have, the book. Does the book say where they are? The book was bound in 1408. It says the cloak is held by the Peverell line, the stone is held by the Gaunt line, the wand is held, and this is the line I have been reading and rereading because I cannot make it say what I think it says. The wand is held in 1408 by Master Antioch's grandnephew, who was at the time the headmaster of a wizarding school in Scotland. Hogwarts, yes. The wand has been in the headmaster's possession at Hogwarts since the death of Antioch in approximately 1334. The book says the wand has passed from headmaster to headmaster of Hogwarts under a binding that requires the previous owner to be defeated in a duel by the next owner. The book says, Harry, the book says the current owner of the wand in 1408 was Phineas Black. We can update the chain. Dumbledore, Dumbledore, of course Dumbledore, of course Dumbledore, and the stone, the Gaunt line, held by Marvolo Gaunt's grandson at the time of his death in 1925, who passed it to his daughter, who passed it to her son, who is, by the bank's testimony, the false claimant on the Slytherin name. The stone is held by Voldemort. Or it was. The book does not extend past 1408. We do not know the stone's current holder, but the chain, as far as the book follows it, leads to the Gaunts. The chain may have broken since, we do not know. I will ask Dumbledore. Yes, he will know about the wand because he has it. He may know about the stone because of the work he has been doing. He will not know about the third place's guide because the book is the first source I have heard mention her. He will know about the Veil passage because he has access to the department. He will know about the 1-hour window. The window is a problem. The window is the problem. It's an hour. It's an hour, and Voldemort will be coming through the veil after me as soon as he learns I have gone, and the moment of the crown's placement is the moment his mark goes inert. And his mark goes inert at the placement, and the placement is performed at the Wizengamot ceremony, not at the tomb. The book, does it say when the placement is performed? Hermione consulted the book. She read in silence for a moment. She read aloud. The crown is placed at the moment of the Wizengamot ceremony of binding, in the chamber of the Wizengamot, in the presence of the senior bailiff. The crown is not placed at the tomb. The crown is recovered from the tomb. The recovery is the act of obtaining custody. The placement is the act of binding. The two acts are separate. The bearer recovers the crown from the tomb. The bearer returns from the third place. The bearer carries the crown to the chamber of the Wizengamot. The bearer is bound on the chamber's floor by the senior bailiff's reading of the binding formula. The mark of the false claimant goes inert at the moment of binding, not at the moment of recovery. So I have between the recovery and the binding to get to the chamber without Voldemort. Yes, and after the binding the mark is inert. Yes, and after the binding he comes to Avalon. Hermione's quill paused above the parchment. He doesn't need to come to Avalon, she said. Avalon is the third place. He can't get there. He doesn't have the line. He can't open the veil against its ordinary direction without the Hallows. He doesn't have the Hallows. You have the Hallows. He can't follow you to Avalon. He can, Harry said. How? Dumbledore's forecast, the residue of the mark. The mark's binding gives Voldemort a connection to every Death Eater. The connection is one way. He can feel through it. He cannot ordinarily travel through it. When the mark goes inert, the connection, Dumbledore said the residue of the connection. He thinks the residue is, briefly, two-way. He thinks Voldemort can use the residue in the seconds immediately after the placement to find any Death Eater who has touched the third place. And if a Death Eater has touched the third place, say, a Death Eater who was at the bank in 1943 to file the fraudulent claim, that residue can be traced. He thinks Voldemort can follow the residue to Avalon. He thinks Voldemort has been preparing this for 15 years without knowing he was preparing it. He thinks the placement is the moment of the trap. He thinks the trap closes on Voldemort. Hermione had gone very still. He didn't tell you that in the chamber, she said. Number. He told you that in the private consultation. Yes, he's been planning this, Harry. He's been planning this since at least 1943, since the file was registered, since he saw the forged claim and decided not to pursue the audit. He decided not to pursue the audit because he wanted the forgery to remain on the table so that Voldemort would think he was the Slytherin heir, so that the mark would be a Slytherin-bound mark, so that the crown could one day invalidate it. He left the forgery in place for 53 years. He left it in place because he was waiting for the senior Le Fay heir to appear. He was waiting for me. He was waiting for you. And he didn't know I was the Le Fay heir until the goblet. He knew you were the Peverell heir. He knew you carried the Slytherin line through the CRY's merger. He didn't know about the Le Fay bastard line until the bank's silver disc spoke this morning. He was hoping you were the Le Fay heir, but he did not know. He has been waiting for the senior Le Fay heir for a long time. He may have been hoping for one before you. He may have been hoping for one in your father's generation. He may have been hoping for one in your grandfather's. The goblet, Harry. The goblet was not originally the trap. The goblet was the test. Whose test? His. Dumbledore's. Dumbledore's. Harry put his hand flat on the table. He did not in that moment allow himself the cold he might have allowed himself. He held the cold an inch above the place where the cold lived. He kept it there. He spoke from above it. I am not going to be angry about that yet. All right, I am going to be angry about it later. All right, I am going to use it now. How? By doing what he expects me to do, because what he expects me to do is also what I would do if I weren't being expected to do it. The crown will go on Voldemort's claim. The mark will go inert. Voldemort will follow me to Avalon. He will die there. The plan is what I would have arrived at by myself if I had the time to arrive at it. It is also Dumbledore's plan. The overlap is not in itself a reason to abandon the plan. The overlap is a reason to be careful about what comes after. After the crown is placed and Voldemort is dead and the seats are bound, the binding is at the bearer's election, the book said, and Dumbledore did not say. I think Dumbledore wants me to think the binding is permanent. I think Dumbledore wants me, after Voldemort, to remain crown-bound, because the crown-bound bearer is, by the book's description, the most powerful single wizard in Britain, and Dumbledore would prefer the most powerful single wizard in Britain to be a 14-year-old he believes he can guide than a Dark Lord he cannot. I think Dumbledore has spent 53 years arranging that I should be crown-bound under his guidance. Will you be? I will be crown-bound for the moment of placement, because the placement is what invalidates the mark. I will release the binding after Voldemort is dead, because the binding is at my election, and I do not, by my election, intend to hold the casting vote on every question of magical law in Britain for the rest of my life. I will release. I will sit in the Le Fay seat as a Lord of the Chamber. I will not be the King of Magical Britain. I will, however, be the boy who killed the Dark Lord and would not be king. That position, by my arithmetic, is more useful than the position of king. It permits me to live, it permits me to study, it permits me to do the work in the next 20 years that being king would prevent me from doing. You sound like a man who has rehearsed. I have, Hermione. On the walk up to this library, she looked at him for a long moment. She said nothing. She wrote nothing. She closed the book very gently and laid her hand flat on its cover, and then, after the count of 3, lifted her hand and met his eye. Then we get the stone, she said. We get the stone. The stone was in the ruined house of Marvolo Gaunt in Little Hangleton. The bank had not, at first, told Harry where the stone was. The bank had, when asked, looked at him with the small, flat, unyielding regard that the bank's senior staff used on requests that lay outside the bank's scope. And Ragnarok had said in his dry voice that the bank did not, by its policies, comment on the locations of Hallows artifacts. The bank had, however, said in the small private corridor outside the audit chamber that the bank's records noted the stone's last verified location as the Gaunt family seat, and that the bank's records had not been updated since 1925, and that the bank was not, by its policies, going to update them. It had been sufficient. He had apparated, with Tonks's authorization and Hermione's research and the cloak under his arm, to the lane outside the Gaunt house at 4 in the afternoon. The light over the small valley had been the pale yellow of an English winter day in November, which was the wrong light for May, but the weather over Little Hangleton had never, since the Gaunts had lived there, paid attention to the calendar. The Gaunt house was a low, filthy hovel against the side of the hill at the lane's end. The roof was half collapsed. The door was off its hinge. The windows were broken or shuttered. The fence was, by visible evidence, a snake nailed to the post in 1924 and not removed. He went to the door. He stood at the door. He let his hand find the Peverell ring on his right hand. He let the ring's awareness, which he had in the last day begun to understand was a small companion of its own, find the door's binding. The door's binding was an old binding. It had been laid by Marvolo Gaunt in 1925 and renewed by his son Morphin in 1926 and not renewed since. The binding had been laid against the entry of anyone who was not of the Gaunt blood. The binding did not, in the bank's strict legal sense, recognize the Triwizard Peverell Slytherin chain that ran through Harry, because the binding had been laid in ignorance of the chain. The binding had, however, been laid in the older idiom of blood magic, and the older idiom of blood magic did not pay attention to the bank's strict legal sense. It paid attention to the actual presence of blood. Harry's blood by the bank's silver was Slytherin blood. The door's binding sniffed at his hand. The door's binding accepted his hand. The door opened. Inside the hovel the air was the air of a place that had been closed for 60 years. He did not breathe it more deeply than necessary. He lit his wand. He looked around. The hovel was a single room. The room contained a small wooden table whose legs had splayed under the weight of half a century of unwiped dust. The room contained a hearth that had not been swept in the same period. The room contained, in the floor at the room's center, a small dark line that Harry, kneeling, found to be the seam of a trap. He lifted the trap. Beneath the trap was a box. The box was small. The box was old. The box bore on its lid the small incised triangle of the Hallows. He opened the box. The stone lay inside it. It was a small black stone, perhaps the size of a hazelnut. It bore on one face the incised triangle. It bore on the other face a small ring of metal in the form of an open band. He did not pick the stone up. He looked at it in the box. He thought about what the stone was for. He thought about what the book had said the stone did: summons a guide who will lead the approacher across the third place. He thought about whether the guide the stone summoned at the veil's edge would be the same guide the book had named, the lady who knew him. He thought he would find out. He picked the stone up. The stone was cold in his hand. It did not in his hand do anything else. He had half expected it to do something. It did not. It was a stone. He understood with a small late embarrassment that the stone did its work only when it was turned at the veil's edge with the bearer's intent. It was, in his hand at this moment, a thing of potential, not of motion. He put the stone in his pocket. He closed the box. He replaced the trap. He left the hovel. He closed the door. He did not look back at the snake nailed to the fence. The Peverell ring's awareness behind his eyes had gone quiet, the way a small companion goes quiet after the small companion has performed the small task that the companion was, in this hour, required to perform. He apparated to the lane outside Hogsmeade. He walked, in the pale May light, up the path to the castle. Tonks met him at the gate. "You all right?" "I am all right." "Got it, got it." "Hermione is in the library. Headmaster is in his office. He wants to see you." "All right." Dumbledore was in the office when Harry climbed the spiral stair and the gargoyle let him through without the password. Dumbledore was at the window again, in the same posture he had used in the consultation chamber, and Harry, who was beginning to understand the posture as the posture Dumbledore used when he was about to make a confession, sat without being asked and waited. "You have it," Dumbledore said. "I have it." "Show me." He showed him. Dumbledore looked at the stone in his palm. He did not touch it. He looked at it as one looks at a thing one had hoped never to see in one's own century, and Harry, who had been raised on a small, inadequate diet of adult emotions, recognized the look as the look of regret without recognizing it as anything more sentimental than regret. "The wand," Harry said. "Yes, I will need it." "You will. Will you give it to me?" Dumbledore turned from the window. He went to the desk. He pulled a long, thin object from a drawer. He laid the object on the desk. The object was a wand. The wood was elder. The carvings along the length of the wand were small, clustered knots. The wand was, Harry knew without being told, the wand of Antioch. "It is not a gift," Dumbledore said. "I cannot give it to you. The wand's binding requires the previous owner to be defeated in a duel by the next owner. The duel must be intended and the defeat must be unambiguous. I have considered in the past several days whether to arrange a ritualized duel between us that would meet the binding's conditions. I have decided against it. The arrangement would be a lie at the heart of the binding, and the binding would, by my old reading, detect the lie and refuse the transfer. I have instead devised a route that does not require the transfer. What route? The wand's binding has a clause for use by proxy. The clause is an old clause, used twice in 300 years, both in moments of dynastic emergency. The clause permits the owner of the wand to authorize a proxy to wield the wand for a single ritual purpose, for a duration not exceeding the ritual's window. The wand remains, after the use, the owner's. The proxy may not, by the clause, use the wand for any purpose other than the authorized one. I am authorizing you, in writing, to wield the wand for the single purpose of opening and closing the veil passage to Avalon, for the duration of the 1-hour window the book has described, with effect from the moment you set foot in the Department of Mysteries tomorrow. The authorization will be filed at the bank by the close of business today. The authorization will be witnessed by Madame Bones, who has, by my request, agreed to be the witness. You arranged this in 2 days. I have been arranging this in pieces for 48 years. The pieces this week have moved. All right, take the wand, hold it. He took the wand, he held it. The wand was in his hand warmer than the stone had been. It was not in his hand friendly. It was assessing. He let it assess. He returned the assessment. The wand, after a count of 3, accepted the proxy. He did not know how he knew the wand had accepted. He knew. The cloak you have, Dumbledore said. I have it, then the 3 are with you. The veil will, tomorrow at dawn, be opened. The window will run for 1 hour. The Wizengamot ceremony of binding will be performed at noon. You will be on the floor of the chamber at noon. You will not be at the tomb at noon. The schedule is tight. The schedule cannot be loosened. The schedule is the schedule the clause permits. I understand, Mr. Potter. Yes, sir. There is one thing I did not say in the consultation chamber. He waited. I do not know whether Morgan's residual magic in the 3rd place will accept you. I have done my arithmetic. I have done it as carefully as I am able. The arithmetic suggests acceptance. The arithmetic is not, however, certainty. The arithmetic is a forecast. You may, when you reach the tomb, be refused. You may, when you reach the tomb, be killed. You may, when you reach the tomb, find that the crown does not move. I have prepared for the favorable forecast. I have not prepared for the alternatives. I am telling you because I am, in this very small way, attempting not to lie to you about a thing on which I have in earlier years lied to you by omission. Thank you. You may, with this information, decide not to attempt the recovery. I have not changed my decision. I did not expect that you would. Thank you, sir, for the wand, for the schedule, for the Wizengamot, for not lying to me this morning. Lord Potter Le Fay. Yes, go to bed. Yes, sir. He went, but he did not go to bed. He went to the library. Hermione was at the long table. She had set out on the wood the 3 hallows in the configuration the book had specified. The cloak folded once, the stone laid in the cloak's fold, the wand laid across both. He sat. She looked at him. All 3, she said, all 3, tomorrow, tomorrow. She did not write anything. She did not say anything. She put her hand, palm down, on the table beside his hand. She did not touch him. The hand was a hand at his table. The hand was the offer of presents without coercion that he had in the past week begun to understand as the highest courtesy a friend in his position could extend. He laid his hand, palm down, on hers. Hermione. Yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'll thank you now. I may not be able to thank you tomorrow. She did not, against her usual practice, correct him. He went to bed at 1:30. He did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark and let his mind run, one more time, the inventory of the next morning's operation. The veil at dawn, the wand against the lintel, the cloak over the head, the stone in the hand, the window of 1 hour, the crossing, the shore. The hill in mist, the apex, the crown on the silver stand, Voldemort by Dumbledore's forecast also at the apex. Morgan by Hermione's reading also at the apex, the arithmetic of the apex by his own preparation prepared. He had not in his life gone to sleep on the night before a thing of consequence. He had not in his life expected to. He let the inventory run. He let it finish. He let the count of the items reach its end. The count by his own preparation was 31 items. He had ranked them. He had assigned to each item a probability of difficulty and a response should the difficulty arise. He had done it without writing it down because the writing down was, by Hermione's small private rule of operational security, not to be performed for an operation of this kind. He had done it in his head. He had done it twice. He had not in either of the 2 runs found a hole. The absence of a hole did not, by his learning, mean there was no hole. It meant only that he had not in 2 runs found one. There might still be a hole. The hole, if there was one, would emerge at the apex. He would, at the apex, find it and address it. He had decided before going to bed that the address would consist of the small set of responses he had been carrying: wand against the wrong air, cloak over a face, stone turned 3 times in the offhand, and that the responses would suffice or they would not. He would not, by his discipline, attempt to construct further responses in the bed in the dark in the dormitory, because the further responses would be inferior to the responses he had already constructed in the library, and the responses he had already constructed in the library were the responses he had. He held the inventory. He let the inventory rest. He thought, instead, about the small sight on his forehead. He had not in the past week let himself think about the small sight. He let himself in the bed think about it for a count of a minute. He thought about what Hermione had said 2 days earlier in the small, careful corner of the library where she had looked at the parish records and decided by her face's small change of color that the small sight might be more than a small sight. She had not in the corner said the word Horcrux. The word was a small word that he had also been carrying. The word had come up in his 2nd year, in a small textbook he had not been supposed to read and had read, on the floor of the restricted section, when he was 12. The textbook had said that the word named a binding of the soul to an object by an act of murder. The textbook had said that the binding could be applied to an object that was not an inanimate object. The textbook had said that the binding could, by certain crafts, be applied to a person. The textbook had said that the person, when so bound, did not know that the binding had been applied. The textbook had said that the person would, in the carrier's life, exhibit small phenomena consistent with the carrier of a binding. Small phenomena, the small sight. He had not, in the past 2 years, allowed himself to put the two together. He put them together in the bed in the dark. He found that he had, in fact, been putting them together quietly for 2 years. The putting together had not been a thing he had been doing with his attention. It had been a thing his small private engine had been doing in the off hours when he had been sleeping. The engine had reached the conclusion before he had. He found in the bed that the conclusion had been on his table for some time. The conclusion was that he was, by the textbook's definition, a vessel. The conclusion was that the 7th fragment of Voldemort's soul, by the textbook's mechanics, was almost certainly in him. The conclusion was that Morgan's mention at the apex of a question of receiving would be a question of receiving the 7th in the form it took at the moment of the 7th's release from Voldemort's body, and that the question would be, by his honest reading, a question of whether to permit the 7th to bind to him in the new form, in addition to whatever fragment he had been carrying. The conclusion was that the right answer, by his arithmetic, was to refuse the binding. The further conclusion, the one his small private engine had reached at 3 o'clock in the morning 2 nights ago, in the small private room behind his attention without informing his attention, was that the refusal of the binding might, by the third place's old design, also include the disposal of the small sight he had been carrying, because the small sight was, by the textbook's logic, an instance of the same kind of binding, and the third place's water in its thorough way did not, by its old design, distinguish between bindings of the same kind. The small sight might, by the refusal, be removed. He had not, in this hour, allowed himself to hope for the removal. He did not allow himself to hope for it now. He filed the further conclusion as a probability he would test at the apex by the act of his refusal. He would, by his refusal, find out. He would, by his honesty, accept whichever outcome the third place's water arrived at. If the small sight was removed, the morning he returned would be a morning in which a thing that had been on him since he was an infant had been taken off. He had not, in his life, ever attempted to imagine such a morning. He imagined it now for a count of 3. The imagining did not produce in his chest the small private warmth he had thought it would. It produced instead a small private quiet, as though the chest had been listening to a low background note for so long that the prospect of the note's absence was, in the prospect's first second, more strange than welcome. He filed the quiet. He returned to the inventory. He ran the inventory a 3rd time. The inventory finished. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark and waited for the dawn. The dawn came at 5 to 5. He rose. He washed. He dressed in school clothes because the bank's craft would, by old practice, make any robe sufficient for any ritual, and the school robe was what he had. He took the cloak from the trunk. He took the stone from the box on the desk where Hermione had placed it the night before, in a small fold of cloth she had chosen because the cloth, by her judgment, was the right small fold for an object that had been hidden under a hovel's floor for 60 years. He did not take the wand. The wand would be handed to him at the Chamber of the Veil by Dumbledore's hand at the moment of the proxy's activation. The wand was at the moment in Dumbledore's drawer. He went down to the common room. Hermione was at the fire. Ron was at the chair beside her. They had not, by the evidence of their clothes, slept. They had, by the evidence of their hands, been preparing, Hermione with a small parchment, Ron with the small leather grip he had bought 2 weeks earlier on his last Hogsmeade weekend, into which he had been packing that night the 4 small items he had decided in his quiet way that he would carry with him to the gate. The 4 items were a flask of water from the Hogwarts kitchen, a small package of biscuits from his mother's last parcel, a folded handkerchief in case the morning brought a cold, and his wand. The grip closed under his hand without a sound. "All right," said Ron. "All right," said Harry. "We walk you to the gate," said Hermione. "We do not walk past the gate. Dumbledore is at the gate at 5:30. The carriage is at the gate at 5:35. You will be at the ministry by 5:45. The window opens at 6. "All right, Harry. Yes, we will be at the Chamber of the Veil at 6. We will not enter the bowl. We will be at the door. We will be there for the hour. We will be there when you come back. We will, if the hour ends and you do not come back, be there for the 2nd hour as well. We will, if the 2nd hour ends and you do not come back, ask Dumbledore to do whatever Dumbledore can do. We will, if the 3rd hour ends and you do not come back, Hermione. Yes, you do not need to recite the rest of the hours." "All right, I will come back, I know. I will come back at the moment the window closes. I will come back to the Chamber of the Veil. You will be at the door. I will be at the door. Ron will be at the door. I will be at the door, said Ron. All right, they walked. The lawn at 5:15 in May was wet with dew. The dew was the cool, steady dew of an English spring morning that had not yet in its course turned its attention to the day. The grass under his shoes was the grass it had been on the morning he had walked to the gate to meet Tonks 3 mornings ago. The grass was the same grass. The castle behind him was the castle. He did not, on the walk, look back. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Peverell Hallows opened the veil to Avalon. The Department of Mysteries lay below the Ministry's lowest floor, behind a black door whose handle had no use beyond the courtesy of its existence. The black door opened to the wand. The wand in Harry's right hand accepted the door as a proxy was permitted to accept it, which was without ceremony and without comment, and the door swung inward on a corridor lit by the cold violet light that the department's archive of unattended candles produced. He walked. He did not hurry. He did not slow. The corridor turned. The corridor offered him in the slow rotation of a circular antechamber, 12 doors, of which 11 would, had he attempted them, have been the wrong door. The wand in his hand leaned toward the 12th. He went through the 12th. The chamber of the veil was a wide, low stone amphitheater, its center sunk in a small bowl, the veil itself, a ragged gray curtain hanging on a stone arch in the bowl's center. The arch had been there for older than the Ministry. The Ministry had built itself around the arch and pretended the arch belonged to it. The arch had, by its own slow, patient indifference, permitted the pretense. Dumbledore was in the chamber. Madame Bones was beside him. Tonks was at the door behind Harry. Hermione was at the door behind Tonks. Ron was beside Hermione. They had agreed the night before that they would not enter the bowl. They had agreed that they would stand at the chamber's edge. They had agreed that they would not, by their presence, distract Harry's attention from the veil's center. He had not, in any other moment of his life, been so glad of friends who knew what not to do. Dumbledore inclined his head. He held in his hand a small parchment that he had, at 5:30 in the morning, signed and witnessed, and filed at the bank by an owl that had been waiting on his window-sill. The parchment was the proxy authorization. He laid it on the lip of the bowl. Lord Potter Le Fay, headmaster. The window opens when you set the wand against the arch. The window runs for 60 minutes. The wand will tell you by its own warmth when 50 minutes have passed. The cloak you will draw over yourself at the moment of approach. The stone you will turn in your hand 3 times after you have stepped through. The guide will come. The guide will take you across. You will find the tomb. You will lift the crown. You will return. You will return through the veil at the place at which you entered. You will not, by any temptation, attempt to return through any other place. There is no other place. I understand. Madame Bones is here as your witness. The department's unspeakables have, by my arrangement, vacated the chamber for the hour. The chamber is yours. The wand authorizes you. Step forward. He stepped forward. He stood at the lip of the bowl. He looked at the veil. The veil moved as veils moved, the small, slow motion of a curtain in a room with no perceptible wind, which suggested to anyone watching that the curtain was being moved by a wind that was not in this room. He had seen this veil only in description. He had not until now looked at it. He looked. The veil was not, on close examination, gray. It was gray at the eye's distance. At the eye's closer distance, it was gray going to a kind of pale, fading to water at the end of a summer day color that he had now seen 3 times on objects related to Morgan. He did not, when he saw it, mistake the color. He filed the observation. He did not say it aloud. He drew the cloak from his shoulder. He drew it over his head. The cloak fell, as it always fell, in the slow, soft way that suggested an old companionship between the cloth and the wearer. He held the cloak's hood at the level of his eyes. He kept his face out. He took the stone from his pocket. He held it in his left hand. He laid the wand against the lintel of the arch. The arch responded the way an instrument responds to a tuning. It tightened by a small motion along its long axis. The veil, which had been moving in its small idle way, lifted by a single degree at its lower edge. A small clear sound, not a chord this time, but a single bell note, sounded at the chamber's height. Dumbledore did not this time react. Bones behind him made a small intake of breath. Hermione, farther back, did not. She had in the past several days taught herself not to. The window is open, Dumbledore said. Harry stepped through. The crossing was not, by his expectation, dramatic. It was, by his actual experience, a stepping. He stepped through a curtain. The curtain offered on his body the small resistance of an unwashed soft cloth in the corner of a long unused room. He passed through. The chamber behind him went silent. The chamber ahead of him was not, in the ordinary sense, ahead. It was around. The world that opened to him on the other side of the veil was the third place. He turned the stone in his hand 3 times. The third place was a long, pale water. It was a low, pale shore. It was a high hill in mist. The mist did not, by his observation, move. The mist sat. It sat as a thing sits that has been sitting for so long that the sitting itself has become a property of the place, the way the height of a mountain is a property of the mountain. The hill rose into the mist. The shore at the hill's foot ran along the water for a distance Harry could not measure, because the distance in the third place did not, by his close observation, behave the way distance in his own world behaved. The shore was sometimes 100 yards long. The shore was sometimes a mile. He did not, looking, decide between the two. He looked at the water. The water did not move. A figure stood on the shore. The figure was a woman. She was not tall. She was not short. Her hair was the color of evening light on water at the end of a long summer day. Her robe was woven of a fabric Harry could not name, which had the property, when he looked at it, of being seen as a different fabric every time he looked. Her face was, by his honest description, the face of every woman in his bloodline at once, the small bone of his mother's jaw, the wide eyes of Cassandra Slytherin from a portrait in the manor, the brow Hermione had identified from the parish records as the brow of his great-grandmother Peverell. The face was Morgan's because the face was every face the line had carried. "Lord Potter le Fay," she said. Her voice was a quiet voice. It carried the way a quiet voice carries when no other sound is being permitted in the room. "My lady, you have come on the right hour. I have come on the only hour," she smiled. The smile was very small. The smile on the face that had been her face's many faces was a smile that he recognized from his mother's photograph, the smile a mother gave a young child who had said the small obvious thing. "You have come on the right hour for 2 reasons, she said. "Walk with me." She walked. He walked beside her. The shore did not, by his close observation, lengthen or shorten as they walked. The water on their left held the same low, pale color. The hill on their right rose into the mist. The mist did not part. The mist accepted them without parting. He understood, after a count of perhaps 30 steps, that the third place did not require a path. The third place required only that the walker know where the walker was going. He did not know where he was going. He let the woman know it for him. She knew. "The first reason," she said, "is that the line has waited a long time for a senior heir to find this hour. The line has been carried in unrecognized form for 1300 years. The carriage has been honorable. The carriage has not, by any of the carriers, been permitted to lapse. I would, were the carriers here, thank each of them by name. I will thank you instead on their behalf. Thank you, Lord Potter le Fay, for arriving on the hour. I had a claw's help. You had your own help. The claws was an instrument. The hand on the instrument was yours." He did not, at the small praise, allow his face to change. He had stopped over the last week, allowing his face to change at small praise. He had learned that small praise, when permitted to change the face, made the face dependent on small praise. The dependence was not, in his line of work, useful. He let the praise be a sentence in his ear and pass on. The second reason is harder. The second reason is that you are not the only one approaching the crown. He stopped walking. She stopped walking. She did not, by his observation, turn to him. She faced the water. She lifted a hand vaguely in a direction he could not parse, and the mist on the hill above them parted by the small degree she had moved her hand, and he saw briefly in the parted mist a figure on the slope. The figure was tall. The figure wore black. The figure did not, in the parted mist, have a face. "Voldemort," Harry said. "That is the name his time has given him. I would call him by other names if I had not, by long discipline, stopped giving the dead the names they have asked for. He is here already. He arrived through the residue of his mark. He arrived 4 minutes ago. He had been preparing the residue without knowing it since the moment his mark was bound. He was given the route to my place by a man in your time who has been preparing the route for him without his knowing. The man in your time intends the route as a trap. The route is in fact a trap. The route is also in fact the route. The trap will close on him. The route will permit him to approach the tomb. Both are true. Both will, in the next 48 minutes, be played out. Dumbledore knew Voldemort would be here when I arrived. He believed it. He had not certified it. He set the conditions for it. He hoped for it. He didn't tell me he was certain, because he was not certain. Harry did not, at this sentence, choose to be angry. He had in the past day stopped choosing to be angry at Dumbledore for the moves Dumbledore had not, by Dumbledore's own assessment of his certainties, been able to make explicit. He filed the sentence. He returned to operational detail. Will he reach the tomb before I do? He will reach the tomb at the same moment as you. The tomb does not, in the third place, exist on a single line. The tomb exists at the apex of the hill. The apex is reached by walkers from many directions. He is walking one direction. You are walking another. We will arrive at the apex together. Together, together. And the crown The crown will lie at the foot of the stone. The crown will respond to one of you. The crown will not respond to the other. The response is the binding. The binding is by my old design the test. What test? The test of the line. The test of the line is not a test of blood. The crown does not look at blood. The crown looks at the bearer. The crown asks the bearer one question. The bearer answers by act, not by speech. The crown decides. The decision is, at the moment of decision, irreversible. What is the question? She looked at him. She did not by her motion indicate that she was sorry. She did not by her motion indicate that she was not. She looked at him in the way that a woman of 1,300 years' patience looked at a person of 14 years' practice, which was a look that recognized the small absurd asymmetry between them and did not pretend to bridge it. You will know the question when the crown asks it. I am bound by my old protocol not to tell you. I am bound also by my courtesy to walk you to the apex. The question is a fair question. The question is a question the bearer should answer for himself. I have known many bearers of various kinds. The question is not unkind. All right. Lord Potter le Fay, yes, will you walk with me? Yes, they walked. The shore again did not lengthen or shorten. The hill, after some interval of walking that Harry no longer attempted to measure, began to rise more steeply at their right hand, and Morgan, without changing the cadence of her step, turned them onto the slope. The slope was not, by his perception, a slope. It was a long, even rise that delivered them to a higher elevation without his having to climb. He understood, by the time they had climbed for what had felt to be 5 minutes, that the third place did not require effort from its walkers. The third place required only that the walker remain consenting to the walk. He remained consenting. The mist thickened at the higher elevation by a small degree. The light dimmed by the same degree. The water below them was no longer visible. The light came in the third place from no source he could identify. It was the kind of light that was the light of a place that did not, by old design, have a source. He filed the observation. At some moment in the climb, the apex of the hill came into view above them. It was a low rise of stone. It was not, by his expectation, a great monument. It was a small heap of pale rock, perhaps 3 feet tall, perhaps 8 feet across, with a flat top. On the flat top lay a small silver stand. On the silver stand sat a circlet. The circlet was woven of silver and air. He had read the words in the book. He had not, until he saw it, understood what the words named. The circlet was a band of intricately worked silver in which, at intervals along the band, the silver gave way to a faint, clear lattice of light that he could see through, and that behind, the air visible through the lattice rippled in the way that the air above hot stones rippled in the height of summer. The 7 stones were set along the band. 6 of the stones were the same minerals Harry had seen on the floor of the bank's hall of 7 stones. The 7th stone was a small pale fragment of something that was not a mineral. It was, by his slow recognition, a piece of the water below, a fragment that had been lifted from the water of the third place by hand and bound, by Morgan's old craft, into the silver. The circlet was the crown of magical Britain. He had not, when he had agreed to lift it, known what he had agreed to lift. He had, by his arrival at this moment, learned. He did not in his face show what the learning had done. He was not alone at the apex. He had known he would not be. Voldemort stood on the opposite side of the heap of rock. His hood was thrown back. His face, Harry had seen the face once, briefly, in the Chamber of Secrets, in the form of a memory. He had seen the face once, more clearly, at the close of his first year. He had not, until this moment, seen the face in the form it had taken since the 3rd year's misery and the 4th year's preparations. The face was pale to the point of inhumanity. The eyes were red, the pupils were slits. The mouth was the mouth of a man who had not, in 20 years, smiled at anything that had not been the result of a death. Voldemort did not speak. He looked at Harry. He looked at the crown. He looked at Harry again. His eyes, in the 3rd place, did not have the depth Harry remembered from the 2nd year, because his eyes, by the close of his preparations, had ceased to require depth. Morgan did not move. Boy, Voldemort said. Tom, said Harry. He had not, until the moment of his answer, decided what he was going to call Voldemort across the crown. He had decided in the moment. He had used the name the man had been born under because the man, by the bank's records, was not entitled to the name he had been using. The name landed. Voldemort's mouth tightened in the small involuntary motion of a man who had not been called by his birth name by a person of standing in 2 decades. You are not entitled to that name. You are not entitled to the name you have been using. I am the heir of Slytherin. You are not. I have been telling them I am for 51 years. The telling does not make it so. The goblet found me at the bottom of 3 convergent lines. The bank confirmed the convergence. The Wisengamot recognized the convergence by formal vote yesterday morning. The retraction of the gaunt steward filed in 1646 identifies the chain you have descended from as a chain that runs through a forgery. The bank has the retraction. The Wizengamot has the retraction. You are, by the bank's term of art, a junior half-blood collateral claimant who runs through a forgery. The Slytherin line passed in 1297 through Cassandra to Gringotts Peverell, and from there through Crys to the Potter family. I am the senior heir, you are not. You have been listening to goblins. I have been reading their parchment. The goblins are mercenaries. The goblins are auditors. Your taste in parchment keepers is your own problem. Mine is now mine. Lift the crown. He had not meant to add the final clause. He had added it because he had wanted, between them, to take the action away from his own anxiety and put it on the table as a movement that one of them would, in the next 30 seconds, perform. He had wanted also to see what Voldemort did when the action was offered. Voldemort did not reach for the crown. He looked at Morgan. Which? I am no witch of yours. The boy lies. The boy does not lie. You favor him. I favor the line. The line this hour is in him. The line is not this hour in you. If the line were in you, I would favor you. The line is not in you. You are descended from a man whose grandfather paid his steward to forge a chain. The forgery was discovered in 1646. The forgery has been on the bank's table for 350 years. You were given the name by your mother. Your mother was given the name by her father. Her father knew the name was bought. He did not tell her. He took to the grave the truth he had been told as a boy by his own father, who had taken it to the grave from his. The line is not in you. I am sorry. The line is not in you. Voldemort, who had not in 20 years been spoken to in the cadence Morgan was using, lifted his wand. Morgan did not lift hers. She did not have one. She had not used a wand in her life, by the bank's records, because she had not, in the time she had practiced, used the instruments that her successors had standardized. She had used instead her own hand, and she used it now. She lifted her hand. She did not lift it to defend. She lifted it to greet, a small clean motion of the palm at her shoulder's height, as though she were welcoming a guest to a small table that had been set by careful prior arrangement with one chair too few. Lift the crown, Lord Potter le Fay. My lady, lift it. He reached for the crown. Voldemort's wand cracked once, the sound of an unforgivable. The third place did not, by his expectation, conduct the unforgivable. The spell left the wand. The spell did not reach Harry. The spell did not reach the crown. The spell did not reach Morgan. The spell traveled the 3 feet of the air between Voldemort's wand and the heap of stone and stopped in midair as a thrown stone stops in a deep pond. The third place took the spell. The spell did not return. Voldemort tried again. The third place took the second spell. He tried a third time. The third spell, like the first two, vanished into the air above the heap. Harry's hand closed on the crown. The crown's silver was warm. The crown's air lattice did not, against his fingers, feel like air. It felt like a held breath. The 7 stones did not flash. The crown lifted. It lifted on its own slow motion, as though it had been waiting, in the small patient way of a thing that had been set down in the 8th century and never picked up for the right hand. The crown rose to the height of Harry's chest, and then to the height of his shoulder, and then it stopped, waiting in the air an inch above his fingers. He held it. He did not, by Morgan's prohibition, place it on his own head. The placement was at the Wizengamot he held. A voice behind his eyes asked the question. The voice was Morgan's. It was also not Morgan's. It was a voice that was the voice of the crown itself, which had been a small patient instrument in the hand of the 8th century, and had become, in the 1300 years since, the inheritor of the small patient design of its maker. You may bind the seats forever. You may bind them for an hour. You may bind them and release. The choice is yours. State it now by act, not by word. He understood what he had been asked. He had, in the library the previous afternoon, told Hermione what he would do. He had told her he would bind for the moment of placement, that he would release after Voldemort's destruction, that he would not be the king of magical Britain. He had told her what he would do because he had been honest with her. He was honest with the crown now. He answered by act. He held the crown at the height of his shoulder, and he did not, by his hand's pressure, attempt to keep the binding. He let his hand rest on the air lattice with the gentleness a hand rests on a thing that the hand has agreed in advance to release at the proper moment. The crown understood. The crown's 7 stones brightened by a small, steady degree. The lattice firmed. The silver hummed. The crown accepted the answer. The crown did not, in the third place, become Harry's. The crown's becoming was deferred to the Wizengamot. The crown agreed to the deferral. The crown's old design had, by old practice, deferred to such answers many times. The crown deferred this time. Voldemort's wand fell to his side. His face, in the dimmed light of the apex, had gone very still. The stillness was not the stillness of fear. The stillness was the stillness of a man whose calculations had not, until this moment, included a third possibility. You will not bind it, he said. Not forever, said Harry. You will bind it, for the moment. For the moment is enough. It is. You will return to your time. Yes, and I will follow you. Yes, and the binding will hold for the duration of the ceremony, and then I will release. Voldemort looked at him, he looked at the crown, he looked at Morgan, he looked very briefly behind himself at the slope. The mist closed where his eyes turned, the small, steady way that the mist closed against unconsented inquiry, and his eyes returned to Harry. You are not the king of magical Britain. Number, you will be the boy who killed the Dark Lord and would not be king. Yes, clever, said Voldemort, the way a man says clever when the man means I have not lost yet. It is not clever, it is arithmetic. Morgan's hand, which had been at her shoulder, lowered to her side. She inclined her head the smallest degree, in the gesture Ragnarok had used at the bank's door, the gesture that meant I see you. She did not with the gesture indicate that she preferred Harry's answer to any other. She indicated only that she had seen it. Return through the veil, she said to Harry. Take the crown, place it at the chamber. The placement is the binding is the trigger. The mark will go inert. He will follow you to my place. I will receive him here. You will not see what happens. You will be in the chamber. The chamber will not, by my old design, be permitted to see. The chamber will only know that the mark has gone inert. The chamber will be told by you the rest. The telling is your discretion. I have in the third place no further role. I will see you perhaps in another century. Thank you, my lady. Walk back. He walked. The crown went with him in the soft, small way that the cloak had in his childhood gone with him under his arm, an old companion willing to be carried. The mist parted at his step. Morgan did not follow. He looked back once. Voldemort was still on the apex. Voldemort had not, by Morgan's design, been permitted to leave. Voldemort would leave at the moment of binding. Until then he would, by the third place's old patience, stand. He stood. Harry reached the veil. He set the wand against the lintel of the arch from the third place's side. He had not until that moment been told whether the wand worked from both sides of the veil. The wand worked. The arch tightened on its long axis. The veil lifted by a degree. The chamber on the other side was visible to him for a moment as a thin pale rectangle in the air at the apex's foot, a tear in the third place's fabric that did not, by its presence, alter the fabric. He stepped through. The chamber of the veil received him with the small, soft cloth resistance it had given him at the entry. He passed through. The cloak slid from his head. The stone was in his left hand. The wand was in his right. The crown was at his right shoulder in the air at the height he had carried it from the apex. He had not, in his return, placed the crown on his head. He held it in the air at his shoulder where the crown had agreed to be carried. Dumbledore was at the lip of the bowl. Bones was beside him. Tonks was at the chamber's door. Hermione was beside Tonks. Ron was beside Hermione. They had not moved from the positions they had taken at his entry. The chamber's air had the small, motionless quality of a room in which people had been told not to breathe deeply for an hour and had honored the instruction. He stepped up out of the bowl. The wand released the arch by a small reversal of his hand's motion. The veil settled back into its idle drift. The arch loosened along its long axis. The chamber's cold violet light, which had been very faint while the veil was open, brightened by a small, steady degree. You returned, Dumbledore said. I returned, with the crown, with the crown, with the crown. He had said it 3 times because Dumbledore, by Harry's slow, late recognition, was a man who, when he could not allow himself a single large reaction, was permitted by his own discipline to allow himself a small number of small reactions in succession. The triple repetition was Dumbledore's private bow. Harry did not, by an outward sign, acknowledge it. He understood. The window. 54 minutes, said Bones, who had been counting. The Wizengamot ceremony is at noon. 40 minutes from now, said Bones. All right. Hermione had taken 3 steps forward without being told to. She stopped at the bowl's lip. She did not, in front of the bowl, dare to ask him whether he was all right. She held out her hand. He took it briefly, the small, clean pressure of an acknowledgement that he did not, by his commitment to her, owe her an explanation in this minute. She let go. Ron, Harry, it went. He did not, in their cadence, say more. He did not need to. The cadence had become, in the past week, a small economical language. The language carried what was needed. Tonks held the chamber's door for him. He walked through. The corridor's 12 doors, when he reached them, were arranged differently than they had been when he had entered. The wand in his hand leaned toward the door that led to the lift. He followed the wand. The lift came. The lift took them to the atrium. In the atrium, the noon session of the Wizengamot was already gathering. The chamber's plum-robed bailiffs were at the lift's door. Marchbanks was at the lift. She did not, by her motion, indicate surprise at the crown's presence at his shoulder. She had been told by Dumbledore's owl that the crown would be there. She had not, until she saw it, believed. She believed. Lord Potter le Fay, Madam Bailiff, the chamber is convened. The senior witnesses are seated. The witnesses of the bank are at the rail. The binding formula is ready to be read. Will you come? I will come. He walked. Hermione walked behind him. Ron walked behind her. Tonks walked behind them all. Dumbledore had taken the alternative corridor, the corridor that led to the Chief Warlock's seat, and had been, by the time Harry reached the chamber's main doors, already at the head of the room with his hands folded on the arm of his carved chair. The chamber doors opened. The chamber was full. It had been full for the audit recognition. It was now full again, but the fullness was different. The chamber 2 days earlier had been full of a chamber of wizards and witches who had been required by the clause to attend. The chamber this morning was full of a chamber of wizards and witches who had heard, by every available channel, that the senior heir of 3 convergent lines had crossed the veil at dawn and had returned. They had attended on their own motion. They had attended in their best robes. He walked to the floor. The crown at his shoulder did not draw the chamber's eye in the way a thing of authority drew an eye. Drew the eye in the older way of a thing that the chamber had not in any of the lives present seen. The 7 stones in the cold violet of the atrium and now in the green of the chamber did not flash. They were quiet. The lattice of silver and air did not ripple. The crown was, by its own old design, content to be carried into the chamber on its bearer's quiet schedule. The chamber, watching it carried, kept its breath. Harry stopped at the speaker's place. He set his hand on the rail. Marchbanks read. She read the binding formula. It was a short formula. It was very old. It was in 3 languages, of which she read the Latin first and the Welsh second and the Old French third. She read with the dry, steady cadence of a bailiff who had practiced the formula across 2 nights in her own house against the wall of her own kitchen, with her 2 cats watching, because she had not, in her career as a bailiff, ever expected to read it aloud in the chamber. She read, the bearer presents the crown. The chamber receives the crown. The bearer offers, by the gesture of placement, the binding of the seats. The chamber accepts, by the gesture of stillness, the binding. The binding is at the bearer's election, for the moment of placement, or for the duration of the bearer's life. The bearer states the election by act, not by word. The chamber consents to whichever election the bearer makes. The chamber's consent is the chamber's by old practice. The chamber's election is the bearer's by old design. Place the crown. He placed the crown. He placed it not on his own head. He placed it at the height of his hand on the rail before him. He let his fingers leave the lattice. The crown sat on the rail. The 7 stones brightened. The lattice firmed. The silver hummed. For 1 long second the chamber was, by the crown's design, bound. The binding ran, in the green light of the chamber, along the brass plates of all the seats. The plates warmed by the same small, steady degree the Peverell plate had warmed at his hand 2 days earlier. The carved arms of the carved chairs at the chamber's head took the binding into their grain. Dumbledore's chair sang once, the single note of an old instrument that had not been played in 8 centuries, and stilled. Across Britain the mark of every Death Eater went cold. Bellatrix in her cell woke from a thin sleep and screamed. Her scream was not heard. Her cell was a quiet cell. The mark on her arm had been a fire to her since the day it had been laid. The fire went out. The fire's absence was, to her, a cold she had not, in her life, previously experienced. She screamed because she did not have any other available reaction. She would, in the hours to come, find other reactions. The cold was the first. Lucius, at his manor in Wiltshire, was lifting a cup of tea. He set the cup down. He lifted his sleeve. He looked at his forearm. The mark was not, by his look, gone. It was inert. The skin around it was the skin of an arm that had once carried a mark and now carried, instead, an old scar. He sat very still. He did not, in his face, allow the new arithmetic to show. He set his cup down. He went to his study. He closed the door. In his hidden manor in the West Country, Voldemort, in the form he had been holding by the residue of his binding to the 3rd place, felt the mark fail. He felt it in the way a king feels his army has surrendered on a field he cannot see. He did not, by his old discipline, scream. He drew himself together in the 3rd place at the apex. He gathered, by the residue, the small last available portion of his old power. He turned his face to the air the crown had hummed in. He moved. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The crown placed. The Wizengamot bound the binding held for the moment of the chamber's stillness, and Harry, by his hand's gentleness on the lattice, did not extend the moment. The crown sat on the rail. The 7 stones held their light. The lattice held its firm hum. The chamber sat in the small, profound silence that the bound chamber, by its old design, was permitted only at the moment of binding and not afterward. He kept his hand near the crown, but not on it. He waited for the chamber to count 1. He waited for the chamber to count 2. He waited for the chamber to count 3. At 3, he lifted his hand from the rail and stepped back by a single step. The crown's 7 stones dimmed by a small degree. The lattice softened. The silver's hum, which had been firm, slid into a quieter note that would, for the duration of the chamber's session, sit at the edge of audibility, as a small old engine sits at the edge of audibility in a long building. He had released the binding. He had not by his motion released the crown's office. The crown remained the crown of magical Britain on the rail in the chamber. He remained the crown's bearer by the Wisengamot's recognition. He had not by his motion given up the standing. He had given up only the binding of the seats, which the binding formula had named, in old practice, as the bearer's election. The chamber had consented to whichever election he made. He had elected to release. The chamber did not at first understand. Marchbanks understood. She had read the binding formula. She understood what the bearer's act at 3 meant. She did not by her face betray surprise. She read the second formula, the formula she had practiced against the wall of her kitchen in the second night, the formula she had not in her career expected to read. The bearer, she said, has elected the release of the seats. The chamber's consent is the chamber's by old practice. The chamber's seats resume their independent motion at the bearer's word. The crown remains the crown. The bearer remains the bearer. The chamber is not, by this election, bound. The chamber is, by this election, witness. She paused. She paused because the chamber had begun in a low collective intake of breath to understand. The chamber had been prepared by its own arithmetic for a kingship. The chamber had not been prepared for a refusal. The chamber, for a long count of perhaps 10 seconds, did not know what to do with its prepared arithmetic. Bones stood. Madam Bailiff, Madam Bones. The chamber accepts the bearer's election with thanks. The chamber notes for the record that the bearer has, by his act, declined to assume the casting vote on every question of magical law in Britain for the duration of his life. The chamber notes for the record that this is the first time in the chamber's history that a bearer of the crown has elected to release. The chamber asks the bearer, with the chamber's respect, whether he will consent to the recording of his act as precedent. I consent, Harry said. The chamber asks the bearer, with the chamber's respect, whether he will consent to the recording of his act as instruction to subsequent bearers. I do not consent to that, Harry said. I will not instruct future bearers in how to bear. The election is the bearer's by Morgan's design. I respect Morgan's design. Each bearer who comes after me will, by the same design, make the same election. They will have to make it for themselves. I will not, by my precedent, make it for them. The chamber at this sentence made a small sound that was not, by any classification Harry had previously encountered, a single sound. It was the sound of 89 wizards and witches discovering in the same moment that they had been spared a thing they had not, until the moment of the sparing, understood they had been about to receive. Bones nodded. She sat. Dumbledore stood. Chief Warlock, Madam Bailiff. The chamber asks the Chief Warlock, in light of the bearer's election, whether the Chief Warlock will, with the chamber's consent, second the bearer's election by his own statement. I will, Dumbledore said, with one addition. Harry watched him. The bearer's election, Dumbledore said, has spared the chamber a thing the chamber did not, until this morning, understand it had been about to receive. The chamber owes the bearer the thanks the chamber has, by Madam Bones's motion, already extended. The chamber owes the bearer also a recognition that the bearer's election is the bearer's, and not the chamber's, and not the Chief Warlock's, and not any individual seat's. The chamber will not, in any future motion, attempt to elicit a different election from the bearer by indirect means. The chamber will not, by any future arrangement, attempt to put the bearer in a position in which the bearer might re-elect. The chamber will, by my motion, formally bind itself to the bearer's election as the bearer made it, in the words the bearer used. The motion is mine. I ask the chamber for its consent. The chamber, which had become, in the past minute, a chamber that was learning to consent rapidly, consented rapidly. Marchbanks logged the motion. The motion went into the chamber's record at the place reserved for bindings that exceeded the chamber's individual seats. Lucius, in his seat in the second tier, did not, at the motion, raise an objection. He had in the past minute understood that the procedural ground had been removed under him for the second time in 3 days, and that there would not, for the present, be a third ground available to him. He sat. He folded his hands. He did not look at Yaxley. Harry's right hand on the rail became aware, by a small, slow degree, of a presence behind his eyes that was not the crown's. The presence was the Lefay ring on his right hand. The ring had been quiet since the Wisengamot recognition. It was now no longer quiet. It was, in the small, soft way that a small companion called for the bearer's attention, without raising the bearer's pulse, awake. He did not, by his face, allow the awareness to show. He understood what the ring was telling him. The ring was telling him that Voldemort had crossed into Avalon. The ring was telling him that the chamber's binding then releasing had completed, and that the mark, having gone inert, had carried Voldemort across the residue to the third place, and that Voldemort was, this minute, at the apex, where Morgan had told him Voldemort would be received. The ring was telling him that the receiving was beginning. The ring was telling him that the receiving was, by Morgan's old design, not instantaneous. The receiving would, by the ring's report, take some hours of the third place's time, which would, by the ring's parallel report, take some smaller number of minutes of Harry's time. The ring was telling him that Morgan had asked the ring to ask Harry whether he wished at any point to be present at the receiving. The ring presented the question. Harry waited the small count of 3 before answering. Yes, he answered, by the ring's quiet small protocol. I wish to be present. The ring acknowledged. He returned his attention to the chamber. Madam Bailiff, Harry said, Lord Potter le Fay. The bearer requests a recess of the chamber. The bearer requests a recess of 1 hour. The bearer requests the recess on the ground that a matter of personal magical privilege has arisen for the bearer in the past minute. The bearer requests that the crown be left on the rail, in the chamber in the bailiff's custody, for the duration of the recess. Marchbanks looked at the crown. She looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore did not, by his face, indicate any response. He had, by his face, decided not to make a face this morning unless a face was indispensable. He had, so far this morning, found no face indispensable. The chamber grants the recess. The crown shall remain on the rail. The chamber will not, by my custody, touch the crown for any reason other than its own safety. The chamber will reconvene at 1 o'clock. Harry inclined his head the smallest degree. He stepped down from the speaker's place. He walked toward the chamber's main door. The chamber, watching him walk, did not by any small noise attempt to stop him. In the chamber's antechamber, Hermione was at the window. Ron was at the bench. Dumbledore, who had taken the alternative corridor faster than Harry had thought possible, was already in the antechamber as well, in the corner by the door, with his hands behind his back in the slow, patient posture of a man whose presence at a private conversation was conditional on the speaker's consent. Harry looked at him. Headmaster, Lord Potter le Fay. Voldemort is in Avalon, I assumed. Morgan is receiving him. The receiving is not instantaneous. I have been asked by the ring whether I wish to be present at the receiving. I have said yes. I will return through the veil. I will go to the apex. I will be present at the receiving. The receiving will not, by Morgan's old design, require my hand. The receiving will require, by Morgan's old courtesy, my presence as the line's senior heir. You will return through the veil. Yes, with the wand. With the wand, the proxy authorization is in effect for the window of 1 hour. The first window has 54 minutes remaining. The second window has not been opened. I have 1 window only. You do. Tell the chamber I am going. I will tell the chamber after you have gone. Thank you, Mr. Potter. Yes, there is a thing I have not told you. Yes, you will not be alone at the apex. You have not been told by the ring what Morgan is doing. The ring is, by its old protocol, polite. The ring is also, by its old protocol, careful. Morgan is, by my reading of the books, performing the receiving with the assistance of the third place's water. The water is, by my reading, the agent of disintegration. The water does not, by my reading, distinguish between the agent and the receiver if the agent and the receiver are in close proximity at the moment of disintegration. You may be close. The water may not distinguish. I am telling you this because you have, this morning, twice declined to be lied to. I would prefer again not to lie. Will the water disintegrate me? It may. Will Morgan let it? I do not know. I do not know Morgan. I have read about Morgan. The books do not in their hand allow me to predict what Morgan will or will not let the water do. All right, Mr. Potter. Yes, you may decide this minute not to go. I have not changed my decision. I did not expect that you would. Thank you, Headmaster, for the second time. For what? For not lying to me again. It costs me less to tell you the truth now, Dumbledore said, than it cost me to lie to you in earlier years. The arithmetic is plainer. The lie was the more expensive of the two. I am sorry it took me your 4th year to do the arithmetic. Harry looked at him. He did not smile. He did not nod. He recognized the apology as the apology of a man who had, in the past week, performed the difficult internal motion of an apology that he had not, in his recent decades, been required to perform. Go, Dumbledore said. I am going. He went. Hermione at the window had not interrupted. Ron at the bench had not interrupted. They had both, by their long practice, learned when not to interrupt. They followed him to the door of the antechamber. They did not, at the door, attempt to follow him further. They had, the night before, in the library, agreed that they would not follow him to the veil this morning unless he asked them to. He had not asked them. He looked at them briefly, the small private signal that he had used on Hermione's wrist on the night of the goblet, twice, the small 2-tap. He used it now once. Once was the signal that he was leaving. He turned. He left. In the corridor of the Department of Mysteries, the 12th door opened to the wand without comment. The chamber of the veil received him without comment. The lip of the bowl received him without comment. He drew the cloak from his shoulder. He drew it over his head. He took the stone from his pocket. He held it in his left hand. He laid the wand against the lintel. The arch tightened on its long axis. The veil lifted by a single degree. The chamber's cold violet light dimmed by the same degree. The bell note sounded. He stepped through. The third place received him in the same way it had received him at dawn. The shore was the shore. The water was the water. The hill was the hill. The mist did not, by his observation, look any different at noon than it had looked at dawn, because the third place did not, by its own design, have a noon. Morgan was not on the shore. He turned the stone 3 times in his hand. The mist on the hill above him parted by the small degree Morgan had used in the morning. The parting led him, by a long even rise that did not require him to climb, to the apex. The apex was as it had been at dawn, with 2 changes. The first change was that the silver stand at the apex's center had been moved. It had been moved to the edge of the heap of pale rock at the side of the apex that faced the water. Morgan stood beside the stand. She did not by her face indicate that she had moved the stand. She had moved it. He did not ask why. The second change was that the apex's other side, the side that faced away from the water and toward the mist that ran down the slope's farther fold, was lit in the dim air by a small steady glow. The glow was not a flame. The glow was a circle of small bright droplets that hung in the air an inch above the heap of pale rock at the height a man's heart sat in his chest. The droplets, on his close inspection, were each the size of a hazelnut. The droplets, in their slow, steady glow, were the small held fragments of the water of Avalon. They had been lifted by Morgan's hand from the water. They had been arranged in a ring around the figure that stood at the apex's farther side. The figure was Voldemort. He stood at the apex. He stood in the small, confined circle of the lifted droplets. He did not by his face indicate that he had moved his feet to reach the apex, because his feet had not, in the third place's protocol, been required to move. He had been brought by his mark's residue to where the residue's old binding had laid him, and the residue's old binding had laid him on the apex's farther side, inside the ring Morgan had prepared. He looked, in the dim light, smaller than he had looked at dawn. His robes had not changed. His face had not changed. The smallness was not a smallness of his body. It was a smallness of the air he stood in. The ring of droplets around him had taken from him the small invisible space he had carried in his life as the space a man of his command had been permitted to occupy. The third place by the droplets' design had withdrawn the space. He stood in the small space that remained. He did not, by his old discipline, allow the smallness to show on his face. He was, by his old discipline, not always successful. Harry stopped at the edge of the heap of rock. Morgan inclined her head. "You have come. You asked me to. I have been receiving him." "Yes." "He has not been a difficult receiving. He has been a long receiving." "How long?" "In your time 12 minutes, in my time 2 days. The 2 times do not, by my old design, run at the same rate. 12 minutes. Yes, I have 42 minutes. You have ample." She turned by the smallest degree toward Voldemort. He has been in his life the carrier of 7 small bindings he laid on objects of his choosing, in order that his life might exceed the life of his body. Each of the 7 bindings was laid by an act of murder. The bindings are, by his arrangement, dispersed. The bindings are, by my old design, available to the third place's water from the moment of the bearer's election in the chamber. The bindings have, in the last 12 minutes of your time, been gathered. The gathering has been performed by the water, drop by drop, across his life. The water has been thorough. The water has gathered 6 of the 7. Harry, against his policy of stillness, leaned forward by a degree. 6, he said. The 7th is here, in the third place. In the third place. The 7th is in the body that he has been carrying, the body he gathered for himself by his crude old craft when his first body was destroyed, the body he is currently standing in. The 7th binding is the binding he laid by the murder of one Bertha Jorkins, performed in your last summer in order to carry himself to the British Isles. He laid the binding into the body he prepared for his return. The body is the 7th vessel. The water will, in the next several of your minutes, gather the 7th. The gathering of the 7th is, in your time, a brief gathering. In my time it will require a 3rd day. I will receive him for the 3rd day. You may, by my courtesy, witness. 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 Voldemort, in the ring of droplets, lifted his face. He looked at Harry. His eyes were still red. They were not, by Harry's close observation, the eyes of a man frightened. They were the eyes of a man whose calculations had not yet, in 12 of Harry's minutes and 2 of Morgan's days, arrived at their close. The calculations would, by Morgan's count, finish in another 40 of Harry's minutes. Voldemort would not, in his own time, agree that they had finished. "Boy," Voldemort said, "Tom, you will not be the king of magical Britain. I have already not been the king. The chamber voted. The chamber consented to my release. The crown sits on the rail. The crown is on the rail because I have not chosen to wear it. You could wear it now. I could. You will not. I will not. Why? The question was by Voldemort's voice, a question Voldemort had not asked because he wanted the answer. He had asked because he wanted to know whether Harry had an answer that Voldemort could in his last 40 minutes use. Harry recognized the asking. He did not respect it. He answered it anyway because he had decided in the small private interval of his walk up the slope that he would not let the man whose name he had been calling all morning leave the apex without hearing the answer. Because I am 14, Tom. Because the binding is for the duration of the bearer's life, and I have not lived enough of my life to make the duration's choice for the rest of it. Because the binding does not coerce the seats but does coerce the bearer, and a bearer of 14 is not a thing the Wizengamot deserves. Because Morgan, by her old design, made the binding at the bearer's election, and elections that look like coronations are elections in name only. Because the chamber would, if I wore the crown today, treat me like a king tomorrow, and I do not, by my taste, wish to be treated like a king tomorrow. Because I have done some arithmetic on what kingships do to the wizards who hold them, and the arithmetic is not, by any reading, kind. Because I will not give you, in my refusal, the satisfaction of saying to my grave that you fell to a king. You will fall to a lord of 3 seats who would not be king. That is the position I have chosen, and I have chosen it because it is the position the country needs. Voldemort looked at him. He looked at him for the length of perhaps 4 seconds of Harry's time. You speak as if you have rehearsed, he said. I have, on the walk up to this apex. 3 times today in 3 different chambers I have rehearsed sentences. I have not in any of the 3 lied. The rehearsals were the same rehearsal. The rehearsals were what the rehearsals were. The boy who would not be king. That, yes, it will not save you. From what? From me. You are inside a ring of droplets that have already gathered 6 of 7 bindings of your soul. You are, by Morgan's count, 2 days into the gathering of your 7th. The 7th will be gathered in 40 minutes of my time. You will not in 40 minutes save yourself from me. The arithmetic, Tom, is in the other direction. Morgan, beside the silver stand, did not move. She had not moved since Harry had stopped at the heap of rock. She held by her stillness the steady attention of the apex. The 7th, Voldemort said. Yes, you know about the 7. I know about the 7. Who told you? Morgan, just now. Morgan, he looked at her. I would have told you sooner, Morgan said. I was waiting until he asked. He asked, I told him. There is in the receiving no privacy. The 3rd place does not, by its old design, permit secrets. You knew this when you arrived. You arrived anyway. The arrival was, by your old craft, your only available motion. I do not, by my position, blame you. I am, by my position, your receiving. You are a piece of an 8th century witch. I am a piece of an 8th century witch. You are not a person. I am not a person. I am the residue of one. I am, by my old design, the part of Morgan that remained in the 3rd place after Morgan's body went under the water. I have been here a long time. I have done this work 2 times in my long time. I am doing it a 3rd. The 3rd will, by my judgment, be the last. I have in the last 12 minutes of his time taken some satisfaction in the gathering. I have not in the past 2 of my days allowed the satisfaction to alter the gathering's pace. The gathering moves at the pace the water moves. The water does not, by my old design, ask my opinion. Voldemort did not answer. He had, in the last exchange, used the small last available portion of his old conversational discipline. He had not, in his life, been required to defend his bindings to an 8th century witch in the 3rd place. He had no rehearsed line. He had no procedural ground. He had only the small ring of droplets around him, and the droplets, by Morgan's old design, did not negotiate. Harry watched him in the ring. He did not, by his face, allow himself the satisfaction he could have allowed himself. He had decided in the small private interval of his walk up the slope that he would not, at the apex, permit himself satisfactions. The satisfaction was a thing he would have time to consider with appropriate caution after the receiving was complete. He would consider it then. He filed it. How long has it been in my time? He said. 16 minutes since you stepped through the veil, Morgan said. 44 remain. How long until the 7th gathers? 40 minutes. I will not have time to return through the veil before the chamber reconvenes. You will. The veil, by its old design, returns the bearer to the chamber at the bearer's intent. The bearer's intent at the moment of return determines the moment of arrival. The wand's authorization is in effect for the window. The window has not been closed. The 7th will gather in the 3rd place's time. You will witness the gathering. You will, at the gathering's completion, step through the veil. You will arrive in your chamber at the moment of the chamber's reconvening, by the small old courtesy of the 3rd place. The arrival will be at 1 o'clock. The Wizengamot will note your re-entry as on time. Morgan, yes, thank you. Do not thank me yet. For what reason? She looked at him. She did not by her face indicate that she was sorry. She did not by her face indicate that she was not. She looked at him in the way she had looked at him at the foot of the slope, the way a woman of 1,300 years' patience looked at a person of 14 years' practice. For the matter of the question. "The Crown asked me one question at dawn," Harry said. "By act, not by word," I answered. "You said the answer was the binding. You said it was irreversible. I have already answered. Yes. There is another question. There is." He did not by his face indicate that he had not expected this. He had not expected it. The book had described one question. The book had not in its 1408 hand described a second. He filed the discrepancy with the other unresolved discrepancies of the day, and he addressed the present. "What is the question?" "The question is not asked by the Crown. The question is asked by the third place. The question is asked of the bearer when the bearer is present at the receiving of a binding the bearer has, by his old hand, helped to invalidate. The question is asked of you because you are present at the receiving of Voldemort, whose mark you have invalidated by the placement of the crown an hour ago. The third place asks the bearer in this hour, do you wish to receive the last fragment yourself?" He looked at her. To receive. Explain to me what to receive means in this sentence." The seventh binding, when the seventh vessel is gathered, becomes a small free fragment of the soul Voldemort laid into his vessels. The fragment by the third place's old design is not, by its position, free to disperse. The fragment is bound by its origin to whichever line stands present at its release. You stand present. The fragment will, at the moment of the seventh's gathering, attempt to bind to you. Attempt. Yes, the fragment will attempt. You may permit the attempt. You may refuse the attempt. The third place asks the bearer to state by act the bearer's choice. He thought for a small, clean interval of his own time, perhaps 15 seconds, in which he did not look at Morgan and did not look at Voldemort. He looked at the air above the heap of pale rock. He did the arithmetic. The seventh fragment would attempt to bind to him. He had been by the second year's diary and the third year's headaches and the fourth year's dreams, a small, unwilling receiver of Voldemort's residue since he had been an infant. The scar on his forehead was, by Hermione's quiet, long suspicion and his own slow, private acknowledgement, the small sight of a binding he had been carrying. He did not know whether the small sight was, by the bank's vocabulary, a binding of the soul. He suspected. He had not in his life been told. He had not in his life been able to ask. He could, in the next minutes, find out. If he permitted the seventh to bind, he would carry, by the binding, the last fragment of Voldemort's soul. He would, by his old reading of Hermione's old French romances, have access through the binding to a portion of Voldemort's old power. He would, by his slow private suspicion, have his scar's small sight stabilized, perhaps healed, perhaps changed in a direction he did not yet know how to describe. He would, by his old reading of his own life, be a different person. If he refused, the seventh would, by the third place's old design, be permitted to disperse. The dispersal was the disintegration. Voldemort's body holding the seventh would dissolve. The Dark Lord would end. Harry would carry, after the dispersal, only the small sight he had been carrying, no more, no less, and would be the boy who had refused the binding. He chose. He did not, by his face, allow the choice to show. He had not in his life allowed his face to show choices. He chose. He spoke the choice aloud because the third place required an act, and an act in the third place could be a sentence, and the sentence was the cheapest act available. "I refuse the attempt." Morgan inclined her head. The third place, in the small, steady way it had of acknowledging an answer, brightened by a single degree along the line of the apex's edge. The droplets in the ring around Voldemort thickened. The mist above the apex thinned by a degree, as though the third place had been holding the mist as a polite courtesy and had decided at his answer to relax the courtesy by a small amount. "You have refused," Morgan said. "I have refused, Lord Potter le Fay. Yes, you may, with my consent, address the dying man before the seventh gathers." "I will." He looked at Voldemort. He did not by his face show anything. He spoke. He spoke the way he had spoken to Crouch on the night of the goblet, quietly, requiring the room to lane. "Tom, boy, I want you to know one thing before the water finishes. I will not listen. You will, you cannot, in the ring of droplets, walk away. You will listen. You bound the seven because you were afraid of dying. The binding was a craft of fear. You have, by your life's choices, been afraid of dying. You have not been afraid of being killed. There is a difference. You have been afraid of stopping. The fear of stopping made you the man you became. The man you became is a man who killed a great many people in order not to stop. You did not, by killing, succeed in not stopping. You only delayed. The delay has, this hour, ended. I am not killing you to spite you. I am not killing you to prove anything to any chamber. I am killing you because you have, by your craft, been killing other people for 50 years and have not been the kind of person who, having been asked to stop, stops. I do not, by my face, want you to take this personally. I do, in the slow, patient honesty I have been practicing all week, want you to know it was not by my arithmetic vengeance. It was by my arithmetic removal. I am sorry. I am not very sorry. I am the right amount of sorry for the position I have been put in, which is the position of having to remove you. That is what I wanted you to know. That is all. Voldemort did not answer. He had in his life been answered to in many cadences. He had not in his life been answered to in this cadence. The cadence was new to him. He did not in his last seconds find a use for it. The droplets thickened. The seventh, by Morgan's old count, gathered. The ring tightened. The figure inside the ring, which had been Voldemort, began to thin. It thinned the way a thing thins that has been overextended for a long time and is finally permitted to release. Voldemort's mouth moved once. It did not produce a sound that Harry, at the edge of the heap, could parse. Harry did not, by his face, attempt to parse it. He did not believe the sound was a sentence Voldemort had intended for him. He believed the sound was a sentence Voldemort had intended for himself. He let Voldemort have the privacy of the sentence. The ring tightened a second time. The figure inside the ring went, by a slow, steady dissolution that Harry would later be unable to describe without using the language of slow, steady dissolution, into the droplets. The droplets brightened. The droplets, having brightened to the small, steady degree the third place's water brightened at the close of a long task, settled back to the heap of pale rock. They lay there. They became, by their settling, a small, clean, wet patch on the pale stone, which the mist, in the next several seconds of Harry's time, dried. Voldemort was gone. He was gone in the way a man is gone who has been disassembled by an old patient process designed, in the 8th century, for the disassembly of exactly the kind of man who, in the 20th, had attempted to do what Voldemort had done. The process had worked. The process did not, by its old design, leave a body. It did not, by its old design, leave a residue. The mark across Britain had already gone inert at the moment of the Wisengamot binding. The mark, at the moment of the 7th's dispersal, faded entirely from the forearms of every wizard and witch who had carried it. Skin closed over the absence in the small, clean way that skin closed over the absence of an old scar, leaving only the small white-line memory of the place where the mark had been. The white-line memory, by the third place's old patients, would, in the wearer's time, remain for the duration of their lives. Morgan, beside the silver stand, lowered her hand by a degree. "It is concluded," she said. "Yes, Lord Potter le Fay. Yes, return through the veil. The chamber reconvenes in 28 of your minutes. You will arrive in the chamber at the moment of reconvening. The crown will be on the rail. The chamber will, by my old courtesy, not have moved it. The chamber will, by my old courtesy, not have been told what you have done. The telling is yours. Thank you, Lord Potter le Fay. Yes, you did the arithmetic well. I did the arithmetic the way I have been learning to do it. You will in your life do harder arithmetic. The hard arithmetic does not, by its old design, end at 14. I know. Go." He went. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Voldemort disintegrates in Le Fay's magic. He stepped through the veil at 1 o'clock by the chamber's clock, and by no other clock he had been keeping. The arch closed behind him at the small reversal of the wand's pressure. The veil settled into its idle drift. The bowl of the chamber of the veil was empty. Dumbledore had taken Bones and Tonks and Hermione and Ron to the atrium 15 minutes earlier, by Dumbledore's reading of the third place's small old-timing courtesy, so that the chamber of the veil would be uninhabited at Harry's return. Harry had not asked Dumbledore to do this. Dumbledore had done it on his own arithmetic. Harry, when he stepped out of the bowl and found the chamber empty, did not, by his face, indicate gratitude. He noted the courtesy, he filed it, he walked. The corridor's 12 doors were arranged, on his exit, in the configuration in which they would readiest deliver him to the lift. The wand in his hand leaned toward the lift's door. He followed the wand. The lift came. He set the wand against the lift's wall, as the wand had asked him to do, and the lift carried him to the atrium without stopping at any floor in between. The atrium's clock read 1 minute past 1 when he stepped out. Marchbanks was at the chamber's door. She had been at the chamber's door at the close of the recess, by old practice, to gather the senior witnesses for re-entry. She did not, by her face, indicate surprise at his timing. The third place's old courtesy had delivered him on her schedule. She inclined her head. "Lord Potter le Fay, Madam Bailiff, the chamber reconvenes. Lead on." The chamber doors opened. The chamber, this time, was very still. The chamber had used the recess to consult itself. The chamber had concluded during the recess that the bearer's election had been the bearer's election, that the crown on the rail was the crown on the rail, that the chamber's old bindings had been rearranged in the space of an hour, and that the chamber did not, at 1 o'clock, possess the vocabulary for what had taken place in the chamber at noon. The chamber had decided, in the absence of vocabulary, to be still. Harry took the speaker's place. The crown was on the rail. It had not, by Marchbanks's custody, been moved. The 7 stones were quiet. The lattice's small hum at the edge of audibility continued. He set his hand near the crown, but not on it. Madam Bailiff, Lord Potter le Fay, the bearer offers, with the chamber's leave, a statement on the matter of personal magical privilege that required the recess. The chamber grants the leave. He waited a count of 2. He spoke in the small, steady cadence he had used at the apex, requiring the room to line. The room lined. At the moment of the binding's release, he said, the bearer received, by an instrument the bearer carries, notice that a matter of receiving had begun in the 3rd place from which the crown was lifted. The matter concerned the residual presence of the false claimant on the Slytherin line, who had, by the residue of his mark, been delivered to the 3rd place at the moment of the chamber's binding. The bearer requested the recess in order to be present at the receiving. The bearer has been present. The receiving is concluded. The false claimant on the Slytherin line, Tom Marvolo Riddle, who has been calling himself, by his choice, Lord Voldemort, has, by the 3rd place's old process, been disassembled. He will not return. His mark, as the chamber's senior witnesses can confirm by inspection of their own forearms, has at the moment of the receiving's completion gone entirely from the skin of every wearer. The wearers at this hour do not carry the mark. They carry only the small white-line memory of the place where the mark has been. He paused. The chamber at the pause did not move. He continued. I am not, by my position, asking the chamber to celebrate this. I am informing the chamber. The chamber will, at its own pace, decide what to do with the information. I will offer in this minute 3 suggestions. They are suggestions, not motions. The chamber is welcome to disregard them. He took a breath. He had not, before the breath, intended to take it. He took it because the chamber required, in his next sentence, the small, steady measure of the breath, and he gave it. 1. The chamber will now have, in the next several days, an opportunity to receive the petitions of a great number of wizards and witches who, having carried the mark, were prevented by the mark's binding from offering testimony against the false claimant during his life. The petitions will be sincere or insincere by the individual case. The chamber should take its time to distinguish. Madam Bones, if I may say so without trespassing on her department's competence, would be the right witch to administer the distinguishing. I would, by my position, second the recommendation if the chamber wished a second. Bones, in her bench, inclined her head the smallest degree and did not speak. 2. The Wizengamot has, in its present moment, the freedom of action it has not had in its present moment for 15 years. The chamber is invited to use the freedom carefully. The freedom is, by the false claimant's removal, larger than it has been. The chamber's largeness in the past has not always been used by the chamber to its best result. I will not, by my position, lecture the chamber on its history. I will note that the freedom is real and that the freedom can be wasted. I would prefer it not be wasted. The chamber at this made a small sound that was a small collective in breadth of 89 wizards and witches who had not in their lives expected to be addressed at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday by a 14-year-old who had told them not to waste their freedom. 3. The crown sits on the rail. The crown is the chamber's, by the chamber's old design, in the bearer's keeping. The bearer will, at the close of this session, return the crown to a place of safekeeping that the bearer has, in the past hour, arranged with the bank. The crown will not, by the bearer's intent, be used again in the bearer's life. The bearer will hold the crown's office for the duration of his life. The chamber will, by the bearer's election, sit as it has always sat on its own motion. The chamber will, at the bearer's death or at the bearer's prior abdication, receive a new bearer by the line's old protocol. The next bearer will, at the next bearer's election, decide whether to bind. The chamber will not be asked in my life to be bound again. He stopped. He had said the 3 things. He had said them in the cadence he had practiced on the walk through the 3rd places missed on the return to the Vale. He had said them in the order he had practiced. He had said them to the chamber that, by his old arithmetic, needed to hear them. He had said them. He stood. The chamber sat very still. After a long count, Madam Bones stood. Madam Bailiff, Madam Bones. The chamber thanks the bearer. She did not say more. She sat. The chamber, which had been still, became, for the first time since the recess, a little less still. The seats turned, in the small motion of seats that had been holding themselves rigid by a degree. The witches and wizards in the seats, who had been holding themselves rigid by the same degree, exhaled in the small private exhale of people who had been told that their longest fear had ended, and that the ending was at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday in the chamber they had been sitting in twice a month for years. Some of them, by Harry's count, wept. He let them. He had not, by his face, allowed himself the small private satisfaction he had filed at the apex. He filed it again. He let it sit. He stepped down from the speaker's place. He inclined his head, the smallest degree, in the gesture that closed a champion's exercise of the Charter's clause. The clause, Marchbank said, is by the bearer's exercise concluded. The chamber recognizes the bearer's election. The chamber thanks the bearer. The chamber adjourns. The chamber adjourned. In the antechamber, Dumbledore was at the window. He was at the window in the posture he had used in the consultation chamber and the office in the chamber of the Veil, with his hands folded behind his back, looking down at the inner courtyard. The courtyard was full of small flowers that had in the past hour opened. Harry did not know whether the flowers had opened by their own slow seasonal motion or by the chamber's small old residual response to the receiving's completion. He did not ask. He filed the question, Lord Potter le Fay, headmaster. It is concluded. It is concluded. You used the word disassembled. I used the word the third place's old design uses. The receiving disassembles. The disassembly is by the water of the third place into 7 fragments by the sequence of the bindings the receiver laid in his life. The 7th fragment is the body. The body disassembles last. The body did. He is gone. And the mark, inert at the moment of binding. Gone at the moment of the 7th's dispersal. The wearers carry only the small white line memory. Dumbledore lifted his sleeve. He had not, until this moment, told Harry that he had ever carried a mark. He had not, by any old reading of his record, ever carried one. Harry, watching him lift the sleeve, did not understand what he was looking at. The sleeve was bare. Dumbledore lowered the sleeve. I did not in my life carry the mark, he said. I was in my 2nd year offered it. I declined. I am this morning glad of the decline. I am this morning also reminded that the decline has had its costs. There are wearers this morning who declined too late. There will be a difficult process of distinguishing among them. I will, in my private capacity, assist Madame Bones with the work. Good, Mr. Potter. Yes, Snape. Yes, he has been, by my old arrangement, a wearer. He has been, in the past 15 years, the Order's most useful witness against the false claimant. He will, in the next several hours, present himself to Madame Bones. He will produce, by his own intent, the memory of every meeting he has attended in the false claimant's presence in the past 3 years. He has been preparing the memory. He has been preparing it because I have been, by my old arrangement, telling him for 15 years that one day an hour might come in which the memory would be useful. The hour, as I had not, in my private hope, ever told him plainly, was the hour I had been hoping for at the chamber today. The hour came. Snape will present. Madame Bones will receive. The receiving will, by Snape's intent and Madame Bones's competence, be clean. Good. You are not asked, in your position, to be glad for Snape. I am not asked. I am not glad. I am also not unglad. I will, in time, decide what I am. The decision will not be today. That is wise. Thank you, Mr. Potter. Yes. Lucius Malfoy. Yes. He will, by my reading of his arithmetic, attempt to plead in the next 48 hours that his service under the mark was performed under the mark's compulsion. The plea will be partly true. The plea will not be entirely true. Madame Bones, who is the right witch to administer the distinguishing, will distinguish. Good. And then there is Bellatrix. Yes, she will not plead. I did not expect she would. She has, by the reports we have already had from the prison, screamed twice since noon and is now silent. She will, in the next days, become a different prisoner. The mark's absence will not, in her, produce reform. The mark's absence will produce in her the small, slow recognition that the mark's binding has been carrying her for 15 years, and that the binding's absence has left her without an organizing principle. She will, in the absence of the principle, become, in her own private way, lost. The loss will not change her sentence. The sentence will continue. She will continue. All right. Lord Potter le Fay. Yes, there is one further matter. He waited. The wand. Yes, the proxy authorization is, by the close of the window, at an end. The wand, by old practice, has returned itself to my custody by your hand's small release motion at the moment you stepped through the veil for the 2nd time. The wand is mine again. I will, in the months to come, consider whether to retain the wand or whether to dispose of it. I have not yet decided. I am telling you because, on the matter of the wand, I do not, in the future, intend to make any decision without your consent. My consent, yes. For what reason? Because the wand is, by its old binding, one of the Hallows. You are, by the bank's audit, the senior heir of the Peverell line. The wand is, by the bank's bookkeeping, part of the artifact set associated with your line. The wand is, by my long custody in my hand. The two facts do not, on the surface, agree. They have, by old practice, been allowed to disagree because no Peverell heir in the centuries of my predecessor's custody has been compelled to claim the wand. You have not, by your election in the chamber, claimed it. You are, by your position, entitled to claim it. I will not, by my custody, prevent you from claiming it. I will, by my custody, ask only that you, in your next several years of life, consider the claim before you make it. The wand is not, by my long experience, an instrument that I would willingly hand to a 14-year-old. I will not, having said it, hand it. I will, by my long experience, also recognize that the choice is not, in the end, mine. I will not claim the wand today. Thank you. I have not decided whether I will, in my life, claim it at all. I am content with that, headmaster. Yes, for not lying to me for the third time today. Mr. Potter, I do not believe I have lied to you today at all. No, said Harry, you haven't. I am thanking you for that. Dumbledore's mouth moved in the small motion that on him was the bare outline of a sad smile. Go, he said, find your friend. The press are at the atrium's doors. They have been there since noon. They will in the next hour be insufferable. They will in the hour after that be tolerable. By tomorrow morning they will be at the edge of tolerable. You will not in the next 48 hours sleep well. I am sorry for that. It's all right. It is also all right that you should ask at some point in the next 48 hours for help with the press. I am still, with your consent, your headmaster. I have managed press in the past. I am, at the present moment, available to manage them again. I'll take that. Very good. He left the antechamber. Hermione and Ron were in the corridor. Hermione had been in the corridor for the entire recess. She had been in the corridor for the entirety of the second session. She had not, by her face, allowed her face to show what she had been doing inside her head. He looked at her, she looked at him. He nodded the smallest degree. She nodded back. Ron beside her did not nod. Ron's right hand at his side had been a fist for some unknown duration of the past hour. Ron opened the fist now. He flexed the fingers once. He let his hand fall to his side. He did not speak. He did not need to. Walk with me, Harry said. They walked. The atrium was full of press. Press had organized themselves into a thick semicircle around the chamber's main door, 3 deep in their best coats. Skeeter was at the front. She was, by her habit, the front. She had her quill out before he was 3 steps into the atrium. The other quills behind her came out in the small, ragged wave of quills coming out at the cue of a senior reporter who had decided on the spot that the spot was the spot to come out. He stopped at the door. He looked at them. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way he had spoken to the chamber, requiring the press to line. I will give one statement, he said. I will not take questions. The statement will be 3 sentences. Print all 3, print them in the order I am about to use. Print them without commentary inside the quotation marks. The first sentence. Tom Marvolo Riddle, who is calling himself Lord Voldemort, has, by the operation of an ancient process that lies outside the scope of this morning's session, been disassembled. He will not return. The second sentence. The mark of his Death Eaters, having gone inert at the moment of the Wisengamot's binding, has by the same operation gone entirely from the skin of every wearer, leaving only a small white-line memory. The third sentence. The crown of magical Britain, having served its purpose, sits at this hour on the rail of the chamber and will, by the bearer's election, be placed in safekeeping at the bank. The bearer has elected the release of the seats. The bearer is this hour a lord of 3 seats and not a king. The bearer thanks the chamber for its courtesy. Good afternoon. He walked through the semicircle. Skeeter did not, by her old practice, attempt to follow him. She had, by her assessment of his cadence on the night of the goblet, decided that the cadence was not, in his case, to be tested. She had decided correctly. He passed her without looking at her. The semicircle of reporters parted. The atrium's outer doors opened. The afternoon on the steps of the ministry had become the small, pale London afternoon that May produced when London was being polite. He walked down the steps. Hermione walked at his left. Ron walked at his right. Tonks, at the foot of the steps, lifted the gloved hand of an Auror at the lead of a small honor cordon that the department had, by Dumbledore's private request, arranged. The cordon held the second tier of press at the bottom of the steps. He passed through the cordon. The cordon closed behind him. He walked. The afternoon over London held its pale light through the long curve of the embankment. Tonks had a coach waiting at the curb. The coach took them, in the small, steady way of a coach that had been chartered to be invisible, to the leaky cauldron, where Mrs. Weasley was at the door before the coach had quite stopped. She did not, by her face, allow herself any of the things she could have allowed herself. She put her arms around Ron without looking away from Harry, and she put her hand on Harry's elbow without releasing Ron, and she did not, by her words or by her face, attempt to put into the moment the small private things that she had been holding since noon. She nodded once. She turned them, all 3, into the inn. The inn was empty except for Tom, who had, by Mrs. Weasley's small steady instruction, closed the parlor to other custom for the afternoon. The parlor's fire had been lit. The parlor's table was set with bread and a plate of cold ham and a small jar of mustard and a pot of tea. Hermione's mother and father were at the table. They had been brought up from Heathrow in the morning by an order escort that Hermione had 3 days earlier declined to ask for and that Dumbledore had, against her decline, arranged. Hermione's mother stood up. Hermione did not, by her practice, run to her mother. She walked. The walking was, by her body's small motion, a thing slower than usual. She reached the table. She placed her hand on the back of the chair. She did not, by her face, allow herself the small private collapse that the chair was inviting her to perform. She did, however, lean a small degree on the chair's back. The chair held her. Mrs. Granger came around the table. She put her arms around Hermione. Hermione, after a count of 2, returned the embrace. Mrs. Granger did not say anything. Hermione did not say anything. Mr. Granger, who had been a careful man in his life, set his hand on his daughter's shoulder, the gesture of a father who had been told in the last day more than he had previously been told about his daughter's friendships, and who had decided at the table that he would be there. Harry sat, Ron sat, Mrs. Weasley sat, Tonks remained at the door, the tea was poured, the bread was passed, the mustard was offered, they ate without speaking for the first long minute. The eating was, in its small way, the reassembly of an ordinary thing. The reassembly was important. Harry recognized the importance. He kept his pace at the bread's pace. He did not, by his motion, attempt to make the eating a ceremony. The eating was, by Mrs. Weasley's old design, not a ceremony. The eating was just the eating. Mrs. Weasley, after the first minute, spoke. Harry, Mrs. Weasley, you did what we needed. Yes, I am not going to say I am proud. Proud is the wrong word. Proud is the word the press will use. I am not the press. I am Harry. I am very glad you have come back from where you went. I will, in the next several days, say it again in different words until I find the words I mean. I have not, in my life, found the words for what I mean at this moment. I will find them. I will tell you when I do. Thank you, Mrs. Weasley. Eat your bread. He ate his bread. Ron, beside him, who had not in the past 2 hours looked at his mother once because he had not been able to, looked at her now. He looked at her the way a son looks at a mother when the son has, in the past several days, done a thing he was not, by his previous life, prepared to have done. He did not speak. Mrs. Weasley, who recognized the look, did not require him to speak. She put her hand briefly on his hand, the small private signal that between them said later, not now, and then she removed it. Mr. Granger, who had not yet spoken, lifted his teacup. He drank. He set the cup down. Harry, Mr. Granger. My daughter has, since she was 11, written us long letters about the school. I have read the letters. The letters have, since the 3rd year, included a number of stories about you that I have, in my private life, found difficult to believe. I have, this afternoon, revised my private life. I will not, in the future, find them difficult to believe. I will, in the future, believe them as the first reports. I want you to know that. I also want you to know that my daughter, by the letters, has shown herself to be in your friendship, a which I am proud of. I am not, by my profession, a man who often uses the word proud. I am using it now. Thank you, Mr. Granger. Eat your ham. He ate his ham. Hermione, against her face, smiled by a degree. They ate, the 6 of them, for another quarter hour. The fire in the parlor's grate burned at the small, steady pace fires burned when no one in the parlor was prepared to attend to them. Tonks at the door did not eat. She did not need to. She was, by her department's assignment, at attention. She would at 5 be relieved by another auror. She would, at her relief, eat. She did not, at this hour, allow herself the small private restlessness she might, in other afternoons, have allowed herself. She kept her hand on the door's frame and watched the inn's hall. Mrs. Weasley, after the quarter hour, said the second of her sentences. I have a question. Yes, said Harry, the crown, the bank, the arrangements, the bearer's election, the lordships, the seats. Hermione has told me in the past week what little she could tell me. Hermione has not in the past week told me what she did not know. I do not this afternoon ask you what Hermione has not told me. I ask you instead one thing. Will it be on you after this afternoon? Will it sit on your shoulders? Will the chamber call you in your 5th year and your 6th and your 7th, to make decisions on its behalf that the chamber should have made on its own? Will the bank ask of you in the next 10 years what the bank has not this morning asked? Will it sit on you? He thought about the question. He had not in his preparations prepared for the question. He thought about it. He thought about it with the small private honesty that he had practiced in the corridor of the Department of Mysteries on the walk to the lift. It will sit on me, he said. It will not crush me. The chamber will call me in. The bank will ask things. The Le Fay seat will be a seat I will hold and will go to on the days the chamber sits. The crown will be in safe keeping. The bearer's office is mine, but the bearer's binding has been released. I will not be the king of magical Britain. I will be a lord of 3 seats. I will in my 5th year and 6th and 7th be a student. I will pass my exams. I will play Quidditch when the school will let me. I will read the books I have been meaning to read. I will, on the days the chamber sits, sit in the Le Fay seat. I will, on the days the chamber does not sit, be at school. The arrangement is the arrangement. The arrangement will, by my old arithmetic, hold. Mrs. Weasley listened. She listened in the long, patient way she had, when she had been listening to a son of hers describing the year he had had at the joke shop and had been deciding, by the listening, whether to permit the year to continue. She had by her face decided to permit. She nodded. All right, said Harry. He ate his ham. The afternoon on the parlor's clock became 3 o'clock. Tonks at the door was relieved by an auror called Shacklebolt, a tall man with a slow, steady voice that Harry liked at once. Shacklebolt did not enter the parlor. He stood at the door. Tonks slipped past him with a small nod and went down the hall to the kitchen, where, by Mrs. Weasley's small earlier arrangement, a plate had been set for her. At 3:30, Mrs. Weasley sent Ron and Hermione and Harry to the bench under the inn's small back window. The bench was old. The window looked out on the inn's small back garden, in which a magnolia in the late May light had begun to come into the last of its bloom. The three of them sat on the bench. They sat for a long while without speaking. Hermione, against her old habit, did not have a parchment in her hands. She had her hands on her knees. Ron, against his old habit, did not have his knee jiggling. He had both feet flat. Harry in the middle held the position he had been holding for 2 hours in the chamber and the antechamber in the parlor, which was the position of his hands at his thighs and his shoulders at their easy steady angle and his eyes at the window. The magnolia was the magnolia. He did not, for the first time since the night of the goblet, think about the next move. He sat. After a long while Hermione spoke. She did not turn her head. She did not in any small motion indicate that she was about to speak. She spoke. You released the binding. Yes, I am glad you did. I told you I would. You told me you would. I am still glad. All right, Harry. Yes. You said at the apex Morgan told you. You said, yes. You refused to receive. He turned his face by a small degree. He looked at her. She had not by her face allowed her face to ask the question she was about to ask. She asked it. Is the scar gone? He had not, since stepping through the veil at noon, looked at the scar. He had not allowed himself in the chamber or the antechamber or the parlor or the bench to lift his hand to his forehead. He lifted his hand now. The scar was there. It was there in the same place. It was the same length. It was the same shape. He could not, by feel, tell whether it had become a smaller scar or whether it was still the scar it had been. But it was the same. He lowered his hand. It is still there, he said. The sight I have been carrying, the small sight is the small sight. The sight has not, I do not, by my hands feel, find any difference. I refused the seventh's binding. The seventh dispersed. The small sight I have been carrying is the small sight I have been carrying. It is no larger. It is no smaller. It is the same. All right, Hermione. Yes, it is the same. It is the same. That is good. That is what we wanted. Yes. She let her hand rest, palm down, on the bench beside his hand. She did not touch him. The hand was a hand at the bench. He laid his hand, palm down, on hers. They sat. Ron, beside them, did not say anything. He did not need to. The bench held the three of them in the small, quiet way that an old bench held 3 children who had decided, between themselves, not to say anything in the next quarter hour, because the quarter hour was the quarter hour, and they would, in the quarter hour after this, find sentences. In the quarter hour after this, they did find sentences. They were small sentences. They were small in the way of small things that mattered. They did not, in their smallness, attempt to address the things the day had been about. They addressed, instead, the things the day had not been about. Hermione asked Ron whether the joke shop owls had been answered. Ron answered that they had. Ron asked Harry whether the wand had been in his hand, a difficult instrument. Harry answered that the wand had been an instrument that had assessed him on its own time and had agreed to the proxy on its own discretion, and that he had not, by his hand, been required to do anything other than carry it. Harry asked Hermione whether her parents had been told the third of the 3 things she had been carrying. Hermione answered that her parents had been told the first and the second, and that the third would be told after dinner, when the parlor's fire had been settled and the inn's hall had been emptied for the night. He nodded. They were small sentences. They were the sentences that the bench was for. Mrs. Weasley came to the bench at 4. She did not say anything. She put her hand on Harry's shoulder, the briefest small steady pressure of a woman who had been a mother of 7 and who had, by long practice, learned that a hand on a shoulder said more than a sentence said. He let the pressure stay for a count of 2. She lifted her hand. She went. At 5 Dumbledore came. He did not enter the parlor. He stood in the inn's hall. Tonks, who had been at the kitchen with her plate, came up to the parlor's door and tapped it once with the small knuckle she used when she was tapping in a small private signal. Harry got up. He stepped into the hall. Dumbledore inclined his head. Lord Potter le Fay, headmaster. Madame Bones has, in the past 3 hours, taken into custody 19 wearers of the mark. The wearers have, in all 19 cases, presented themselves voluntarily. The voluntary presentations are not, by Madame Bones's professional view, evidence of the wearer's innocence. They are evidence that the wearers had, by the marks binding, lost the capacity to assess their own arithmetic. The assessment will now be made by Madame Bones. The work will take, by her estimate, 4 months. Good. Snape presented at 1:30. He produced the memory. The memory has been received. Good. Lucius Malfoy has not yet presented. He is, by my Auror's report, at his Wiltshire Manor. He has spent the afternoon at his desk. He has not yet ventured out. He will, by my Auror's estimate, present in the morning with a barrister and will plead by formula. The plea will be heard by Madame Bones. Madame Bones will, by her practice, distinguish. Good. Bellatrix has, by the prison's report, become silent. The silence is not, by the warden's experience, the silence of penitence. It is the silence of a witch whose organizing principle has been removed. She will, in the next several days, attempt to find a new organizing principle. She will not, by the warden's professional view, succeed. She will continue her sentence. Good, Mr. Potter. Yes, you used the word good 4 times. I did. Should I have used a different word? Number, I am noting it. Good is the right word for the 4 sentences in which you used it. I am not, by my position, lecturing you on the word. I am only noting it. Thank you, headmaster. There is one further matter. He waited. The crown has, by the bank's collection, been moved this hour from the chamber's rail to the bank's 3rd vault. The vault has been sealed by Ragnarok. The seal is the seal of the Fay line in his custody. The seal will open only at the bearer's hand or at the order of the bearer's successor. The crown is safe. Good. There is also a small offer from Director Ragnarok. He produced a small parchment from a fold of his robe. He held it out. Harry took it. He unfolded it. The parchment was, in Ragnarok's small, precise hand, a note of 3 sentences. The first sentence offered to Harry the bank's hospitality at the manor in Wiltshire for the duration of the next academic year, with the bank's staff at the manor's service, in the event that Harry wished to attend Wisengamot sessions without the inconvenience of returning from Hogwarts at every session. The second sentence offered to Harry the bank's tutorial program in matters of inheritance management, free of charge, for the duration of his minority. The third sentence offered, in the bank's most polite cadence, that Harry consider the 3rd CRY silver as a personal gift from the bank to the bearer in recognition of the bearer's election in the chamber, with the understanding that the bank did not, by the gift, request anything of the bearer. He read the parchment twice. Thank Director Ragnarok for me, he said. I will accept the first offer for the chamber's sitting days. I will accept the second offer for the duration of my minority. I will decline the third offer with the bank's understanding, because the silver, by my reading, should remain with the bank in the bank's vault, where the bank's records have kept it since 1408. I will, however, request that the silver be made available to me, at the bank's reasonable convenience, on the days I attend the chamber, so that I may carry it as the bearer's small symbol of the Fay line. The bank does not lose the silver. The bearer does not lose the silver. The arrangement is, by my reading, the cleanest of the available arrangements. Ragnarok, Dumbledore said with the small flicker that on him was the bare outline of dry amusement, will in his office be pleased. Will he? He has been planning for the past 72 hours to ask you for exactly that arrangement, and has been resisting the planning because he has not, by his courtesy, wished to ask. You have, by your election of the third sentence, saved him from having to ask. The bank, when it does not have to ask, considers itself in a small, private way enriched. The bank this evening will be enriched. Good, Mr. Potter. Yes, go to bed. It is 5 o'clock. Go to bed at 10 o'clock then. The order will be in the parlor at 9:30. The order in this evening's parlor will be quiet. Mrs. Weasley will, by her old practice, sit at the head of the table. Hermione's mother and father will, by Mrs. Granger's old practice, sit at the foot. You will sit at neither end. The order will eat the second supper of its day. You will not in the eating be required to address it. The order this evening requires only that you eat. I will be at the parlor by 10 o'clock. I will at 10 o'clock take you and Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger to Hogwarts by side-along, with Mrs. Weasley and the Grangers in a second carriage to follow. The school will receive you at the gates at 10:30. McGonagall will be at the gates. McGonagall will, in her old practice, say to you what she said on the morning of the bank, which is that the parchment did not, in her view, change which boy she has been teaching. I will on the steps take my leave. You will in the morning be a student of the 4th year again. The chamber will in the morning be the chamber. The world will in the morning be the world. We will continue. Is that arrangement satisfactory to you? Yes, headmaster. Then go to bed at 10 o'clock. Yes, headmaster. He returned to the parlor. The afternoon on the parlor's clock became 6. The fire's pace did not change. The conversation in the parlor did not become loud. Hermione's parents, by Mrs. Weasley's small steady arrangement, were given a room at the top of the inn for the night. Mrs. Weasley took, by her old practice, the small private satisfaction of a woman who had arranged a difficult day. The order arrived at 9:30. The order was in the parlor quiet. The order ate. Lupin was present. Sirius, who had been at Lupin's small private flat for the past 3 days, was present. Sirius did not, by his face, attempt to put into the parlor the things that he had been holding since the chamber's session. He sat, he ate. He set his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder once, the same small, steady pressure Mrs. Weasley had used in the afternoon, and removed it. He did not speak. At 10, Dumbledore was at the door. The side along to Hogsmeade was, by Dumbledore's small old grip on Harry's elbow, brief. The walk through the village was quiet. The lane to the gates was empty. At the gates, McGonagall was at the wrought iron. She had been there for half an hour. She had not in the half hour moved. She inclined her head. "Mr. Potter, Professor, the parchment," she said, "did not, in my view, change which boy I have been teaching. I said it on the morning of the bank. I will say it again at the gate. It is the truth on both mornings. I will say it the third time on the morning of your graduation in 3.5 years' time. I will not, between this gate and that morning, say it again, because the saying does not, by its frequency, become more true. It is at 3 sayings sufficient. Yes, Professor, Mr. Weasley. Yes, Professor, Miss Granger. Yes, Professor. The 3 of you are at the gate at 3 minutes past 11 on a Wednesday in May. The school is closing in 7 minutes. You will be at the tower by then. Walk." They walked. Dumbledore did not, at the gate, take his leave with a speech. He took it by stepping back from the gate by a small, steady degree. He inclined his head, he turned, he walked toward the village. The lane received him in the small, steady way the lane had received many of his goings. He vanished by old practice at the bend. Harry, at the gate, looked up at the castle. The castle was the castle. The grounds were the grounds. The lake, in the cool of the early night, held the moon at its center, the way the moon had been held by the lake on every night Harry had been a student here, which was the way the moon had been held since the castle's founding, and which would be the way the moon would be held for as long as the castle stood. He walked through the gate. He walked up the long lawn. He did not, on the walk, allow himself the small private satisfaction he had filed twice that day. He filed it a third time. He would consider it, perhaps in a year, perhaps in 2. The arithmetic of satisfactions by his slow learning was an arithmetic that took its own time to work out, and the working out when it came did not by its nature require attention now. He walked through the great oak doors. He walked up the moving staircases. He walked through the portrait into the common room. The common room was empty. The fire was banked. The armchairs by the fire were the 3 armchairs he had sat in on the night of the goblet. He did not sit. He went up the stairs. He undressed. He did the small physical exercise of slowing his pulse that he had taught himself at Privet Drive. The pulse slowed. He set the 3 rings by the bank's craft into the small invisible state in which they did not draw the eye of his dormitory mates. The cloak, folded once, went into the trunk at the foot of his bed. The wand, Antioch's wand, which had returned to Dumbledore's custody at the moment of his return from the second crossing, was not in his hand. The stone had been left by his hand at the apex, on the silver stand beside Morgan's still figure, because the stone had finished its task and had not, by its old design, been a thing he was meant to carry home. He had not until this moment regretted leaving it. He found in this moment that he was glad to have left it. He lay down, he looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was the ceiling. He thought briefly about the small sight on his forehead. He thought briefly about the bank's 3rd vault. He thought briefly about Voldemort dissolving into the droplets at the apex, the small, steady way the dissolution had moved across the man at the end. He let each thought arrive. He let each thought pass. He did not this once think about the next move. He thought about sleep. He slept. Chapter 7 end.